Wait, I disagree. The voice came from the back of the hall, and 400 cultivators turned around at once. I didn't turn around at all. I already knew who it was. Hemp clothes, messy hair, road dust on his shoulders like he'd walked the last 2 provinces on foot, which, knowing him, he had. I had been alive inside this body for about 40 minutes. That was the sum total of my experience as Gu Mingjue. 40 minutes of somebody else's memories pouring into my skull while a dozen servants strapped me into red wedding robes. And out of all of it, the one thing my brain underlined in red ink was this. The man who just spoke was scheduled to kill me before the ceremony ended. Not maybe, not eventually. Today, in front of the guests. It was written down somewhere. Because I'd read this book, I want to be very clear about how bad that sounds and how much worse it actually was. In my old life, I was a guy with a phone and a commute and a bad habit of reading garbage web novels at 2 in the morning. One of those novels was about a young man named Chen Huai who starts with nothing, gets handed a cheat by the universe, and spends 900 chapters climbing over the corpses of arrogant rich boys. Standard stuff. Comfort food. And in chapter 3, to prove that our hero was dangerous, the author killed a young master at his own wedding. That young master was me. I was the guy whose entire narrative function was to be arrogant for 11 pages and then die messily so the audience felt good. I was a speed bump with a name. I had a wife I'd never met, a family I'd never seen, and an expiration date printed on my forehead. So my first move, obviously, was to wait for my system. Look, I'd read enough of these. Everybody gets one. You wake up in a novel, the little blue box goes ding, and a helpful voice explains that you have been selected, and here is your beginner's gift package. Congratulations. Please enjoy your infinite growth. Villains get them too. There are entire genres about it. Luck-stealing systems, villain point systems, systems that pay you for acting evil. I stood there in a room full of red silk with my eyes closed and my jaw set, breathing slowly, giving the universe every possible opportunity to bind me. Nothing. I opened one eye. Still nothing. I mentally said the word system a few times, then status, then panel, then in a moment I'm not proud of, please. The universe declined to comment. Cool. Very cool. Love that for me. So I made a decision in about 11 seconds, standing in a room full of red silk, and it is the only decision in this entire story that I have never once regretted. If the universe was not going to give me a cheat, I would go and take one off somebody who had been given one. Every story like this manufactures those people, constantly. A beggar in a ditch hears a voice. A stable boy wakes up on a corpse pile with a dead emperor's memories. A nobody finds a rusted tower. They all start small, and they all start weak, and the only reason any of them ever becomes unstoppable is that the arrogant young master in Chapter 3 lets them walk out of the room. I was the arrogant young master in Chapter 3. So I was going to get to every single one of them while they were still nobody, and I was going to take whatever the sky had handed them, and I was going to do it before they had a fight scene. That was the plan. That was the entire plan. On day 1, 40 minutes into the job. So here's what I actually had. No cheat, no golden finger, no mysterious old man living in a ring telling me I was special. What I had was a body at the vast righteousness realm, which sounds impressive until you learn that the guy walking through the door had spent the last year fusing thousands of divine abilities together like a man throwing everything in his fridge into one pot and inventing a new food. What I had was the Gu family, an immortal family, one of the 2 or 3 powers that actually mattered in Mystic Dustau province, sitting on territory the size of a small moon, with a burial ground out back full of ancestors so old that some of them had gone to sleep before the current dynasty of heaven finished being built. And what I had, the only thing that was truly mine, was that I knew how this story went. That was it. That was my cheat. I had read ahead. Chen Huai raised his chin and said the line I'd been dreading for 40 minutes. Meyer, I'm here to take you away today. Behind me, under a red veil, my bride did not move. Liu Ruolan, Saintess of Jade Splendor Holy Land, possessor of an absolute yin body, which in this world is the kind of physique people start wars over. She'd been dressed by 20 maids that morning and had spent the entire time thinking one thought, which I would learn later and which still bothers me. She'd been hoping he wouldn't come, because if he came, he died. The hall did what halls do. Someone laughed. Someone else said loudly that a beggar had wandered in off the road and could a servant see to it. I had 400 guests in that hall, and I had been listening to them for half an hour with somebody else's ears, and what I want you to understand is that not one of them was there for me. They were there because the Gu family had sent an invitation, and you attend. At the third table, 2 elders of a vassal sect had spent the whole ceremony working out whether a marriage alliance with Jade Splendor made their own position better or worse, and had concluded worse, and were now discussing whether it was too late to move a nephew. At the 5th table, somebody said quietly that it was a genuine shame. A perfectly good absolute yin body, a saintess of a holy land, and she was about to disappear into the Gu family's back rooms like the others. And at the very back, standing rather than sitting because his sect's rank did not get him a chair, there was a young man from the Dongyang sect with his hands shaking so hard he had put down his cup. His name was Li Tong. His sister had gone to the Gu family 4 years earlier as a gift from his sect, at 16, and had not come back, and nobody in this world would tell him whether she was alive. Not out of cruelty, out of paperwork. There is no office you go to. He had come to the wedding on the chance of seeing her in the crowd. I want to be honest about that, since we're going to be together for a while. The man whose body I was standing in was not a misunderstood soul. He had earned every syllable of that reputation, and I have his memories, so I am not guessing. I inherited his face, his enemies, and his bill. A Gu disciple stepped out before I could speak. Wang Lei, peak of the heaven origin realm, one of those enthusiastic types who volunteer for things. Young master, allow me to remove this trash for you. In the book, this is exactly what happens. The young master waves lazily and lets the cannon fodder go first, because he's arrogant and because the author needs 11 pages. The disciples go in one at a time like a video game, and while they do that, the hero stands there and finishes what he's been working on for a year. That's the part everyone misses. Chen Huai wasn't stalling because he was cocky. He was stalling because his fusion wasn't done yet. Somewhere inside him, in a ring on his finger, an old soul was telling him to be patient. 2 top-tier divine abilities were currently merging into one, and the progress bar needed another few minutes, and every second of arrogant villain monologue was a second the author was gifting him for free. Wang Lei threw a punch. Chen Huai caught it with 2 fingers, and then he put him into the floor hard enough to crack the jade tiles, and he smiled at me over the wreckage, and he started to talk. In this past year, I have fused thousands of divine abilities. Gu Mingjue, you have no idea what I have become. He was right. I had every idea. I had 1100 chapters of ideas. I waved the 5th sequence back before the man had finished stepping forward. Since he came for me, I said, I'll handle him myself. And then I did not monologue. I did not sneer. I did not ask him if he knew who he was talking to. I crossed 40 feet of wedding hall while he was still inhaling for his next sentence, and I put my palm through his chest. Heaven flipping seal. The Gu family's top divine ability, the one where a hand the size of a house comes down out of nowhere and rearranges geography. I used it twice, in 2 seconds, on a guy who was still in the middle of a speech. You have never seen a hall go that quiet. Chen Huai blocked it. Of course he did. A golden bell flared around him and he sank into the floor up to his knees and kept sinking, jade bricks cracking apart under his heels, and through the light I could see his face doing math. So close. So very close. That's what he was thinking. I know because I'd read it. The fusion needed maybe 30 more seconds, and I was not going to give him 3. The second seal drove him under the floor entirely. Somewhere behind me, a Gu elder said, in a small voice, Did the young master just attack first? Yes. Yes, the young master did. The bell shattered. Chen Huai came up out of the hole coughing, and his hair was in his face, and there was a thin line of red at the corner of his mouth, and he was still smiling, because heroes smile at this exact moment. It's in the manual. Gu Mingjue, he said, let go of Liu Ruolan. I want you to understand that at this point I had not touched Liu Ruolan. I hadn't so much as looked at her. She was standing 4 steps behind me in a red veil, being extremely quiet. So I walked back, and I took her hand, and I pulled her against my side, and I said the most punchable sentence available to me. Why would I let go of my own wife? I did it on purpose. That's the part I need you to hold on to, because it's going to matter for the next 4 hours. I wasn't being a monster for fun. I was being a monster on a schedule. Here's the thing about protagonists. They have trump cards. Cards they save. Cards they burn only when something precious is on the line, usually around chapter 400, when the stakes are properly dramatic and the reader has had time to become emotionally invested. If I let him leave today, he'd come back at chapter 400 with all of them. So I needed him to spend them now. Right now. While a supreme-level ancestor of my family was standing directly behind a wall, because that was my actual move. The one thing I did in those 40 minutes that mattered. In the book, Chen Huai escapes this wedding because the Gu family's guardian ancestor is asleep, and by the time anyone gets him awake, the hero is 9 provinces away being mysterious. I'd gone and woken him up before breakfast. Chen Huai's eyes went blank, his back straightened, and when he spoke again, the voice came out about 400 years older. A junior, daring to run wild in front of me. There it is, the old man in the ring. Songbao, a remnant of a supreme who'd been squatting in Chen Huai's jewelry since before Chen Huai could read, teaching him, saving him, and occasionally borrowing his body when things got serious. Things had gotten serious. Chen Huai's cultivation went up like a thermometer in a fire. Heaven origin. Tao Palace, vast righteousness, gathering cauldron, Mahayana. 5 realms in about 2 seconds, in a body that had no business surviving the first one. His robes came apart. The floor under him turned to powder in a circle 20 feet across. Somewhere behind me, a Gu elder started shouting for the guests to get out and got about 4 words into it, because the old man raised one hand and put a silver moon over the courtyard. I have never seen anything like it before or since. It was not an attack in any sense I understood at the time. There was simply a moon, low, close, filling the sky above a wedding, and its light came down, and where the light touched, people stopped. 300 disciples of my family went out like somebody sweeping crumbs off a table, not thrown, not injured, removed in one pass in the time it takes to exhale. A Mahayana elder of the Gu family, a man who had held the family's eastern border for 400 years, got in front of it and put up everything he had, and the moonlight went through it and through him, and he came apart in the air. That took 1 second. That is the whole first second. The guests were climbing the walls, actually climbing them, 300 cultivators trying to get over a garden wall at once because nobody's flight technique was working under that light. The bride's people were screaming. A table went over and 30 jars of wine went with it, and nobody so much as looked. And I stood exactly where I was, because I had done the only thing I was going to be able to do that day, and it was already done, and now I just had to be right about it. And a very old, very bored voice said one word from the direction of the ancestral hall. Freeze. Everything stopped. I don't mean people stopped moving. I mean the silver moon stopped in the air. I mean the dust stopped. I mean a wine cup that had been falling off a table was now simply sitting in the air at hip height, 3 inches from the floor, waiting for permission. An old man walked out of the back of the hall in plain gray robes, the way your grandfather walks out to see who's making noise in the yard. A mere remnant of a supreme, said the 19th ancestor of the Gu family. Thinks he can run wild in my house? He didn't attack. He reached out and took hold of something in the air above Chen Huai's shoulder and pulled. A long white phantom came out of the young man's body, screaming, kicking, trying to grab onto its own host with hands that went through him. The old man stuffed it into a jade bottle with his thumb, like a man corking wine. Then he tossed the bottle to me, underhand. Today's your joyous day, he said. That's my gift. I caught a supreme in a bottle at my own wedding. My hands were sweating so badly it nearly slipped. Chen Huai hit the floor with nothing left. A great ascension elder raised a palm to finish him, and I said, without any particular emotion, "Don't. Lock him up. I'll deal with him personally. Now." Somewhere in the crowd, people heard that and thought, the young master wants to draw it out. Classic villain. Makes sense. What I was actually thinking was quieter than that, and I remember it word for word, standing in a ruined hall holding a bottled Supreme with a girl I'd never met still gripping my sleeve. It was that simple? That was it? That was the terrifying protagonist? With a family like mine standing behind me, all I had to do was not be an idiot for 4 minutes and the whole thing collapsed? Those novels take 1,000 coincidences to work. 1,000. The ancestor has to be asleep. The villain has to talk. The trap has to be sprung a beat late. Take away any one of them, and the story doesn't happen at all. I decided, right there, in a room full of broken furniture, that I was going to spend the rest of my life taking away that one coincidence, every time, for everybody. Then my new wife said, very softly from under the veil, "Are you going to kill him?" And I looked at the man on the floor and thought about the year he'd spent fusing thousands of techniques, and about the machine inside him that had done the fusing, and about how that machine was still in there, still working, still perfectly functional. "No," I said. "I have a much better idea." The wedding still happened, by the way. That's the part that gets me. Half the hall was rubble, and there was a crater where the 5th table used to be, and the master of ceremonies cleared his throat and finished reading the vows off his scroll like a man who had been paid in advance and intended to earn it. That night, I sat down across from my wife in a room full of red candles, and I did not do the thing that the man whose face I was wearing would have done. I need to say that plainly, once, and then we can move on. The original Gu Mingjue was a bad person in the specific, unglamorous way that bad people usually are. I got his memories. I did not keep his appetites. What I kept was his enemies list and his resources, and I intend to use both, and that's as much of a defense as I'm going to offer. So instead of anything else, I put a cup of tea in front of her and said, "I want to make a deal." She had not taken the veil off. Her hands were folded so hard the knuckles had gone white. "You want the absolute yin body," she said. "I want a partner for a technique." That got the veil off. She had one of those faces that makes people in this world go to war, and right at that moment she was looking at me the way you look at a snake that has started speaking your language. Here's the actual mechanic, and it matters later, so stay with me. The Gu family's immortal canon is a yang cultivation art. It's a furnace. Her family's 7 yin technique is the opposite, and hers is the purest version of it walking around. Run the two against each other in a sealed room with enough spirit crystals and both sides climb. No contact, no romance, Just two people sitting 6 feet apart on stone platforms while the air between them tries to decide what season it is. Every night, I said. 2 hours. You go up, I go up. And Chen Huai keeps breathing. You're going to kill him anyway. Eventually. Probably. But there's a very large difference between eventually and tonight, and you know it, or you wouldn't have asked me if I was going to kill him. She sat down. She hated it. She did it. We ran the technique that night, and my cultivation went up by an amount that made me stop halfway through and check my own body twice, because I'd assumed the numbers in that book were exaggerated for drama. They were not. I went from the 2nd level of vast righteousness to the 4th in about 90 minutes, sitting still, doing nothing but breathing on schedule. Out in the hall, my father was standing in the dark with his arms folded, feeling his son's aura climb through the floor. Gu Tianxing, head of the family, a man who looked about 35 and who I could not read at all, not once, not in 18 months, and I tried. Several times over, he said to nobody. In one night. He didn't sound happy. He didn't sound worried either. He sounded like a man reading an instrument panel and noticing a number he hadn't put there. When we were done, I told her to stay, and I put one hand near her forehead, and a bright green leaf appeared in the air between my fingers. Don't move, I said. This will feel like nothing. It was the chasing immortal seal. Gu family surveillance, ancient immortal era vintage, and it is exactly as ugly as it sounds. It has a terrible success rate. It fails on almost everybody, and if it fails, you know it failed, and the target usually gets very upset. But when it lands, it is absolute. Every action, every word, every thought the target is having while they're having it. It landed. The leaf sank into her forehead and dissolved, and she flinched like someone had breathed on the back of her neck, and I sat back and looked at a woman who was now, functionally, a window. Tomorrow morning, I said, you're going to visit Chen Huai in his cell. Why? Because he'll be delighted. He'll say, Ruolan, you remembered me. He'll ask if I hurt you. Tell him nothing happened, that I'm too arrogant to bother with you yet. He'll believe it because he needs to. She stared at me. And then, I said, he's going to ask you for cultivation techniques. He would never, DJ. He'll say, the more the better. High quality would be even better. Those exact words, more or less. Write it down if you like. I want to be fair to her. She didn't believe me. Why would she? She'd known that man for years, and she'd known me for one day. And one of us had put a palm through his ribs at a wedding. She went anyway. She had a mother. And I sat in a chair in a dark room and watched the whole thing through her eyes like a man streaming a show he'd already seen. He was so happy when the door opened. That's the part I couldn't make fun of at the time and still can't. He came off the floor with his chains rattling and his face open like a kid at a window. Roland, you remembered me. Nothing happened, she said. He's too arrogant to touch me. I knew it. I knew you've Jay. And then, 11 seconds later, not 30, not a minute, 11 seconds after learning that the woman he loved had walked into a prison to see him, Chen Huai said, Ruolan, can you get me some cultivation techniques, any kind, the more the better, high quality would be best. I heard her heart do something through the seal. It's a strange thing to feel a person's stomach drop from 600 feet away. She got him the techniques, 7 or 8 jade slips of Jade Splendor's secret manuals, including Hua Xian Lu, their own immortal ascension art, which they do not give to their own elders. And when he pushed, gently, sweetly, in that voice heroes use, she gave him her personal ones too, both top-tier absolute yin techniques. You have to keep these safe, she told him. If Jade Splendor finds out, they'll hunt you across the world. I'll protect them with my life, he said, and reached for her hand, and she pulled it back, and he did not notice. He did not notice. She walked out of that cell with her jaw locked and her eyes wet, and she said, to the empty corridor, How do you know him better than I do? Because I'd read him, that's all. I hadn't outthought anybody. I'd just gotten the script early. Now here's what nobody in that prison understood, including him, especially him. His system fuses cultivation techniques. You feed it 2 arts, it grinds them together and gives you back something stronger than either one. That is the greatest cheat in this entire world, and I mean that sincerely. Given 10 years and enough raw material, Chen Huai outscales gods. Given raw material, he had just been handed the Jade Splendor Holy Land's complete Immortal Ascension art, and in about a week I was going to make very sure he also got a copy of the Gu family Immortal Canon and the 7 Yin technique and anything else I could get my hands on. I wasn't going to steal his system, I was going to run it. He had the machine. I had the supply chain, the raw material, and the loading dock. All I needed was somewhere to put the output. I sat back in that dark room and laughed until I had to put my face in my hands. A servant outside the door heard it and went very pale and told 3 people. By the end of the week, the whole province had a new rumor about the Gu family's young master, laughing alone in the dark on his wedding night. Honestly, fair. 2 days later, I took the bottle up to a lightning platform on the family's east peak and pulled the cork. The white phantom came out slowly, the way a man gets out of a chair when his back hurts. He'd been in a jade bottle for 48 hours after 10,000 years of being the most dangerous thing in a very large room, and he was still trying to arrange his face into something imperious. A remnant of a supreme, I said, trespassing in my family's house. Young man, he rebuilt his dignity in about a second and a half, which I respected. Let us discuss this reasonably. I have an immortal cave, untouched for 10,000 years. Inside it is the Azure Cry Sword, a supreme artifact with no damage whatsoever. There is an elixir of immortality. There is a drop of true immortal blood, brought from another province at enormous cost. All of it. Yours. I wanted on record that I nearly took the deal. A supreme artifact would have solved several of my problems that month. Instead, I looked bored and said, "Do you think I'm some penniless Chen Huai?" The phantom's mouth opened and shut. "Here's my offer," I said. "A slave mark. Eternal service to the Gu family. Or you sit in that bottle until you thin out into nothing, which by my estimate takes what, 400 years? 360. Great. 360. You have 10 days. Then I walked off, and I did not look back, and the moment I was out of sight, I leaned against a rock and breathed for a while, because I had just haggled with a being who could have ended the province, and the only reason it worked was that he could not see the inside of my head. That's the whole trick, incidentally. That's the entire trick. I never once had the power. I had a very good poker face and a family that made the bluff plausible. The next day, a big shot from the Huangji Dao sect came down out of the sky, and my father met him at the door personally, which the Gu family does for approximately 4 people alive. Zhou Hai, elder. The kind of man who arrives without an appointment because he has never in his life needed one. He unrolled a portrait on the table, hemp clothes, messy hair. "This young man," he said. "We have been looking for him for some time. If he lives, I would like to speak with him. If he is dead, give me the body, and I will pay generously." My father looked at me once, very briefly. I put down my tea and said, with a completely straight face, "After I killed Chen Huai, I fed him to the wild beasts. There's nothing left of him to give you." Zhou Hai's expression did not change. My father's expression did not change either, and my father knew for a fact that Chen Huai was alive in a cell 400 feet under our floor, and he sat there and said absolutely nothing while his teenage son lied to a Huangji Dao sect elder about a corpse. I filed that away. It seemed important. It was. Zhou Hai left. He got 100 miles out, and then he stopped in the air and turned around and looked back at our mountains for a long time, and the sentence that went through his head was, I'm told, this one. Why keep the boy alive and refuse to release him? What am I not being told? Correct question. Wrong century to be asking it. They wanted Chen Huai because he had a talent for creating techniques out of thin air, which from the outside is what a fusion system looks like. They'd tried to recruit him. He'd turned them down. Because he was proud. Because he was 17. Because that's what the character does. I filed that away too. The whole world wanted my prisoner, and none of them knew why he was good, and every single one of them was going to keep not knowing. 5 days after that, at 4 in the morning, a servant woke me up with a report from a vassal branch, and I read 4 lines of it and got out of bed so fast I put my foot through a screen. The report said, a stable boy who was beaten to death 2 days ago woke up on the corpse pile behind the Lin family estate and started cultivating. Here's what I knew before I finished the sentence. Reincarnation template. Old monster in a young body, a dead man's second run. That's a protagonist. That is one of the 4 or 5 standard issue protagonists in this entire genre, and the #1 rule about them is that you kill them in the first week, or you do not kill them at all. I was in the air before my boots were on. His name was Luo Jin, which had also been the dead boy's name because the universe finds that sort of thing funny. He'd been kicked to death by a young master of the Lin family, a vassal branch, one of those men who has a private hill of bodies behind his house and a reputation for temper. And into that corpse, out of somewhere much further away than anyone in this province had ever traveled, had fallen a soul that had been an immortal venerable in its previous life and had been killed by 3 of its peers. He woke up on the pile. He looked around at a couple of 100 dead servants. And instead of screaming, he used a grimoire he remembered from his last life to eat the resentment coming off all of them at once. Then he purified it through something in his chest. By dawn, he had gone from chi refining to foundation establishment in a single night. That thing in his chest was a ruler, a measuring rod. It had followed him across death and across worlds, and when I got there, I found out what it was called, because he told me, because he could not stop himself. The primordial chaos ruler. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask questions. I didn't do the thing where you circle each other and establish tone. I came down out of the sky at full power on a foundation establishment cultivator, which is roughly like a battleship opening fire on a man in a canoe. Better to be wrong about one of them than late about any of them. He blocked it. A ruler-shaped imprint of gray light came up over him, and my palm shattered on it, and then he was gone, 100 miles in one breath, running with a strip of his own soul burning to pay for it. I stood in the wreckage of a stable yard with my hands still glowing, and did the only useful thing I could do, which was breathe out slowly and get my head straight. Fine, so he's fast. So the ruler is a real artifact and not a story about one. Note it. Move. Then I checked, and the chasing immortal seal I'd thrown at him mid-strike had landed. I remember laughing about that, actually. The most powerful surveillance technique my family owns, the one with the terrible success rate, the one that fails on ordinary people 6 times out of 10. It failed on nobody that mattered all episode, not once. I've thought about that a lot since. I don't think it's luck. I think a thing that has fate stapled to it is easier to see. The next 3 days were the first real education I got in what I was actually up against, and I watched all of it through the back of his own eyes. He grabbed a random cultivator off a road and read his mind to learn the local rules, and I felt him understand in about 4 seconds that the world he'd died in was a rounding error compared to the world he'd landed in. 3,000 Dao provinces, each one bigger than the entire realm he used to rule. He took that in and did not panic, which told me he'd been genuinely important once. Then he started force-feeding. There is a temple on the Yuling Road with about 40 cultivators in it. Small place. They take in travelers. They grow their own vegetables. The senior monk had been there 60 years. He walked up the steps at midday and asked for water. They gave him water. Of course they did. He was a boy with no shoes on. He was in there for 11 minutes, and when he came out, the temple was empty, and he was standing in the doorway rolling his shoulders like a man who has just put down something heavy, and he was at the middle stage of foundation establishment. I got there 4 hours later. I want to describe what that place was like because everybody tells this part of the story as if I was the monster in it. 40 people. Nothing damaged, no fire, no broken doors, no sign of a fight anywhere in the building. The vegetables were still watered, somebody's tea was still on a table, and it was cold, and it had not been knocked over. He had not fought them. He had absorbed them, one at a time, in a building where the next person in the corridor could not hear it happening. The next town was 40 miles further on. 900 people, one small sect, a market day. He was at the peak of foundation establishment by evening, and every single time I closed the distance, something behind his eyes twitched, and he moved, half a beat before I arrived. Not after, before. I came down on a road 3 miles behind him, and he was already turning off it. Danger sense. Of course, they all have it. It's practically standard equipment, so I stopped chasing him and started building a wall around him instead. Here is the thing about a danger sense. It tells you where the danger is. It does not tell you where the danger is not. Every time he ran away from me. That is the entire function. And a man who always runs away from one thing can be steered by that one thing as reliably as a cart with a wheel missing, provided you are willing to be patient and to be seen. I spent 2 days deliberately being sensed. I came in from the north and let him feel it, and he went south. I came in from the east, and he went west. I did it 11 times over 2 days, from the same 3 directions, never quite arriving, and by the end of it he was moving down a corridor about 40 miles wide that he had chosen entirely by himself, and that I had drawn on a map before I started. At the bottom of that corridor is Qingyun City. City Lord Fei is a dragon transformation cultivator with a decent formation and a strong instinct for self-preservation, and he is a Gu family vassal in the way that a tenant is a tenant. He received a letter at midnight. Seal the city. Do not open it for any reason. This instruction includes any subsequent instruction from me in my own handwriting, with my own seal, delivered by my own people. If I myself arrive at your gate and order you to open it, keep it shut. He did not ask a single question. He did not send a rider for confirmation. He read it twice, went up onto the wall himself at 1 in the morning, and put the city under full lock with 16,000 people inside it, and no explanation offered to any of them. That is what the Gu family's name buys, and I have never once had to explain why it works. Luojin hit the membrane at full speed and bounced. I got there an hour later, and I did the thing. I know it's theater. I did it anyway, because theater is a weapon in this world, and I wasn't going to leave a weapon on the table out of embarrassment. I walked down through the air 1 step at a time, like there were stairs, and with every step, the pressure doubled. Halfway down, loose cultivators on the rooftop started coughing. 3/4 of the way down, the ones at foundation establishment went to their knees. By the time my boots touched the street, there was a circle 100 feet wide with nobody standing in it and one very calm man in the middle. If I had my old power, Luojin said, you would be an ant. You don't. So, 3 palms. The first 2 cracked the ruler's shadow. The third broke it, and I watched the confidence come off his face in one piece like a mask sliding. Then he burned his last card, and it was a good one. A single drop of 5-colored liquid came out of the ruler's core and condensed into 3 inches of solid gray metal, and that little thing went through my palm print, through Faye's Earth Dragon, through the city's formation, and through my flying sword, in one line, without slowing down. He laughed. He was already moving. He was through the hole in the barrier and clear, and a golden bowl came down out of the clouds and put him on the ground. Elder Jiang. Green robes, Saint Realm, a retainer my family has kept on salary for longer than most sects have existed. He'd been sitting in that cloud for 6 hours doing nothing while I fought because that was the entire point of him. I hadn't planned to win that fight. I'd planned to make him spend the ruler's charge, and then have somebody he'd never sensed drop a bowl on him. Elder Zhang landed, inspected his sacred artifact, found a dent in the rim, and immediately began complaining about compensation. Meanwhile, a third of Qingyun City was rubble, and several hundred people who had been going about their mourning were dead in the shockwaves. I did not have a good moment about that. I want to be honest with you, rather than likable. I had a brief, tight, unpleasant thought about the cost of doing business, and then I put it in a drawer, and the drawer got heavier all year. Down in the cell, with his cultivation frozen, Luo Jin spent 3 days working through the standard sequence, and I sat outside the bars for all 3 of them because I wanted to hear the whole thing. Day 1 was contempt. I was a child. My family was a collection of frogs in a well. He had ruled realms whose names I could not pronounce, and my entire province was a grain of sand to him. Day 2 was the offer. I once stood above all realms. Release me, not out of mercy, out of arithmetic. Everything I know, every technique, every location of every treasure in a world you cannot reach, in exchange for a door, you would profit enormously, and you know it. Wouldn't that make me the single biggest fool alive? You would be the richest man in this province within a year. I already am, I said. That's the problem with your offer. You've been dead for a while, so let me explain my position. I do not want anything you have. I have exactly one goal where you are concerned, and it is not profit. It is that you stop existing. Day 3 was the bargaining, and then the anger. And then, at the very end of it, the thing everybody eventually gives up, which is a name. He told me where he came from. The Kang Huang Cultivation world. I wrote it down. Not because it helped, because it was the first hard evidence I had that this world had doors in it, and things were coming through them. Out in the province, the taverns had a new story that week, and it was about me. They gutted a whole city to catch one Foundation establishment cultivator. Hundreds dead. For a boy at the bottom of the ladder. What kind of devil does that? The Gu family's young master. That's what kind. First he made his own wedding into a slaughter, now this. When is somebody finally going to get rid of him? Difficult, said an old drinker in the corner. Chen Huai was the most talented young man in 3 provinces, and he walked in there and never came out. I heard that report and felt something I wasn't expecting, which was relief. Let them think that. Let every single one of them think I am a monster who overreacts to nothing, because the alternative is that somebody clever sits down with a map and a list of my victims and notices the pattern. The pattern was that every person I had gone insane over was a person the sky had picked. And while that conversation was happening in that tavern, the door opened and a young man walked in with a long black ruler on his back and 2 women in veils behind him. I didn't know about him yet. That's the thing about that afternoon that I still find funny in a way that makes my jaw tight. I was in a cell 200 miles away congratulating myself on my thoroughness while the single most dangerous person in this story ordered a pot of tea and asked the locals for gossip. "Excuse me," he said. "Who runs this province?" They told him about the Gu family. They told him about the young master. One of them added helpfully that if he was traveling with women that beautiful, he should keep them covered and stay out of Tianxing City. The young man thanked them politely. His name was Long Fei. He had arrived in this world less than half a day earlier, ascending out of a lower realm with 2 companions named Yueling and Fengying, and on his finger was a plain bronze ring with a pyramid inside it that paid out resources and divine abilities every single time he broke through a realm. He'd already decided he was going to the limitless immortal sect. He would change his mind about that, because of me. Which is going to become a problem for me later, and I'd like it noted that I did this to myself. I found out about Long Fei the way you find out about a gas leak. Slowly, then all at once. And by then you've already been breathing it. The first report was about an earring. There is a jewelry shop on the main street of Tianxing City that has been there for 800 years and has never once had an incident. A girl in a veil came in, looked at a jade earring in the case, and asked the price. And a second girl, who had walked in behind her, said she was taking it. Bai Yuer. Local. The sort of young woman whose family is important within about 4 streets, and who has arranged her entire personality around that fact. She had a brother figure in the Donghua sect, and she sent for him while the argument was still going, because that is how these things are done in a town like that. He arrived within 10 minutes with a senior brother at the Dao Palace realm behind him, and the girl in the veil beat all 3 of them without appearing to work very hard at it. I have read the shopkeeper's statement. He is 80 years old, and he wrote it out longhand, and he is very clear about the sequence. The Donghua young master reached for her. Her hand moved. He went through the display case and out into the street through a window, and the case was worth more than the earring, and the shopkeeper mentions this twice. The senior brother at Dao Palace did rather better. He lasted about 4 exchanges, and on the 4th exchange her veil came off. The street stopped, not figuratively. There is a line in that statement that I have thought about a great deal, which is that a cart driver let go of his reins and the cart went on without him for some distance before anybody noticed. She put the veil back on and paid for the earring and left. She paid, incidentally. She paid full price and she paid for the window. 2 days later, there were 3 bodies outside the north gate, and all 3 of them had been burned so completely that identification took a formation and a day. One was the Donghua young master, one was the Dao Palace senior brother, the third was a cousin who had gone with them. The Donghua sect is a Gu family vassal. They had in fact been hoping to gift a beautiful young woman to me that season, which tells you everything you need to know about how that arrangement worked and about what the young master and his senior brother had gone out to the north gate to discuss. I read the report at breakfast and thought, mysterious young man, 2 impossible companions, arrived from nowhere, kills people 2 realms above his level with fire, no sect affiliation, and does not initiate anything. That last part is the part I underlined. He did not start it. Neither time. I wrote a note on the bottom of the report. Find him. They did not find him. He was very good at not being found, and he was, at that moment, hunting 3 mysterious flames on the far side of the province, and I had a much more urgent appointment because I decided what to do about Luo Jin, and it involved waking up my ancestors. The Gu family has a place we call the Land of Slumber. From the outside, it's a valley behind the main estate with a mist on it that doesn't move when the wind blows. From the inside, it's a graveyard, and the graves are numbered, and the numbers go up, and the higher the number, the older the thing lying under it. They are not dead. That's important. Ours don't die, they just stop bothering. I brought my father with me, and I brought Luo Jin in a cage, and on the way down, my father said mildly, a Foundation establishment cultivator. Is it truly necessary to disturb the old ancestors? It's necessary. Explain. I said, because I'm worried that once the thing inside him gets out, nobody in the Gu family can put it back. He looked at me sideways for about a second and a half, and then he stopped arguing, and that was the first time I understood that my father had decided to let me run. The gate opened, the mist came apart, and the ruler broke my seal on Luo Jin by itself without him doing anything the instant the air changed. He came up off the floor of the cage ready to fight, and then he saw where he was, and I watched a man who had been an immortal venerable stop breathing. Rows on rows, going back into a fog that didn't end, each mound leaking an aura that made the air heavy, and the deep ones, the ones with the high numbers, belonged to things that he had looked up at in his previous life. He'd been the top of a world. He was standing in the family plot of a household that kept beings like him out back. You can watch a person's spirit come apart. It isn't dramatic. It's just that they get smaller. Then the mounds started waking up, and they were delighted. A Dao artifact. An old voice, thin with sleep and suddenly extremely interested. The junior brought in a Dao artifact? Where? Where is it? Show me. 12th. Wake up. The boy brought us a present. The primordial chaos ruler did not go quietly. It rose out of Luo Jin's chest on its own, and it fought them, all of them, and for about 6 seconds it was actually winning, gray light spreading out of it in a wave that smelled like the beginning of things, like a world before anybody had decided what was in it, and Luo Jin, with his voice tearing, screamed the line that every single one of them screams eventually. I am the child of destiny. The heavens themselves will punish you. And the sky said, all right. I have seen a lot of things since that morning, and I have not seen anything that made me feel smaller. A vortex opened over the Gu family's estate 100 miles wide, and at the center of it, where the eye of a storm goes, there was an actual eye, red, open, looking down. Other provinces felt it. Old things in other provinces woke up and turned to look and got slapped for it, hard, by ancestors of mine who did not even bother to stand up. One of them said, into the sky, in a bored voice, spy on my Gu family again and I'll come to your house. Then a layer of pale loess rose off the ground of that valley, dirt older than the sky above it, and the tribulation stopped like a man walking into a wall, and from grave number 8 an old man got up. Gu Zhenwu, asleep for 500,000 years. He came out slowly, and he looked up once at the eye in the clouds without any expression at all, and then he swung a sword down at a 19-year-old boy in a cage. Black light with rules written all through it. The Chaos Ruler's defense tore like wet paper. There was nothing left of Luo Jin at all. That evening, it snowed red across the entire province. People came out of their houses and stood in it and did not know what they were looking at. I did. I was looking at the price tag. The eye pressed down harder, 100-fold, for about 3 seconds. Then it dissipated. Warning issued, complaint filed, case closed. My ancestors were thrilled with me. So what if a child of destiny fell into the hands of our descendant, said one. Tianxing has done well. I was standing there wiping cold sweat off my neck and doing arithmetic that nobody else in that valley was doing. Killing one Luo Jin had made the will of heaven that desperate. 1. A boy at Foundation Establishment who'd been alive again for 6 days, and Chen Huai, sitting in my basement, had a system. Chang Yun paid me for the trouble. 2 things. First, Luo Jin's complete memories, compressed into a black orb the size of a plum. I ate a dead man's entire life in one sitting, and it took me a week to stop having his dreams. There was something in there worth all of it. A divine ability from his old world called 9 Palaces Flying Stars, and it comes in 3 levels. Level 1, you read a person's fortune. Level 2, you know their destiny. Level 3, you change it. Level 3, I sat with that for a long time, because if I ever get there, I don't need a cheat, and I don't need to steal anybody's system, and I don't have to hunt anybody at all. If I get to level 3, I am the cheat. Second, Changyun gave me the primordial chaos ruler itself, which was going to take about 6 months to install inside my own sea of consciousness, and which was, I would shortly discover, completely useless to me, but that's later. The price came due the next day and it did not come to me. Elder Jiang had gone home. He had a house on the family's western slope with a courtyard and a very good pear tree in it, and he had spent the morning writing a formal complaint about the dent in his golden bowl, which he intended to submit through channels because he was that sort of man. His steward found him at the table at midday. There was no attacker. There was no weapon. The courtyard formation had not triggered, and it is a good formation, and it had been checked that week. Nothing in the room was disturbed. His brush was still in his hand, and the complaint was 2/3 written, and the last character he had drawn was complete and steady, a saint, in his own house, in daylight, with a wound across the top of his skull that nobody could explain and that would not close. 3 of our best healers worked on him for 11 days. It did not close because there was nothing to close. It was not an injury in the ordinary sense, it was a subtraction. I went and stood in that courtyard on the second day and looked at the pear tree for a while, because here is what had actually happened, and I worked it out standing there, and it changed the way I operated for the rest of my life. I gave the order, I chased the boy, I broke his artifact, I stood in the city and did the theater with the stairs, but the hand that actually closed on him was the hand that dropped the bowl. And whatever was keeping the books had gone looking for the hand and had found the cheapest one on the list and had sent the bill to a 400-year-old retainer who had done exactly what he was told by a family he had served since before my grandfather was born. Not me, him. The retribution had gone looking for the hand that did the catching, and it had found the wrong hand, or the convenient hand, or the cheap hand. I stood in his room and looked at an old man I'd used, and I revised my entire operating procedure on the spot. From that day on, we handled these people ourselves. My family did not touch them. My retainers did not touch them. If a child of destiny needed to go into the ground, my hands went on the shovel, partly because it was the right thing to do, mostly because I had just watched heaven send the bill to whoever was standing nearest, and I intended to be standing nearest for the rest of my life. While all of that was happening upstairs, my prisoner was doing my homework. I want to walk you through this properly, because it's the single best thing I did that year, and I got it entirely by accident. Chen Huai's fusion had never taken longer than an hour. That was the established rhythm of his whole life. Feed it 2 arts, wait 40 minutes, receive something better? It was the reason he'd gone from a beggar in a wasteland to a man who could threaten an immortal family in 4 years. This one took 10 days. 10 days in a cell with no spiritual energy in the air, sitting on stone, sweating, with a machine in his head grinding away at a pile of material that included the Jade Splendor Holy Land's Immortal Ascension art and the 7 Yin technique, and 3 volumes of the Gu family Immortal Canon because I had made very sure of it. They had gone missing from a vassal library the week before and turned up in a market stall at a price a poor young man could afford. On the 10th day it finished, and even I did not expect what came out. It had no name. It was a cultivation art in 9 parts and a sword form folded inside it, and the description it came with, which he read out loud to himself in an empty cell in a voice that kept cracking, was this. It unlocks human potential to its fullest extent, in every realm, at every stage. Its only drawback is that the resource cost is terrifying. Every realm, not one, not a specialty, all of them. He sat there and cried, actually, for a bit. And then he did the thing that ruined him, and he did it out of love, which is what makes it unbearable. He gave it away. Liu Roland was upstairs in a garden when his voice arrived in her head, and I was 3 rooms over with my eyes shut, watching through a leaf. Ruolan, listen, memorize this, don't write it down anywhere. Lin Fan Vji. I made something. I don't have time to explain how. Just take it. and he recited 9 chapters of an art that should not exist, from memory, perfectly, over the course of an hour, to a woman standing in a flower bed with her hands over her mouth. I want to be fair to her here, because this is the moment where I stopped being able to tell myself a comfortable story. She understood what she was hearing. She was a saintess of a holy land. She had read her own family's immortal ascension art, the crown jewel, the thing 4 elders are required to be present for. And she stood in that garden doing the comparison in real time and arriving at a number. And the number was that her family's greatest treasure was worth about 1/10 of what a boy in a basement had just invented out of boredom. And at the end of it, he said, in the same warm voice, "Use it. And if you get the chance, it would be best if you could kill Gu Mingjoy with it." She opened her mouth. I know exactly what she was going to say, because I was inside her head when she decided to say it. She was going to say stop. She was going to tell him to shut up, that this was a trap, that every word he'd said for the last hour had gone straight into the ear of the man he wanted dead. And I said, into her mind, at that precise second, if you'd like your mother and father to be corpses by tomorrow evening, go ahead and shout. She ran out of the garden with her hand over her mouth, and did not stop until she was somewhere with a door. And down in the cell, Chen Huai felt her presence leave and smiled at the wall, and thought, don't worry, one day we'll be together again. There is no version of that scene in which I come out of it looking like a person. I've tried a few. None of them survive contact with the fact that I did it on purpose, with a plan, and that it worked. I named the technique 2 days later. You get to do that, apparently, when the person who made it is a legally dead man in your basement. I sat in a room with 9 chapters of impossible cultivation art in front of me and my father across the table, and I said, it should have a name. It should, he agreed. The Tianxing Dao scripture. My father looked at me for a moment. You named it after yourself. I named it after the sky, I said. The fact that my name is also the sky is a coincidence I intend to enjoy. He laughed. It was the first time I ever made him do that. I made a note of what it cost, which was 1 piece of shameless arrogance, and I filed that away too, because a man who laughs at arrogance is a man who has some of his own. Then I read the terrifying part of the description more carefully, and the fun stopped. 20 times the resources, not 20%, 20 times. To cultivate this thing at all, I needed to sit in an environment so dense with spiritual energy that a normal cultivator would be poisoned by it. So I called in the family's formation masters and told them to take my secret chamber to 30 times ambient density. There was a silence. Young master, the senior one said carefully, at 30 times, the spiritual density approaches the level a San realm cultivator would use. Anyone below that realm who cultivates there would be doing themselves considerably more harm than good. Understood. You are at the 4th level of vast righteousness. Also understood. Set it up. They set it up. They also, I found out later, filed a formal note of concern with my father, who read it, wrote a single character on the bottom of it, and sent it back. The character was fine. I flooded the chamber with spirit crystals until the floor was uncomfortable to sit on, and I went in with the Tianxing Dao scripture and the absolute yin body's cooperation, and I came out with numbers that I did not believe for the first 3 days. Foundation establishment is a realm where a genius opens 9 layers. The scripture opened 10 more on top of that, retroactively, in a realm I had finished with years ago. The Divine Sea realm, where I had 10, went to 18. It was fixing my past. That's the only way I can describe it. It went back down through my foundation like a man going through a house he'd bought cheap, knocking out walls, and every single thing it touched got bigger. 20 times the resources. Fine. I had a family with a treasury the size of a small nation, and a father who had just written the word fine on a formal complaint. That was the moment I stopped being a man surviving a plot and became a man running a business. And the business needed one more thing before it could open properly, which is why I went down to the cell block that evening and told Liu Roland I was letting Chen Huai go. She didn't believe me. Nobody would have. There's a condition, I said. Of course there is. You go with him. She went very still. You will leave with him tonight. You will stay with him. You will be everything he thinks you are. I let that sit. And you will tell me what he does. You want me to spy on him. Her voice had gone flat, which I have since learned is what she does instead of screaming. On Chen Huai, you want me to be the knife in his back for years. I want you to be the reason he keeps breathing, I said. He is going to walk out of here into a world where 4 sects want his head and 2 of them know his face. He is going to find treasures and forbidden lands and fortune because that is what he does, and every single time he does it, he is going to be one bad afternoon from dying, and every single time I will know exactly where he is. So you can kill him. So he can survive long enough to be worth killing. Say whatever you like to him. Your mouth is your own. I have exactly one requirement, and that is that you do as I say when I say it. And if I betray you? Then how angry I get, I said, will depend on my mood. I have replayed that conversation a number of times. That's the line I'd take back. Not because it isn't true, because it's the line of a man who has started enjoying it. 10 days after I corked him, I went back up to the lightning platform to see whether a Supreme could count. He could. The Phantom was waiting, and he had rearranged himself into something that was trying very hard to look dignified and cooperative at the same time, which is a difficult combination on a face made of mist. I accept, Songbao said. The slave mark. Eternal service. On one condition. You're in a bottle. You don't get conditions. On one request, then. I let him have it. Frankly, I wanted to hear it. There is a man, he said, named Lord Kunlong. He rules the Supreme Beginning Holy Land, 2 provinces east, in Tianxing Dao Province. I raised him. I found him in a river town with nothing, and for 1,000 years I taught him everything I knew, and I loved him the way a man loves a son. And he killed you. The mist went very still. How do you know that? Because it's a story, my friend. It's a story I've read 900 times. The old master who takes in a foundling. The foundling who waits 1,000 years and then puts something in the tea. That plot has a groove worn in it so deep you could float a boat down it. What I said out loud was, I know this plot very well. Plot? It's just a story, I said. The life of a holy lord in exchange for yours. Done. And he agreed, just like that. A being who had once been able to unmake a province agreeing to wear a slave mark for the rest of eternity in exchange for one man's death, because grudges outlive power. The Gu family paid to bring him back properly, which took half a month and a shopping list of herbs that made the quartermaster physically sit down. The centerpiece was a Jukyu divine lotus, which blooms once every 1,000,000 years, and which we had 2 of, because of course we did. He came out of it with a body, actual flesh, silver hair, dark robes, the face of a man in his 60s who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice, and on the back of his neck, small and black, a mark that meant that if I asked him to walk into a fire, he would ask me which fire. The single most valuable thing about him was not his power. It was that Chen Huai still thought he was in the ring. Think about that for a second. My enemy's mentor, the voice he'd trusted since he was a child, the old man who had guided him through 4 years of impossible growth, was now standing at my left shoulder answering to me, and Chen Huai did not know. As far as Chen Huai was concerned, the ring had simply gone quiet after the wedding, the way an injured elder goes quiet, and he was praying to it. My father was watching from the doorway while the mark was applied. He didn't say anything at the time. Later that evening, he said one thing to an elder that got back to me. My son has an impeccable temperament. That is not what most fathers say about their teenage sons. It also wasn't a compliment exactly, and it took me most of a year to work out what it actually was, which was a man identifying a tool. 2 nights later, I let Chen Huai escape. I did it properly. I want credit for the production values here because I have never worked harder on anything in my life than I worked on that hour, and nobody has ever thanked me for it. Step 1, I publicly announced I was entering seclusion. A young master in seclusion is a young master who is not watching, and the entire estate relaxed by about 10%, which was 10% more than I needed. Step 2, I pulled the guards off the lower cells. Not all of them. 2, just enough that the rotation had a soft spot in it at exactly the hour I intended, and every man on that rotation had a plausible reason to be somewhere else. Step 3, I gave my wife my personal identity token. The real one. The one that gets you through 14 sealed doors in my family's estate and that my own cousins have never held. She walked down into the cell block wearing a servant's cloak, and Chen Huai's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Ruolan, how did you DJ? He stopped, staring at the token in her hand. That's his. Does it matter right now? Beautiful. She was so good. She'd had 2 days to be angry about it, and she came in with the exact right amount of impatience, and he swallowed it whole and didn't chew. They walked out through the estate past bowing servants. That's my favorite detail. Half a dozen Gu family retainers straightening up and stepping aside and saying, "Young madam." Going out this evening? While the most wanted man in the province walked past them in a borrowed disciple's uniform with his head down. Step 4, a talisman got them 1,000 miles clear in one jump. Step 5, the token in her hand went red hot, and my voice came out of it loud enough to shake leaves off a mountain. Yang Qingwen, how dare you betray me? Bring Chen Huai back within the hour, and I may still grant you a whole burial. And my wife, who I had been informed by 3 separate servants was a shy woman of gentle temperament, turned her face up to the sky and screamed back at it. Gu Mingjue, you're a madman. Today Chen Huai and I are leaving together, and one day we will come back and settle this. I have never heard a more convincing sentence in my life, and I wrote it for her. The token exploded. On cue, and precisely 1 second after their teleporter ray fired, a Mahayana elder of my family brought a hand the size of a hillside down on that mountaintop and removed the top 40 feet of it, and did it just slowly enough. Chen Huai wept, actual tears. He held her hands and told her he would spend his life deserving what she had just done, and inside the seal I could feel her heartbeat like a bird in a box, and I was standing in my own courtyard 800 miles away, watching the whole thing from behind her eyes, with a cup of tea going cold in my hand. The only thing I said out loud, to nobody, was this: "It's a real shame Liu Ruolan isn't a film queen." Behind me, somebody made a small strangled noise. Elder Gu Tianxing had come out to report the successful destruction of the mountaintop and had been standing there for the last 30 seconds. "Young master," he said, "forgive me. What exactly is your intention? You wouldn't believe me. Try me. I'm farming him." He thought about that for a while. Then he bowed and went away, and I found out later he told 3 colleagues that the young master's madness had reached a stage where it now had a schedule, and that this was somehow more frightening than the previous stage. The scandal was enormous. I had not fully planned for how enormous. Within 4 days, every tavern in Mystic Dust Dao province was running the same story. The Gu family's young master got married, and his bride ran off with a nobody in a borrowed uniform, and the Gu family had to blow up a mountain about it and still didn't catch them. An immortal family had not been humiliated like that in tens of millions of years. There were poems. Somebody wrote poems. My cousins could not look at me. Elders came to my door to offer condolences with their faces very carefully arranged, and one of them, a man 300 years old, patted my shoulder and told me that a great man's road is long and that women are like clothing, and I had to leave the room. Meanwhile, 100 miles outside the border, in a tavern with a bad roof, Chen Huai sat with his hood up and grinned into his cup at the thought of my face. He reached across the table for her hand. She pulled it back and said, "What kind of time is this?" He apologized immediately. He always did. And then the second piece of news came through the room, carried by a merchant who'd come down from the north, and it landed differently. The Gu family had taken Su Ming'er into their estate, mother of Liu Ruolan. She would be their honored guest, the announcement said, until such time as her daughter chose to return home. Liu Ruolan set her cup down very carefully so that it would not make a sound. Chen Huai said, "We'll get her out, I swear it, whatever it takes." And she said, "I know." And through a leaf in her forehead, I felt exactly how much she loved that man, and exactly how much less it was than the other thing. And I sat in my study 800 miles away and knew that my leash was secure. That's the ugly little engine at the center of all this. Everyone was so busy watching a love story that nobody noticed I had never once bet on love. I had bet on a daughter. The province spent a week laughing at me. Then my father went to work, and the laughing stopped very fast. He did not raise his voice about any of it. He went to the Holy Master of Chonghua, who is the arbiter for the Holy Lands in our half of the province, and he sat down and had tea. "The Jade Splendor Holy Land," my father said, "has been incorporated into the Gu family's subordinate forces. It will be renamed Tianxing Holy Land. That will do." The Holy Master of Chonghua choked on his tea. Understand the scale of this. Jade Splendor is a holy land with 3 saints and an old ancestor and a history going back to the last era. You do not annex one. There is no procedure. It is like a man walking into a neighboring kingdom's palace and saying the country is called something else now. Please update the maps. The Holy Master said, "You cannot possibly be serious." My father held up 3 fingers. 3 days. Jade Splendor's old ancestor came out of seclusion swearing he would fight to the death, and he meant it, and the whole Holy Land got behind him and meant it too, and for about 18 hours it looked like there was going to be a war that ate a third of the province. Then a very thin, very dry old man crawled out of grave number 9 in the land of slumber. Nobody sent him. That is the part I want you to sit with, and it is the part I have never been able to explain to anybody outside my family, because everybody assumes there was an order. There was no order. My father did not go down there. I certainly did not. He simply got up, the way you get up when there is a noise in the yard, and he brushed the dirt off his sleeves, and he asked a passing servant which direction Jade Splendor was in. The servant told him. Then the servant sat down on the path for a while. He walked. He did not fly. It took him most of a day. Jade Splendor Holy Land sits behind 100,000 years of layered formations. There are 9 rings of them. The outermost ring has been in continuous operation since before my province had its current name, and the innermost 3 are maintained by a dedicated hall of 40 formation masters who do nothing else with their lives. None of the 9 noticed him. I want to be precise about that because there is a version of this that sounds like a man being powerful, and it was not that. The formations did not fail, they did not break or bend or get overwhelmed. They were checked afterward by their own people 3 times, and every ring was found intact and functioning perfectly, and with no record of anything having passed through. He walked into their ancestral hall, the one their own holy lord needs 3 keys and a right of descent to enter, and he was in there for about an hour. Nobody knows what he said. Nobody knows if he said anything. There were 4 Jade Splendor ancestors resting in that hall, and not one of them has ever spoken about it, including to their own descendants, including under direct questioning from their holy lord. Then he walked back out and walked home and lay down again. He has not gotten up since. I went and looked at that mound about a month later, out of curiosity, and it was a mound with a 9 on it and nothing else at all. The following morning, Jade Splendor's old ancestor announced a change of policy. We must still fight, he told his own elders. For our dignity, we must fight, but we will not truly intervene. The outcome has already been decided. We are simply going through the motions. That is the single most demoralizing sentence I have ever read in an intelligence report, and I did not write it. Inside Jade Splendor, there was one person having a wonderful week. Lin Zixuan, who had spent her adolescence coming second to Liu Ruolan in every single thing that mattered, had spontaneously begun rounding up Liu Ruolan's friends and Chen Huai's old acquaintances and delivering them to my family as a gesture of goodwill. Nobody asked her to do that either. I mention it because people keep asking me how a person becomes a villain, and the honest answer is that most of the time you don't have to do anything. You just have to be a large enough hill that everyone downstream starts rolling on their own. Meanwhile, I was in a sealed room for half a month with the Tianxing Dao scripture, and I came out having more than doubled, and there was a green light screen waiting for me on the wall with 2 weeks of reports on it. I want to describe what that actually felt like, because it was the most fun I had all year, and it is deeply embarrassing. It felt like watching a show. Every few days, a new episode. Chen Huai recovers his injuries in a mountain village. Chen Huai hits an immortal cave in Da Yuan Dao province and cleans out a dead saint's treasury, thereby making a permanent enemy of the Yaoshan sect. Chen Huai kills 2 vast righteousness cultivators and a young sect master who insulted his companion. Chen Huai and Liu Ruolan take a shortcut through a canyon and blunder directly into a forbidden land called the 10,000 Grievance Nest, which is the kind of name that in this genre means jackpot. In there, under a skull, he found a nameless divine ability. In a stone box, he found a flower nobody could identify. Leaning against a wall, he found a rusted sword. And in a cave at the bottom, he found a pond of thunder spirit liquid, and then discovered that the pond was the tip of an underground sea of it, and he filled 10 jade bottles and could not carry more. Every technique he fused, I received a copy of, not a summary, a copy transmitted through a leaf in his own understanding, which is worth more than the manual, and I sat there with my feet on a table like a man watching his favorite cereal and said out loud to an empty room, his fate is completely in the hands of destiny, because that's what it was. It wasn't skill. He got lost and found a forbidden land. He got attacked, and the attack drove him toward treasure. Follow this pattern for 2 more years, and he stands in front of me again, and by then, he will be strong enough to actually take a swing. I was rooting for him. I need you to understand that this was not a metaphor. I genuinely wanted him to keep winning, the way a man wants his crop to come in. And then, at the bottom of the last report, in her own words, there was one line that had nothing to do with any of it. If I die out there, please spare my mother. I read it twice. I didn't answer it. I didn't make a joke about it either. And I make jokes about almost everything. I just sat in that room for a while with the light screen still up, and then I closed it, and then I went and had a very long bath. I spent the next month in the land of slumber having a very old man install a Dao artifact in my skull. That is a sentence that should carry more weight than it does when I say it quickly, so here is the slow version. 31 days. 2 sessions a day, morning and evening, each one about 90 minutes, in a stone hollow between Grave 8 and Grave 9 with Cheng Yun sitting behind me and my father standing at the entrance for the first 4 days until I asked him to stop coming. The primordial chaos ruler does not fit inside a person. That is the fundamental problem, and it does not get solved, it gets negotiated. It went in a fraction at a time, and every fraction had to be talked into occupying a space that was smaller than it was, and the technique for doing that involves convincing the artifact that my sea of consciousness is a place rather than a container. Every session felt like swallowing part of a mountain. By day 11, I could not read. Actual characters on a page had stopped resolving, and I sat in a room with a book for an hour and could not make the marks mean anything, and Chang Yun said this was normal and did not elaborate. By day 19, I was seeing the beginning of things, not visions. The world simply looked slightly unfinished at the edges, the way a room looks when the plasterers have gone home, and I understood in a way I could not explain that everything around me was recent. By day 26, I had stopped being able to tell which of my own thoughts had been mine an hour earlier, which is the part I have never told anybody until now. On day 31, it went in the rest of the way, and I could not stand up without help for 2 days afterward, and my father came down and carried me up the path himself, and did not say a word about it then or ever. And then it just sat there, inert, gray, completely dead. A thing that had made a foundation establishment cultivator survive my full-strength palm was now sitting in my head doing an absolutely perfect impression of a paperweight. I asked Chongyun about it. He shrugged with one shoulder, which for a man who has been asleep for 500,000 years is an enormous physical exertion. It doesn't recognize you. It recognized him. He was destined. You are merely determined. He seemed to find this funny. Feed it long enough, and it may change its mind. Artifacts of that age are like cats. So my great prize from the whole Luojin operation, the thing I got a saint injured and a city half destroyed for, was a rock in my head that was less useful to me than it had been to a 19-year-old stable boy. I have made peace with this. It took about 11 months. Changyun paid me a second time, though, and this one mattered. Somewhere in that month, he stopped calling me Junior and started looking at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you're deciding whether to move. And on the last day, he said, "Hold out your hand." He put a jade slip in it. "The Chongyun sword art," he said. "I made it. It took me most of 500,000 years, and I have never found anyone worth giving it to." I opened it. I read 4 lines and had to stop and sit down on a grave, which I hope he forgave. "Why me?" "Because I am tired," said a man who had been asleep for 500,000 years. "And because you brought a Tao artifact into my yard and did not once ask me for a reward." Then I gave him something back, which was not calculated and which turned out to be the best trait of my life. I gave him the nameless art, Chen Huai's fusion, the one I'd named after myself. He read it standing up. Then he sat down. Then he read it again with his eyes closed, which is a thing very old cultivators can apparently do. And when he opened them, he did not look like a sleepy old man anymore. "Where did you get this?" "A friend made it." "Boy." His voice had gone quiet in a way that made the mist stop moving. "This is immortal ancient era construction, not in the style of it, in it. Nobody has written like this since before this dynasty of heaven was poured. So it's good. It may," he said, "allow me to take the next step." After 500,000 years, and he went back into his grave with a copy of it and did not come out for a long time. I walked up out of that valley in the dark, and I did the arithmetic that had been sitting at the back of my head all month, and it was not a comfortable one. Chen Huai's system had produced, as a routine output, on a bad week, in a cell, out of secondhand material, a document that unstuck a supreme adjacent ancestor who had been stuck since before recorded history. That's what a system does. Casually, as a byproduct. And somewhere out there, right now, in a village or a slum or a stable, there was another kid with another one. Guaranteed. The genre does not stop producing them. It cannot stop. That's the entire engine. My one comfort was that at least Chen Huai's system had to be fed. It converted. It didn't create. Because there was one thing I was genuinely afraid of, and I remember saying it out loud on that path in the dark, like a man knocking on wood. Some of these systems just hand out cultivation, straight, centuries of it, in a lump, for free. I really hope there isn't one of those out there. Guess. I came home to find that a woman my own age had decided not to bow to me. Her name was Gu Han, sequence 7 of the family's ranked prodigies, daughter of a Mahayana elder, the sort of person who has been told she is special since she could walk and has never once had cause to doubt it. She was standing in the middle of the main courtyard with her arms folded while every other person present had their head down. "Why don't you bow?" I asked. "Because I'm not afraid of you." "Why aren't you afraid of me?" "I'm not afraid," she said. "I'm just not afraid." Which is not an argument. It is, however, an extremely honest answer, and I've thought about it more than she'd like. Here's what she actually wanted to say, and I know because it was written all over her. She wanted to say, "Your wife ran off with another man." That was the sentence. She'd been carrying it around for 2 weeks looking for a place to put it. She didn't dare, and because she didn't dare, she had to stand there and be brave about something smaller instead, which is how most disasters start. I dropped my pressure on her. It wasn't personal. That is the honest and unpleasant truth of it. 200 people were watching. Half of them had spent a fortnight enjoying my humiliation, and I needed a demonstration more than I needed a cousin. She went to her knees. She threw her killing move anyway, a sword technique her father had spent 40 years teaching her, and it came apart against my palm like a plate hitting a floor. Then I walked forward, and I broke both her knees. Her father was in the gallery. He watched. He did not move, and afterward he was relieved, because it was only the legs, and because he had spent the entire minute expecting to lose a daughter and instead lost some walking. I do not have a joke for that one. Then I turned around and I walked to the center of the Gu family estate, where there is a bell. It is black and white, and it has the yin and yang split into it, and it is older than every building around it. Ringing it summons the family, not the ones present. All of them, members who are 3 provinces away on business, hear it in their teeth and start walking home. I hit it 9 times. By the 9th, the courtyard was full, and my father was standing at the top of the steps, and every ranked sequence of the Gu family was in a line in front of me, and the whole province could hear it. I no longer wish to wait, I said, for the position of divine child of the Gu family. The divine child is not a title you request. It is a thing the family confers, usually on someone in their second or third century, after several decades of quiet competition and a great deal of politics. I was 18 and had been alive for about 7 months. Gu Moyun's uncle came out first, at the Gathering Cauldron realm, a full realm above me, presumably intending to teach the boy a lesson in front of everyone. One heaven-flipping seal. He went into the wall. There was a silence of a very particular quality. All of you, I said, come at me at once. Please hurry. I have things to do this afternoon. Gu Moyun came. Sequence 1. True dragon lineage. The family's actual pride. A young man who had never lost anything in his life. He threw a punch that would have gone through a mountain, and I hit him once, and he went up in a long, clean parabola and landed in a fountain. And then Gu Wufeng, the quiet one, the one everybody had privately expected to get the title, uncrossed his arms and looked at me for a long moment. I can't beat him, he said, to nobody in particular. And he walked away without fighting, which was the smartest thing anyone in my family did that year. Nobody else moved. And then, from somewhere very deep under the estate, in the place where my father actually lives, the bell rang again. 18 times. A decree came up out of the ground on a sheet of light and hung in the air over the courtyard, and there were 4 characters on it. Divine Child, Gu Mingjue. The next one found me. That's the part I want to flag, because it happens more than you'd think. On the southern border of the province, there are 4 small kingdoms: Azure Dragon, Vermilion Bird, Xuanwu, White Tiger. They used to be one country, the 4 Symbols Divine Dynasty, back when they had a supreme to hold it together, and when he died they split 4 ways and their national treasure split with them, 1 mirror each. They have been circling each other ever since, like 4 cats in a sack. That spring, Xuanwu and Vermilion Bird crossed the Azure Dragon border at the same time, which is not a war, that's an execution with 2 people holding the knife. And the Azure Dragon Emperor, who had approximately 11 days before his capital fell, did what small kings have always done. He sent his daughter to a big house with a gift. He'd done it before. He'd sent a princess to my family once already, years ago, and nobody talks about what happened to her. So he sent the good one this time. Ye Xiaowan. 18. The kind of beautiful that gets written into local folk songs, with a cart of treasure behind her and instructions to be agreeable. And 1,000 miles away, in a sect-ranking hall, a young man named Gao Xuan won his 5th-ranked match, stepped off the platform with his hands still shaking from the win, and was told the news by a friend who thought he was doing him a kindness. Gao Xuan had left the Azure Dragon Kingdom a year earlier. He'd been an ordinary nobody with a childhood attachment to a princess, and the emperor had made it politely clear that ordinary nobodies do not marry princesses, and he had gone off to become worth something. 1 year. In 1 year, he had gone from foundation establishment to 5th place on the Limitless Immortal Sex ranking board, which is a list that people spend 80 years climbing. He was 1 match away from being able to walk back home and ask. That old man, he said, in a corridor, in front of witnesses. He actually offered Shaner to a devil like Gu Mingjue. None of this reached me at the time. I want to be clear about that, because the version everybody tells has me orchestrating it, and I wasn't. I was upstairs deciding what to do about a spy report from 3 provinces over. A servant knocked on my door and told me a foreign princess was at the front gate with tribute. Have her leave the tribute and go home. The servant hesitated. Then he grinned, in the way servants grin when they think they're helping, and said, "Young master, she is extremely beautiful. Truly, you should at least look. I have other things to do." And I went back to my paperwork, and that was, according to my family, the single most shocking thing I did all year. I found out later that this became a genuine topic of concern in the estate. There was a meeting. Elders talked about it. The consensus was that the young master's temperament had changed so drastically since the wedding that he now refused beautiful women at the door, and several of them privately concluded I had been damaged by the humiliation and was overcompensating. The truth is much stupider. I had a schedule. Chen Huai was 2 provinces east and about 6 weeks from finding something enormous, and I intended to be standing nearby when he did, and I did not have the afternoon free for kingdom politics. Ye Xiaowan knelt at my front gate. She knelt there for 5 days. I did not know. And I want to be precise about why I did not know, because it is the most instructive thing that happened to me that month. I had said no. Once. In a corridor, without looking up. And after that, no member of my household was going to be the person who raised it a second time, because the last person who had contradicted me in that house had left the courtyard on a stretcher with her father watching. The steward knew. The gate captain knew. 2 elders walked past that gate daily for 5 days and knew. Not one of them told me, and every single one of them was behaving completely rationally. That is what happens when you make yourself frightening. You get obedience, and obedience is not information, and information is the only thing I actually run on. Meanwhile, a crowd was forming. Day 1, it was the gate staff and some servants. Day 2, it was 200 people. By day 3, there were merchants at the edge of the square selling roasted nuts to people who had come specifically to watch a foreign princess kneel at the Gu family's door, and a man had set up a stool. Men in that crowd said things to her. I have read the accounts. I am not going to repeat any of it. She stayed exactly where she was with her back straight and her hands on her knees, and she did not eat. And on the 4th day, she stopped being able to fully close her hands, and she stayed, because her country had 11 days. On the 5th day, an old steward mentioned it to me in passing, at the very end of a report about something else entirely, in the tone you use for a thing that has become part of the furniture. And I stopped, and I said, 5 days? Because that is not normal. Understand what I'm reacting to. A princess kneels for 1 day, that's diplomacy. 2 days, that's desperation. 5 days is a person who has been given a reason to believe it will work, and I could not think of a single reason, and things I cannot explain make me itch. So I pulled the Azure Dragon file, and 30 pages in the section on notable immigrants, there was a young man named Gao Xuan. Foundation establishment 1 year ago, currently 5th on the Limitless Immortal Sect board. I read that line 4 times. Then I read the rest, and the rest is where it stopped being interesting and started being familiar. He'd been buying pill materials in bulk, enormous quantities, far more than any one person could process, and selling finished pills in bulk at a grade a man his age should not be able to reach. Same story with talismans. His alchemy had jumped a full realm above his cultivation. His runecraft had done the same thing. There are only 2 explanations for that. Either the boy does not sleep, or the boy has more hours in his day than everyone else does. I set the file down and said the sentence I would end up saying 11 more times that year. Another one. It's a treasure that improves talent, or it's a space with time dilation, or it's a system. It is one of those 3, always, and all 3 of them are things I want. Then I did the part I'm genuinely proud of. I did not go to the front gate. I sent 2 letters. The first went to an elder of my family with instructions to travel to the Azure Dragon Kingdom and make our interest visible, not to intervene, just to be seen at court, drinking tea, saying nothing. The second went to the Holy Master of Chonghua, who as of that month was mine, instructing him to send 2 elders south to reinforce Vermilion Bird and Zhuanwu, both sides. I propped up both invaders and put a witness in the victim's throne room, because the one thing I could not allow was for that war to be settled by anybody except me. If the Limitless Immortal Sect came down and waved a hand and made the armies go home, then Gao Xuan was a hero, and Ye Xiaowen went back to her palace, and my only lever on him was gone. I needed that kingdom to stay exactly 11 days from falling for as long as I found it convenient. Then I went back to my paperwork and let a girl kneel in my driveway for 2 more days, which I am told the crowd found hilarious and which I am aware was the single cruelest thing I did that month, including the knees. The Limitless Immortal Sect tried. I'll give them that. Gao Xuan couldn't leave because leaving meant forfeiting his ranking match, so he sent 3 of his sect brothers instead, and they arrived in the Azure Dragon Court in very good robes with very good posture and did the whole speech. You exiled a man of the Limitless Immortal Sect. That was your mistake. Nevertheless, out of respect for our brother, we will settle this war for you. Prepare a banquet. The emperor, who was 60 years old and had already begun writing letters to arrange his family's escape, thanked them with tears in his eyes. They came back 1 hour and 10 minutes later. I have read the transcript of that return 3 separate times for pleasure. They walked back into the throne room with their good posture gone, and the senior one had to be asked twice before he could get the words out. Vermilion Bird and Xuanwu did not care. That was it. That was the whole report. They had gone to 2 enemy camps and announced themselves as the Limitless Immortal Sect, and both commanders had listened politely and then declined, and one of them had suggested the young masters go home before the fighting started because it would be a shame if something happened. Nobody in that room could understand it. The Limitless Immortal Sect is a genuine power. Their name works. It had worked for 600 years. It stopped working that week because 2 elders of Chonghua were sitting in those camps drinking tea and saying nothing, and everyone in the tent knew what Chonghua meant, and Chonghua meant Gu. The emperor stopped crying and started calculating, which is what emperors do. Then let him solve it, he said. Let Gao Xuan solve it first. This is the annihilation of a nation. I cannot gamble my country on a boy's feelings, which is how a man loses a princess and a subject in the same sentence. I finally walked out to my own front gate on the 7th morning. She had not eaten. Her knees had gone through the fabric. The crowd was maybe 400 people, and they went silent so fast that I could hear a bird. I stopped in front of her and lifted her chin with a ruler of white spiritual energy because I did not want to touch her and because I wanted it to look exactly as bad as it looked. Truly, I said, a beauty that could topple kingdoms. Am I not, she said, the person you wish to see? Good line, steady voice after 7 days. I revised her upward. She put her forehead on the stone. I am willing to give everything. And I shook my head. You could hear the crowd's opinion form. It went through 400 people like weather. He refused her. He actually refused her. What beauty can the divine child of the Gu family not have? Women must be the very last thing that man wants, which was convenient and also true and also completely beside the point. I don't want you, I said. I want the four symbols realm, all four mirrors, reunited in my hand. Her head came up. That is the foundation of four kingdoms, Ji. Yes. They will never, Ji. They will, because you'll ask them, and because Xuanwu's cavalry is 9 days from your capital. I turned and started walking. Come with me. I'll deal with the Azure Dragon matter. And then I walked very, very slowly. I want to be honest about this too. I strolled. I have never in my life walked slower than I walked across that courtyard, and my own servants were exchanging looks, and it was because I was waiting. Right on schedule, from behind us, a voice cracked across the square. Shaner, don't go! He'd come in on foot, actual road dust, actual torn sleeve, hair stuck to his forehead. He had ridden and ridden for 4 days straight to get there, and he made it, and he got there exactly 1 minute too late, which is the correct amount of too late for the story to hurt. He grabbed for her hand. She flinched away from him. She was standing in my shadow with 400 people watching in her country 9 days out, and she flinched, and his hand closed on nothing. The crowd made a noise. Now. Here is what everybody watching thought was happening. They thought a tyrant had taken a princess and a poor boy had come to save her. Here is what was actually happening. The princess was a receipt. The kingdom was a receipt. I had gone to all of that trouble, propped up 2 armies, spent a holy master's elders, and 7 days of a young woman's dignity, for one reason. Gao Xuan is the big fish. The four symbols realm was something I wanted incidentally on the way because I was already going to be in the neighborhood. He turned to me with his whole face open and I hit him. No conversation. First exchange. A killing palm at full strength. The same one I'd opened with at my wedding. You dare to steal my woman? I said it because it was the line he needed to hear. Everything I said to that boy for the next 2 days was chosen to do something to him. He answered well, genuinely. A 100-foot cyan sword came up out of nothing and it had spirit in it. An actual sword will at the Dao Palace realm, which is a gathering cauldron feat and which 19-year-olds do not have. My palm went through it. 10 talismans, vast righteousness grade, thrown in a fan. Ash. And then, because he had one, and because he had been saving it, a gathering cauldron talisman. A pillar of fire went up out of that courtyard tall enough to be seen from the next city and hot enough that the front row of the crowd had to run. It went out like a candle, and I watched something happen to his face that I had gone to a great deal of trouble to arrange. That one palm shattered a belief he had been building for a year. Every day of those 12 months he had gotten stronger than the day before, without exception, at a rate no one around him could match. He had climbed a ranking board full of men 4 times his age. He had a private engine and a secret and a destiny, and somewhere in there he had quietly concluded that he was going to win. That is the belief I was aiming at, not his chest. And then the iron pagoda woke up. I did not see it come out, because it did not come out. A phantom of a tower simply existed between us, 6 stories of rusted iron with the top level missing, and my killing intent slid off it like water off glass. He hadn't summoned it. He looked as surprised as I was. It had done it by itself. There it is. There's the golden finger. He'd found it a year ago, rusted, in a place he shouldn't have been. 6 levels. He'd opened 2. The first level runs at 10 times the speed of the outside world. The second level runs at 100. That is where the year went. That is where all of it went. Every rank, every pill, every talisman. He had been living 6 years for every one of ours and paying for it with alchemy because every entry into that tower costs a mountain of spirit stones and the tower does not take promises. He got his breath back and stood up straight and said the thing that every single one of them says. Gu Mingjue, do you dare make a 3-year pact with me? 3 years. Meet me here in 3 years. It's practically a religious observance in this world. And it works because the villain always says yes. Because the villain is arrogant, and because the author needs the time skip. I laughed at him, not cruelly. I was genuinely delighted. You can't survive 1 palm from me today, I said. Why on earth would I wait 3 years for you? And that was when the message arrived from his sect brothers telling him the war could not be settled, and 40 seconds after that, the second message, from his own master, declining to come. His master's reasoning was written out very politely. Jade Splendor Holy Land supports the Azure Dragon Kingdom, and Jade Splendor is now Gu. Your difficulty with the Gu family is a matter between peers of the same generation. Handle it yourself. He stood in the middle of my courtyard in front of 400 people and read a letter from his teacher explaining that he was on his own. I watched him read it. I made sure to be watching. Then he ran. He got out on a gathering cauldron shield talisman, which is an absurd thing for a boy his age to be carrying, and which tells you how carefully he had prepared for a fight he had no way of predicting. I let him go about 90 miles. Then I caught up, because I fly faster, and he did the only smart thing available to him. He vanished, not teleported. Vanished, in the sense of ceasing to be anywhere. My seal went with him, which had never happened before, and I stood in an empty crater in a forest with my hand still out and understood that the iron pagoda was not a phantom that defends him, it's a place. He'd gone inside it. So I sat down on a rock. I want to describe the next 14 hours honestly, because they were the most boring and most important of the entire year. I sat on a rock in a forest. I did not search. I did not tear up the ground looking for a door. I sent no one and called no one. I ate a meal. At one point I did some breathing exercises. Because there was exactly one fact that mattered, and I had it. He'd said the tower runs at 100 times. He hadn't said it runs forever. Nobody builds a shelter with no door, and nobody who has been grinding pills for a year to afford entry fees can afford to be inside indefinitely. I don't believe he can stay in there forever. 14 hours later, the air split about 60 feet away, and Gao Xuan stepped out into a forest at dusk, and I was sitting on a rock 10 feet from him with my chin on my hand. I have never seen a human being deflate that fast. So, I said, one day, that's your ceiling. Inside, for him, it had been 100 days. He had spent 15 of them making a batch of Earth Shield talismans specifically for this, and the rest cultivating at a rate that had pushed him up a level, and he had come out at what he calculated was the safest possible moment, and I was on the rock. He threw the first talisman and ran. I want you to understand the shape of the next 2 hours because it is the closest thing to a horror sequence I have ever personally conducted. He runs. I catch him. The talisman fires. A wall of stone the size of a house comes up between us, and by the time I'm through it, he's 4 miles ahead. I catch him again. He fires the second one. 10 talismans. 10 interceptions. The third one he threw over his shoulder without looking, into a river valley, and the stone wall came up out of the riverbed and took the water with it. I went through it and came out the other side wet to the knee, and he was already a speck. The tower that flickered up around him when I caught him was solid iron, and it rang when I hit it, and he actually laughed. The fifth one he set up properly. He'd had 4 minutes to think, and he used them, and he put the talisman down behind him at an angle so the wall came up as a ramp and threw me 30 feet into the air on my own momentum. Genuinely clever. He got 11 miles out of it. The tower that time was iron with light coming through the seams. The seventh one he wasted because he panicked because he had started doing sums about how many he had left. It went off 8 feet in front of him, and he had to run around his own wall. By then you could see the trees through the tower. The eighth one did not stop me at all. The stone came up thin, like a thing made by somebody tired, and I walked through it, and when I hit him, the tower took about a full second to appear, and it was a rust-colored suggestion of a shape, and it did not ring. He noticed. That's the part. He looked back at it while it was fading, and I watched him work out what it meant, in a burning field, at a dead run, with nowhere to be. His plan was Qingqing City, 90 li east, where combat is forbidden by a treaty even immortal families observe. 90 li is nothing. On an open road, he covers that in 8 minutes. He never got closer than 60. His plan was Qingqing City, 90 li east, where combat is forbidden by an ancient treaty that even immortal families observe. 90 li is nothing. He could have covered it in 8 minutes on an open road. He did not get there because I was not chasing him. I was in front of him, shredding each talisman with black sword chi as it deployed, and hurting him in a very slow curve away from the east. And in my head the entire time, over and over, cold as arithmetic. The phantom is weaker every time. Its energy is finite. A few more. On the 9th talisman he stopped running. He turned around in the middle of a burning field with his robes gone and one arm hanging wrong, and he screamed at me, "If I don't die today, I will grind you into dust. Do you hear me? I will find your family and I will take everything from you. I swear it on my life." And I said nothing. There's a rule about this. Villains die from talking. It happens constantly. The villain has the hero on the ground and cannot resist making a speech, and the speech takes 11 seconds, and 11 seconds is exactly how long the hero needed. I have never in my life given one of them 11 seconds. I raised my hand, and a chariot pulled by 4 azure phoenixes came down out of the clouds between us. She stepped off it in white and silver, and the temperature of the field changed, and I recognized what she was before I recognized who she was, because there is a specific quality to people from the old lineages, a kind of Polish. Saintess Tianxuan. Tianxuan Holy Land, Kundao Province, 4 provinces away, a lineage that traces back to the ancient immortal era, without a break. "I have been watching for some time," she said. I simply feel that this young man should not have to die like this. Which is a beautiful sentence, and complete nonsense. She had been watching for 2 hours. She had watched a rusted tower eat 9 killing strikes. She had done exactly the same arithmetic I had, and arrived at the same conclusion, which was that the boy was carrying something that 8 attacks from a vast righteousness cultivator without complaint, and she wanted it. Everybody wants the tower, that's the whole plot. The difference between her and me is that I was honest about it in my own head. Move, I said. She did not move. She was at the 3rd level of vast righteousness, one below me, and she had the most refined comprehension of the Tao I had ever personally stood in front of. Better than mine. Better than Gu Wufeng's. And Gu Wufeng is the most naturally gifted person in my family. And it did not matter even slightly. She put up a galaxy. An actual one, a spiral of crushed starlight the size of a town, and she wrapped it around my primordial god diagram and tried to strangle it, and it held for 4 seconds, and then my diagram simply expanded and her galaxy came apart at the seams. That is what a foundation is. She had better technique and a purer path and 1,000 years of an immortal lineage behind her, and I had 19 years and the Gu family's resources, and mine was a bigger stack. Her spirit disk, Mahayana grade, went into pieces. Then her 2 maids started setting formation flags, which is a good instinct, and I opened my mouth and used the only word I have. Stay. The Gu family has a technique that older families call words becoming law. You say a thing and the world checks whether you have the right to say it. Most of my ancestors know several characters. Some of them know a sentence. I know one word. I have been able to say it since I was 12, and I had used it 4 times in my life at that point. Both maids stopped in midair with their flags out. I put a black sword through both of them. Tianxuan burned everything she had, every defensive treasure, every prepared talisman, every card, all at once, in about 2 seconds, and when the last strike came down, she carved a character into her own palm to block it, and the palm went with the block. She got out, minus an arm. I watched her chariot go over the mountains with 1 phoenix dead and 3 limping, and I said, out loud, to a field with nobody standing in it, "You ran fast. Never mind, you aren't that important." That is the single most expensive sentence I said all year, and I have paid for it in ways I am still paying for. Also, obviously, I put a chasing immortal seal in her while she was busy carving up her own hand. I told you, it never once failed on anybody who mattered. With her gone, I went back to work. Gao Xuan was on his knees in the grass, and I put sword chi through his brow and into his sea of consciousness, and his soul started coming apart in layers, and it was over. And then the iron pagoda ate the sword chi and put him back together. I want to be precise about my emotional state at that moment. I said out loud, in a burning field, to a rusted tower, "You're disgusting." Because that is not a defensive artifact anymore. That is a thing that took a lethal attack, absorbed it, converted it, and repaired the soul it was aimed at. There is no category for that. My family has an entire mountain full of artifacts, and none of them do that. So the tower came out, physically this time. 6 stories of rust rose out of his forehead and stood in the field between us. Actual iron, actually there, and it caught my next palm on its side and rang like a temple bell. And then it stopped being a tower and became scrap. That was the sound of a Tao artifact spending the last of itself, and I have heard it exactly twice in my life, and both times were that year. I walked over and put my hand on his head and soul-searched him properly. And I got fog. Everything up to a year ago was clear. Childhood, the kingdom, the princess, the humiliation at court, the road out. And then, at the moment he found the tower, the record went white, like a page somebody had left in the sun. It was protecting his secret while it was actively dying. I have never respected an object more, so I started crushing his skull instead, which I recognize is not a sophisticated approach, and the tower's last spark threw me off him, and the last talisman in his sleeve fired by itself. He went straight down, 50-60 miles straight down, through rock, through the roots of a mountain range, and landed on a ledge above an abyss of lava that nobody in this world had seen for 600,000 years. I know what he saw because I was there 11 minutes later. It was a shaft with no bottom, and around its walls, layer on layer, were chains, thousands of them, each link carved with rules, all of them converging downward, all of them pinning something at the bottom that had once been a person, a withered figure, chained at the wrists, the ankles, the throat, and 11 other places. And when Gao Xuan landed, it opened its eyes. Then it saw the mark on him. The entire cavern shook. Lava went up the walls. And a voice came out of that thing with 600,000 years of concentrated hatred in it, and what it said was not a threat. The Gu family's chasing immortal seal. A pause. Gu family. Its name was Zhao Hongbo. It plucked my seal out of Gao Xuan's forehead like a man removing a splinter, which nobody had ever done, and then it made him an offer. a mantra, a strand of its own will to ride along inside him and personally direct his cultivation, which for a young man in his position is the difference between climbing a mountain and taking a chair up it. Price, get me out. Gao Xuan said yes in about a second and a half, and I don't blame him. He'd been hunted for 2 days by a man he could not touch and abandoned by his sect and his teacher, and something at the bottom of the world had just told him he was worth saving. 10 drops of essence came out of the chained thing and started assembling into a crimson figure on the ledge, a projection with enough substance to actually act, and then I came down the shaft. And I stopped, about halfway, because I recognized the chains. I knew that formation. I had seen the diagram for it in my family's archive when I was 14, in a section I was not supposed to be in, on a page with no explanation attached. The Immortal Burial Formation, Gu Family Construction. I asked my father about it later that night through the mind link, and he answered without hesitating, which is how I know it was true, and how I know he'd been waiting for me to ask. 600,000 years ago, an ancestor of ours woke up, went south, sealed something under a mountain, and went back to bed. There is no record of why. There is no record of what. There is only a note about which token operates the lock, the Divine Child token, which had been on my belt for about a month. So I walked the rest of the way down that shaft like a man walking into his own storeroom, and every chain in that place turned toward me and bowed. The crimson figure, 10 drops of essence deep and 1 drop from complete, started screaming as the chains began refining it. You, Gu Family Brat DJ. Hello, I said. I want to be clear that I did not enjoy the next part. I did make a point of it though, and I made it slowly, and the reason was practical. I needed to know what was down there and how much of it was left, and things in pain are talkative. He talked. Then, at the end, when there was almost nothing of the projection left, he stopped being informative and got honest. Gu Family Brat, if I ever get out of here, the very first thing I will do is find you and kill you. Noted, I said. Then I killed the crimson figure 1 drop short of completion and turned around, and Gao Xuan was standing behind me with his eyes gone scarlet, breaking through to the 8th level of Dao Palace on the spot, which is when I got annoyed and made a joke, and the joke cost me. I looked up at the ceiling of that cavern, at the rock, at the sky 60 miles above it, and I said, why don't you just push him all the way to vast righteousness while you're at it? And a stream of qi came down through 60 miles of solid stone and went into Gao Xuan and pushed him all the way to vast righteousness. I stood there with my face doing something I could not control. Can't take a joke, huh? I said. Damn it. So now I was fighting a man who had gone up 2 entire realms in under a minute in a hole in the ground with his master's will fresh in his head. He threw everything he had. It was, genuinely, a good strike. A year of grinding and 100 days a week of subjective time and a dead tyrant's guidance, all in one line. My primordial god diagram swallowed it whole and did not ripple. He stood there breathing hard with his arms down. How, he said, can the gap still be that big? And then, quieter, working it out as he said it. Even if I got out of here, even if I caught up, even at the same realm, I'd still be no match for you. He laughed. 2 syllables. Heh heh. And then something left him. I need to describe this carefully because it is the single most important thing that happened to me that year, and there is no proof of it anywhere. I did not see anything. There was no light, no sound, no departing shape. What there was a change in the room, the way a house feels different the moment the power goes out, before you've noticed the lights. Something that had been in that young man was no longer in him. Down at the bottom of the shaft, the chained thing said, to itself, in a tone of complete disgust, without faith, there is nothing. I brought the divine diagram down. Nothing interfered, no treasure activated, no senior appeared, no sudden inheritance, no hidden bloodline awakening, no last-second teleport array. The sky did not object. For the first time in 2 days, an attack of mine simply arrived. Ye Shaowan, he said, see you in the next life. Then he was gone, and I checked the corpse. I checked it 11 times. I checked it with 3 different techniques, and then I stood there for a full minute doing nothing before I let myself breathe out. And here is the law I took out of that hole, the one that ran the rest of my life. That boy's golden finger saved him at least 5 times in 2 days. 5. That's 5 lives, spent in 48 hours, on a vast righteousness cultivator who wasn't even trying particularly hard. And in the end, it wasn't my strength that killed him. Something I could not see left his body, and then he died like anybody else. Was that luck running out? Was it fate cutting him loose? Or is it this? If I take away a child of destiny's belief that he has a future, can I kill him? I have tested that hypothesis 4 more times since. It has never once failed me. I came home carrying a dead Dao artifact in a bag like a man bringing back a fish. My father met me in the corridor, which he does not do, and looked at the bag and said, show that to Chang Yun. I was going to. Show him today. Ye Shaowan was waiting in the hall. She'd been in my house for 9 days by then, and in that time she'd been given rooms, food, servants, and absolutely no information, and she had spent all 9 days sitting very straight in a chair, waiting to find out what she'd been bought for. I put a chasing immortal seal in her on the way past, out of habit, the way you lock a door. Then I looked at her properly for the first time. And I mean properly, with everything I had, running her through every method my family teaches for spotting a hidden physique or a sleeping lineage or a fate-marked constitution. There was nothing. She was a very beautiful, very brave, entirely ordinary young woman, which was disappointing because I had gone to a great deal of trouble. So I said, in the flat voice I use for delivering test results, "Do you know that your brother Gao Xuan is dead?" I said it to see what would happen. That is the entire reason. I wanted a spike. Grief cracks people open, and if there was anything sleeping in her, that was the cheapest way to wake it up. So I told a girl the boy she'd grown up with was dead, in a corridor, in one sentence, and then I stood there and watched her like a man watching a gauge. She made no sound at all. Her hands closed on the arms of the chair and did not let go, and nothing woke up. "Completely useless," I said, and walked out. I have thought about that sentence more than almost anything else I said that year. Not because it was cruel, although it was, but because I said it about a person and meant it as a measurement, and I did not notice myself doing it until much later. I got about 40 feet down the corridor. Then the light started behind me. It came out of her chest, straight up, through the roof of my house and through the clouds, and it kept going, a column of white so bright that people in cities 200 miles away came out into the street to look at it. My father was standing next to me before I'd finished turning around, and my father does not hurry anywhere. 7 skill exquisite heart, he said. It's a top-grade physique. There are maybe 4 recorded in the last 100,000 years, and its signature property, the thing that makes families go to war over it, is that any child born of it inherits it. Not sometimes. Always. Which is why my father then looked at me with an expression I can only describe as businesslike. I got there before he did. "You should take her," I said. There was a pause of a quality I will remember on my deathbed. "You brat," said the head of the Gu family. "What exactly are you saying to me? I do not have that kind of fetish. Anyway, Chang Yun." I took the dead iron pagoda down into the land of slumber and put it on the ground, and the ancestors woke up in stages, and the noise they made was frankly undignified. "A Tao artifact. Another one? He's brought another one. 12th, get up. The boy has brought another one." "In 100,000 years," said a voice from a mound so old the number had worn off it. "I have personally seen two, and this child has now carried both of them into my yard within the same season." The 12th ancestor started calling me sworn brother around this point, which I found alarming, and asked to be invited along next time, which I found more alarming. Chang Yun looked it over for about an hour and gave me the verdict. It was not made, it was born, an innate Tao artifact, formed on its own out of the world, which is a category so rare that my family's records treat it as a rumor. It was not dead either, it was empty. "It runs on offerings," he said. "It always did. That boy did not own it. He rented it. So I fed it spirit stones. Top grade. 100 of them, in a pile, on the floor of a sealed chamber, and the tower drank them. There is no other word. They went gray and crumbled, and the rust on the tower's lowest level brightened by a shade you could barely see. The door did not open, so I put in 1,000. Let me put 1,000 top-grade spirit stones in context. That is the entire annual tribute of a mid-sized vassal family. That is 1/4 of the Azure Dragon Kingdom's national revenue. Families have been destroyed over less, and I poured them onto a floor and watched them turn to powder in 11 minutes. The door did not open. Another 1,000. Then 5,000. Then, when I had run through everything in my personal accounts and everything in my mother's estate and everything I could liquidate without a signature, I opened the mind link to my father and said the sentence that started the second best running joke of my life. "Father, I need money." "How much?" 80 million. There was a silence on the link. "Tianxing," said the head of the Gu family. "Have you started a business?" He filed the request under his own name, because a request that size from an 18-year-old triggers an automatic review, and a review means the Treasury Hall, and the Treasury Hall means 11 elders and a very old man with a ledger. I was not invited. I went anyway, and I stood at the back, and I did not say a single word for 40 minutes, which is the longest I have ever kept my mouth shut. 80 million top-grade spirit stones. Yes. For what purpose? No purpose is stated on the requisition. I can see that. I am asking what the purpose is. No purpose is stated on the requisition. That went around 3 times. Then the ledger keeper, who is 400 years old and has never once raised his voice, laid out the comparisons, which I had not seen, and which shut me up as effectively as it shut up everybody else. 80 million is the total tribute of every vassal family in the eastern half of the province for 6 years. It is more than the Gu family spent on the reconstruction after the War of the 9th Cycle, adjusted. It is roughly what it cost to raise a saint from birth, twice, including failures. An elder I have known my whole life said, without any malice in it at all, the divine child has held the title for 6 weeks. He has already annexed a holy land, destroyed a city, and lost a wife in public. I do not question his ability. I question whether anybody in this family is currently telling him no. That was a fair question. That was, in fact, exactly the right question, and if anybody had followed it up, I do not know what I would have said. And then a voice came up through the floor of the treasury hall. It came from underneath, from the direction of the valley, and every man in that room went silent the way a room goes silent when the building itself makes a noise it should not make. 1 billion spirit stones makes you unhappy? Long pause. Hurry up and prepare 100 or 200 billion. There will be plenty of use for money later. Nobody argued with that. Everybody went home and had a lie down. My father, incidentally, was distracted throughout that conversation because he could hear somebody crying somewhere in his house and could not identify the source. Shaner ate some spicy food, I told him. Ah. He then suggested, in the tone of a man discussing crop rotation, that we should consider grafting the 7-skill exquisite heart into the family line. Onto her side or mine, he wasn't fussy. It is simply a matter of having a child. Once the physique is used, it is discarded. And I said no. I want to log this properly because it is the one line I never crossed and because my reasons were not good ones. I did not refuse because it was monstrous, although it was. I refused because of what I actually want, which I have not told anybody and which I will tell you now. I do not want to run the Gu family. I have no interest in the chair. What I want is to end up in that valley out back, under a mound with a number on it, as one of those voices that wakes up when there is noise in the yard, and you do not get into that valley by borrowing. Every single thing under those mounds walked there on its own legs. A path built out of other people's physiques is a rented path, and rented paths have landlords. So, 80 million spirit stones went into a rusted tower over the course of a week, and the first door opened. I did not walk in. I want that on the record, because every single protagonist in every single one of these stories walks straight into the newly opened mystery door alone at midnight, and it is why they keep needing to be rescued. I went down to the land of slumber and asked the 19th ancestor to stand outside and hold the entrance. He came up, looked at the tower, said, "Fine," and stood there. Then I went in. It was white. It was empty. It was a room about a mile across with nothing in it at all, no formation, no inscription, no furniture. I walked the whole perimeter twice and found precisely nothing and spent 10 days in there being extremely disappointed. Then I came out, and outside, 1 day had passed, 10 to 1. 10 days of cultivation for 1 day of the world, in a room with no distractions, for the low, low price of 10,000 top-grade spirit stones per visit. I sat down on the floor of that chamber and laughed for a while, because I had spent 80 million on it, and my father was going to ask what it did, and the honest answer was that I had just bought a very expensive room where time is cheaper. With this thing, I said out loud, even a pig could become a saint. The second level runs at 100 to 1. I would eventually feed it 10 billion. At the time, 80 million felt like the ceiling. It is genuinely funny to me now. It was not even the down payment. While I was buying real estate, my investment was performing beautifully. The reports came in every few days and I read all of them, and I want to walk you through one batch because it explains the shape of my whole strategy better than anything I could say directly. Chen Huai was ambushed by the Huangshan sect, 11 of them, on a road over a grudge involving the young sect master whose face he had removed the previous month. He killed all 11. The survivors' families put a bounty out, and the chase pushed him 300 miles north, and 300 miles north is Yao race territory, where humans are food. And in there, running from a bounty, he ran into a Mahayana demon, who killed his pursuers for him, and befriended him. Of course, obviously, that is the only possible outcome. He gets chased into a place that should kill him, and the thing that lives there adopts him, and within a week they are drinking together, and the demon is teaching him a divine ability that his race does not share with humans under any circumstances. And then Chen Huai, being Chen Huai, put the ability into his system, improved it, and handed the improved version back as a gift. The demon nearly cried. I got a copy of both versions in the same report. I want you to hold on to how good that deal was for me, because it's about to stop being funny. Every ambush he survived made him stronger. Every friend he made handed him something rare. Every time somebody tried to kill that boy, my library got bigger, which is why the last line of my own notes on that batch reads, in my handwriting, cold as a bill. The moment I can no longer use his system is the moment he dies. There was a second thing in that batch, and it was smaller, and it bothered me more. Liu Ruolan had stopped answering him, not dramatically. She still traveled with him and still spoke to him and still smiled at the right times. But he had started reaching for her hand at night, the way people do, and she had started being busy, and there is a limited supply of ways to be busy on a mountain road. She had not held his hand once since the night they escaped. He hadn't noticed yet. He was going to. I went to see her in person, once, in the middle of all this, and it is the only time I did it, and it is the thing I would use if I had to explain to a stranger what kind of person I had become. They were camped by a cold spring in the eastern ranges. She was at the bottom of it, cultivating, because the absolute yin body works best in water that hurts. Chen Huai was up on the bank, keeping watch, so I came in from above, over the ridge, silently, and I did not walk to the spring. I opened the iron pagoda at the bottom of the pool and pulled her inside. Understand the geometry. There is a pocket of space 1 mile across sitting at the bottom of 6 feet of water, and it does not exist to anyone outside it, and time inside it runs 10 times slower than the world. She came out of the water into a white room and nearly took my head off before her eyes adjusted. Report, I said. We were in there for 10 hours. 10 hours of debrief, item by item, what he'd found, who he'd met, what the demon had taught him, what he was afraid of, which of his techniques had names and which didn't. I made her repeat 2 of them until she had them exactly right, because a paraphrase technique is worthless. And at the end she said, he has 6 bottles of Thunder Spirit liquid left. How many can you get? He gave me 3. I haven't dared use any of them. I took all 3, then I put her back in the water. She surfaced with her hair plastered down, and Chen Huai was standing at the edge of the pool with his hands cupped around his mouth, calling her name down into the water for the 4th time because he had gotten worried. She had been gone 1 hour. He pulled her out and looked at her and said, with total sincerity, "You've gotten even more beautiful." I was still standing in a tower at the bottom of that pool, 4 feet under his boots, close enough that if the space had been real, I could have reached up and touched his ankle. That is the closest he ever got to me while I was hunting him, and he spent the whole hour shouting into the water. The trap for the sword went in a month later, and it is the best thing I did that year. Chen Huai had located Songbao's immortal cave. Not from the ring, obviously, since the ring had gone quiet, but the way anybody finds these things, which is by noticing that people keep disappearing. 7 Stars Mountain Range, Tianxing Dao Province. First, a Chengqing sect elder went in and did not come out. Then the elder they sent to find him. Then a Yaoguang Holy Land elder who was too senior to be sent anywhere and who went out of curiosity. 3 vanished elders is not a mystery in this world. 3 vanished elders is a real estate listing. I already knew, obviously. I owned the previous tenant. I had known for 4 months and had let the notices pile up because a treasure everyone is looking at is a treasure everyone gathers around, and I needed a crowd. But before he went in, I needed him to accept a gift. So Liu Ruolan handed him a jade slip at a roadside stall and said, "I bought this off a peddler. 2 spirit stones. It's probably nothing, but the old man swore it was a sword art. It was the Changyun sword art, written by an ancestor of mine over 500,000 years, never taught to anyone, given to me personally by its author." Chen Huai glanced at it and set it down. I nearly put my fist through a table. "I've hit a wall," he told her apologetically. "It isn't the material. My system says the output has exceeded what this world can carry. To go further, I need to upgrade it to the 2nd level, and to do that, I need to feed it a technique of equivalent grade, and there isn't one, not in 3 provinces. I've looked." Then, because he was fond of her and did not want her to feel stupid about her 2 spirit stones, he picked the slip back up and put it away. Ding! She heard him stop walking. She told me the sound he made was not a word. System upgraded to level 2, and now, at last, he had a partner of equal grade to fuse with. A progress bar started that would run for a month, and at the end of it, there was going to be a sword technique built out of a nameless immortal ancient art and a 500,000-year masterwork, and it was going to be the best thing anyone in this era had ever made. He was so happy. He walked for 3 days grinning at nothing. He had a whole daydream about it, which I received in full because she was standing next to him when he had it. He was going to finish the sword and perform it for her under an open sky, and she was going to understand what he had become, and she was going to run to him. He was building my sword. He worked on it for a month at level 2, at his own expense, with his own hands, out of a manual I had personally chosen, in order to impress a woman I had personally installed. I have done more impressive things since. I have never done a meaner one. I arrived at 7 Stars City in a carriage pulled by fire phoenixes, and I did not stop at the gate. That was deliberate. There were 40 guards on that wall, and a formal registration procedure, and a queue of Holy Land delegations waiting their turn, and I went over all of it at about 200 feet and put down in the central square. The city had filled up. Every sect within 1,000 miles had sent someone because 3 elders had vanished into those mountains, and everybody had done the same arithmetic. There were probably 9 saints in that city that week. I got about 11 steps. Gu Mingjue? A shirtless man came down the main street with a white tiger walking beside him, and the crowd got out of the way with real enthusiasm. Zhang Bao, of the Wang family, Saint Realm, One of those men who has organized his entire life around fighting and has therefore never in his life had to develop a personality. I heard you came out here to chase after your runaway wife, he said, loud enough for the whole square. But you're here for the immortal cave, aren't you? Ha! Which is it, divine child? The treasure or the woman? Very good. Genuinely. 2 insults in 1 sentence and a fight offered at the end of it, and my coachman got down off the carriage. I should explain the coachman. When I became divine child, the family assigned me an escort, and Gu Moyun, Sequence 1, True Dragon Lineage, the young man I had put into a fountain, requested the position personally, not as a punishment. He asked, I have never entirely understood why, and I have never asked, because some questions cost you the answer. Let me handle it, Gu Moyun said, already walking. One of us is enough. There's no need for 2. He held a saint for 100 exchanges. The square could not process it. There was a running commentary going the entire time, and most of it was some variation of, that is the driver. Look at him. That is the man who parks the carriage. Then Zhang Bao got frustrated and threw a full-power strike past him at me, and Gu Moyun stepped into it. He did not block it. He took it. In the chest, at his own realm -1, because letting it reach me would have meant a breeze touched the divine child in public. He landed on his knees on the flagstones and did not go down further. And I stopped smiling. I said one word. Fixed. Zhang Bao stopped. I want to explain what the crowd understood, because they understood it faster than I did. The Gu family's words become law has a well-known limit. It works downward. It works on people beneath you. In the entire recorded history of my family, it had worked on an equal exactly once, and the man who did it is a name people say quietly. I was at the vast righteousness realm. Zhang Bao was a saint. He could not move his eyes. I walked over, and I put black sword chi through the air at his forehead, and the only thing that saved him was a defensive disc his family's Mahayana guardian had hung on him at birth. It came away with a black dot burned into the exact center of it. He left the city that night. He did not stay for the immortal cave, which he had traveled 2 provinces to reach. Somebody who was there said his hands were shaking on the reins. In the square afterward, an old man who had been drinking through the entire thing said the sentence that ended up in every report about me for the next 2 years. That isn't ruthlessness. That boy is cultivating an invincible belief. He was right, and he was wrong about the direction. I wasn't cultivating it in myself. I was installing it in everybody else, so that the next time somebody with a destiny came looking for a fight, he would have to get past a rumor first. 2 other things happened in that square, and I only learned about one of them at the time. The first, a young man in the robes of the Heaven Sword sect removed the head of a merchant for saying something mildly disrespectful about his sect in the middle of a crowded street, in the middle of the afternoon, and walked off. Nobody stopped him. That is simply what the world was like, and I mention it because people describe me as if I invented it. The second was a conversation on a balcony overlooking the square between a young man with a black ruler on his back and a woman in a veil. He is the most frightening person I have ever seen, she said. Even the leader of the Soul Clan back home did not make me feel like this. And the young man said, I don't feel that at all. I'm excited. In a world with people like that in it, cultivation actually means something. Long Fei set me as his goal that afternoon. He also, at some point that season, lost Feng Ying. She'd been taken by the ancestor dragon nest and made their dragon woman, and he had gone quiet in a way that his remaining companion found alarming. None of this was in any report on my desk. I had 11 people watching for a mysterious young man who burns people, and none of them were looking at the balcony directly above me. Now, the system. I need to slow down here because everything else in this story is a man with an enormous family beating up people smaller than him, and this is the one part where I did something that had never been done. Nobody has ever taken a system. Not once. There is no record, no legend, no rumor. It is not a divine ability. It is not a magic treasure. It is not stored in the sea of consciousness or the Dantian or the soul, because I had all 3 of those examined. I had my ancestors look at Chen Huai while he was in the cell, the 19th, Chang Yun, 2 others whose numbers I am not permitted to say. They found nothing. A talented young man with a strong foundation and no anomalies of any kind. I tried explaining the concept to my father once, properly. I set aside an evening for it. There is a thing, I said, that attaches itself to a person. It is not in his body. It talks to him. Only he can hear it. It gives him instructions, and when he completes them, it rewards him with cultivation, or techniques, or objects that appear out of nothing. My father nodded. He was listening properly, which he always does, which is one of his few unambiguously good qualities. An inheritance, he said. A soul remnant in an artifact, like the one in that boy's ring. No, not a person. Not a remnant. It has no personality and no history, and it does not want anything for itself. It is a mechanism. Made by whom? I don't know. For what purpose? I don't know. How many of them are there? I don't know. More than one. I have seen two. My father sat with that for a moment, and then he asked the question that ended the conversation, and he asked it gently. Tianxing, how would anyone tell the difference between this thing and simple good fortune? And I did not have an answer. That is the whole problem. That is why nobody has ever caught one. From the outside, there is no difference at all between a boy with a mechanism whispering in his ear and a boy the world happens to like. Both of them find the cave. Both of them survive the ambush. Both of them get adopted by the demon. He laughed at me. Kindly. The way you laugh at a child explaining a dream he had. I tried the ancestors next, which took some arranging. The 12th ancestor, who by then considered us sworn brothers, listened to the entire thing with enormous enthusiasm and then said that in his day, they had called that a fated encounter and there had been 3 of them in his generation alone. And did I want to hear about the one with the turtle? The 19th told me I had been reading too many storytellers' tales, which, in fairness, and Chang Yun, who had been asleep for 500,000 years and who had actually seen the ancient immortal era, said nothing at all for a long time and then asked me one question. When it speaks to him, where is the sound? I said I did not know. He said, find that out, and went back to sleep, and it took me 11 more months in a formation plate to understand that he had been the only one of them who believed me, so I was alone with it, completely. In a world of billions, I was the only person who knew that the thing existed, and I could not prove it to anybody, and every single person I told treated it as a charming eccentricity of a talented boy. And then Song Bao mentioned, in passing, while inventorying his own immortal cave for me, that among the formations he had left in the lower chamber was the Dream of Immortals array. I made him say it twice. It is a Tianji pavilion construction, top grade, and it is not a combat formation. What it does is take the contents of a person's mind and make them physical. Thoughts, memories, fears, given shape, standing in a room, walkable, and the operator can rearrange them, reorganize a memory, modify it, remove it. I sat with that for about 10 seconds, and then everything I had done for the previous 8 months rotated 90 degrees and locked into place. The system is formless. Fine. I cannot see it, hold it, or cut it. But Chen Huai thinks about it, constantly. Every day of his life for 4 years, he has looked at it and talked to it and relied on it. It exists in his memory as clearly as his own hands, and anything in his memory can be made physical. I did not need to find the system. I needed him to think about it in the right room. Chen Huai walked into 7-Star City a month later, believing he could kill me in one strike. He was not wrong to think so. Level 2 of his system had changed the rules on him. Before, a fused ability arrived as a manual, and he had to learn it like anybody else, months of it. At level 2, it arrived finished. He could use it the instant it appeared. He had a month of that stacked up and a sword technique 3 days from completion. Liu Roland tried to stop him at the city gate. I want to be fair here because I have spent a lot of this story being unfair to her. She tried. She had no instruction from me to try. She stood in the road and told him the city was full of saints and that the treasure was a trap and that there would be other treasures, and she meant every word, and she was not doing it for me. He put his hand on her shoulder and said, I've been running for 8 months. I'm done running. So she gave up and walked in beside him, and I watched her decide something on the way through the gate that I could feel and could not read. He got picked up inside of an hour. Zhou Hai of the Huangji Dao sect had been looking for that boy across 2 provinces for the better part of a year, ever since a teenager told him to his face that the body had been fed to wild animals. And here he was, walking down a main street, alive, in a crowd. The old man nearly fell out of the air. What he offered was, honestly, a good deal. Amnesty, sect protection, a position in one of the 4 great sects of the province, resources, a master, and the standing to walk past people like me without lowering his eyes. And he introduced him to Wu Yixuan, the Huangji Dao sect's own prodigy, a young woman with an ice physique and a face like a closed door. Chen Huai looked at her a little too long. If you keep staring like that, she said without any particular heat, I'll take your eyes out. I liked her immediately. That evening there was a banquet at Yaoguang Saint's estate. Chen Huai went as Zhou Hai's guest, which put him at the 4th table with the Huangji Dao sect delegation, which is a considerably better table than a young man in mended robes ordinarily reaches. He was still in mended robes. That's the detail that started it. Zhou Hai had offered to have him dressed, and he had said no, and I understood exactly why, because I had read this scene about 400 times in my old life, and it always goes the same way. A young master of the Yaoguang lineage came past the 4th table on his way to somewhere else, stopped, and looked at him. Elder Chang, you brought your servant to the table? The room did that thing rooms do, where the conversation continues at the same volume and nobody is actually having it anymore. Chen Huai put his cup down and said, say that again. I said Vji. He did not finish the sentence. Chen Huai came over the table without touching it and used something on him that nobody in that hall had ever seen, because nobody in that hall had ever seen anything he used, because he manufactured them. It looked like a wave of gray. It was not fast. It arrived at the Yaoguang young master's chest at about the speed of a man walking, and there was nothing whatsoever he could do about it. And afterward, two saints spent a good part of the evening arguing about what school it had come from. Neither of them was close. It did not kill him. That's the part everybody in that room noticed. It went through a Dao Palace cultivator's defenses like a hand through a curtain and then stopped and put him on the floor and left him entirely intact. He was making a point about control in a room with 9 saints in it at 19 years old, 3 days from being untouchable. Yaoguang Saint himself came over. Everyone braced. He looked at the young man on the floor and then at Chen Huai, and he said, "What is your name?" Everyone noticed. Everyone said, "Who is that?" Everyone put it in a letter, and 3 of those letters ended up on my desk within a week, and one of them offered to introduce me to a promising young talent I might wish to recruit. He was, at that moment, 3 days from the top of the world. He was in a great sex protection with a level 2 system and a sword nobody could survive. If he had stayed in that banquet hall for 1 more week, he would have been out of my reach forever, and I mean that literally. I had run the numbers. And Liu Ruolan was not at the banquet because she had answered a summons and gone somewhere and had not replied to his messages since noon. On the street outside, a young man with a black ruler on his back stopped him. "Friend? Give up on it." "On what?" "That woman. Outsiders see these things more clearly. She isn't interested in you." Chen Huai told me later, at the end, that this was the angriest he had been in his entire life. "Ruolan betrayed her family and her holy land to save me," he said. "She gave up everything. You could not possibly understand." And Long Fei, who had watched her walk away up the street and had recognized the specific quality of the expression on her face, shrugged and went to get dinner. He was right, by the way, and it is the cruelest thing in this entire story. He read her correctly. That particular kind of lightness only happens when somebody is going to see a person they want to see. She was going to see me. Not because she loved me. Let me kill that idea now. It isn't that kind of story. She was going to see me because I was the one person alive she did not have to perform for, and 8 months of performance will do that to anybody. The Immortal Cave sits at the bottom of a shaft under the 7th peak behind a door that 3 elders died in front of. By that week, there were 9 saints camped on that mountain and about 4,000 cultivators camped below them, and the entire operation had bogged down into a negotiation because nobody could go first. That is the actual mechanism of these things, and nobody ever explains it. It was not that the door was hard, it was that whoever opened it would be at the bottom of a shaft, alone, with 8 other saints between him and the sky. Every one of them had run that calculation, and every one of them had arrived at the same answer, which is why an immortal cave that anyone could have entered in an afternoon had been sitting there sealed for 4 months. They had gotten as far as drafting a division of spoils. There was a document. There were seals on it. Chen Huai walked past all of them. Not through. Past. He went in at dusk on the western face, where there is no door and no path and nothing worth guarding, and he was inside the mountain before the meeting on the summit had finished its evening session. The route was clean because Song Bao had drawn it for him, on a map, in his own hand. Delivered by a woman who told him she had bribed it out of an old surveyor for 11 spirit stones and a jar of wine, every pressure plate, every array node, every rotation in the guardian formations with the timings written in the margin. He went down 11 levels in about 40 minutes. On the 4th level, he passed a Chengqing sect elder who had been standing in the same position for 6 months with his hand out. On the 7th, he passed 2 more. He did not stop to look at any of them, and that is the only thing about that descent that frightens me in hindsight, because I would have stopped. And stopping is how you notice that a map that good does not come from a surveyor. At the bottom there was a stone gate with an incantation on it. He read it off the wall, and I am told it went something like, 2 and 4 are the shoulders, 6 and 8 are the feet, and I have never learned what it meant. The gate opened, and on a plinth in the middle of an empty chamber, there was a jade bottle with a drop of true immortal essence in it. The retrieval takes 10 minutes. That's a fixed cost. It's built into the plinth, the treasure comes free at its own pace, and you stand there and wait. So he had 10 minutes with nothing to do, standing next to the woman he loved, at the bottom of the world, at the top of his life. And he decided to fix the thing that had been bothering him for months, which was that she had gotten distant, and that he did not know why, and that he had been carrying one secret from her for 4 years. "Ruolan," he said, "do you know what a system is?" And a cyan sword came through his chest from behind. His first reaction, his actual first reaction, and I received it live, and it is the only thing in this entire story that has ever genuinely made me feel sick, was to shout, "Qingwan, watch out!" He thought she had been attacked too. There was a sword through his sternum, and his first complete thought was that somebody had gotten into the chamber and that she was in danger. Then he turned his head. Her hand was on the hilt. I had given her one instruction about that sword, and I want to explain it, because it is the reason he did not die on the spot. I told her not to channel a drop of power into it. Not one. Push it in as plain metal. She had understood that as mercy or as caution or as something. It was neither. It was because a spirit treasure driven by an absolute yin body at close range through the heart kills a man instantly, and I needed him conscious. She had thought it would be over in a second. She had been counting on that. That was how she had gotten herself to do it at all. So the sword went in like a nail, and it hurt enormously, and it did not kill him, and he had a very long time to look at her. She said her line. She had rehearsed it, and it came out flat and fast, the way rehearsed things do. Chen Huai, I stopped loving you a long time ago. I am Master Gu's woman now. You should have died at that wedding. This is only what was always going to happen, arriving late. And then I dropped down out of the shaft behind her and put my arm around her waist. I did the whole thing, the pose, the timing, the arm. I want you to know that I was aware of exactly how it looked and that I did it anyway because he was about to be the most valuable resource in the world to me, and I needed him in a very specific emotional condition, and I finished the sentence he never got to. Your secret, I said, is nothing more than a system that fuses cultivation techniques, isn't it? His eyes went wide, and inside his head, a voice he had heard every day for 4 years said something it had never said before. Host, I do not know either. This is the first time I have encountered something like this. He started to laugh. The wound in his chest opened wider with it, and he kept laughing, and there was red coming out of his eyes instead of tears, and he laughed until he could not stay upright. And I stood there and thought one thing, with no feeling attached to it whatsoever. Now, the time has come. The dream of Immortal's array came up around him while he was still laughing. That was the point. That was the entire reason for the sword and the arm around the waist and the sentence. A man's mind is a closed house most of the time. It opens exactly once. At the moment everything he believed turns out to be furniture somebody else moved in. You have to catch it open. Songbao lit the formation and then handed me the control plate, and when I raised an eyebrow he explained, and the explanation is important. I can run the array, he said. I cannot navigate another man's mind. The operator has to be the one who understands what he is looking at, or the images mean nothing. You have read this boy. I have only taught him. So I took the plate, and then I was inside Chen Huai's head. I do not have good language for what that room was like. The array does not show you memories on a wall like a play. It builds them, at scale, as places, and you walk through them, and everything you are standing in is somebody's life. It played from the beginning, actual beginning, a hut, a woman's hands, a road. I walked through 11 years of a boy nobody wanted before I got anywhere near the part I needed, and I am not going to describe those 11 years, partly out of a decency I do not otherwise possess, and partly because it would not help. His rage was a red the size of a weather system, and it moved like one, and it wanted very badly to find something to hit. His grief was worse. His grief was a gray that had no edges, and it kept playing the same 4 seconds over and over. Her hand on the hilt. Her hand on the hilt. Her hand on the hilt. And out of the middle of that gray a face had formed, made of the same gray, and it was eating the loop as fast as the loop produced it, and it was getting bigger. I found the moment on the 9th day, 4 years ago, a wasteland at night, no fire, no shelter, a boy of 13, so thin the joints showed, lying in a dry ditch and understanding, in a calm and final way, that he was not going to get up in the morning, and a voice said something, and the boy sat up in the dark and said, out loud, to nothing at all, who's speaking? That's it. That's the binding. That's the first frame of the story I read on my phone, and it had been sealed. The system had taken that memory and locked it away in a corner of his own head, and Chen Huai had handed it over voluntarily because he had been asked nicely by the only thing in the world that had ever spoken to him kindly. He gave it back. That's what got me. It didn't steal it. It asked. I played that memory on a loop for 11 days and learned absolutely nothing. The voice has no source in the frame. It comes from a direction the memory does not contain, so I tried to materialize it. The array failed, not partially. It refused, the way a scale refuses to weigh a mountain, and one of the anchor stones cracked, and I stood in a dark room understanding that whatever made that thing was above every power in the 3,000 Dao provinces, and that included the graves in my backyard. Fine, so I changed the goal. If I cannot take it, and I cannot see it, and I cannot force it, then I do not need to touch it at all. I need the host to let go. The system is bound to a person. A person is made of what he remembers. So I would rebuild the person. I spent 6 months rewriting Chen Huai's memory. I want to say that number again, because when I say it quickly, it sounds like a plan, and it was not a plan, it was a job. 6 months. Every day. Sitting at a control plate in a sealed chamber under a mountain, going through 4 years of another man's life second by second, and changing them, not deleting. Deleting is obvious, the mind notices holes. Editing. A word here. A direction of a glance there. The order of 2 events. Which of 2 people spoke first? I changed the weather in memories where the weather mattered. The system had 4 years of shared history with him, and every single hour of it had to stop being what it had been. I did not sleep properly for 6 months. I ate at the plate. Twice, Songbao had to physically take my hands off it. I am not describing this to be admired. I am describing it because everyone who tells this story says I stole a system, and stealing implies a moment, a snatch, a clever trick. There was no trick. There was half a year of the most tedious work ever performed by a human being, and the reason nobody has ever done it before is not that nobody thought of it. Then 2 more weeks selecting which entities in that head still had a claim on him and pruning them. And then I had Songbao reverse the array, run it backward. Instead of the mind expressing outward, pull the room inward, drain it, and see what is left standing in the bottom when everything else has gone. Everything went out, and in the middle of the empty chamber there was a fluorescence, smaller than a dust mote, dimmer than a bacterium. If I had blinked at that second, I would have missed it, and this entire story would have a different ending. Found it. That is the system. I got down on the floor and put my face about 4 inches from it, and I talked to a speck of silver dust for a while, which is not a sentence I enjoy. Your host has abandoned you, I said. You know that. You watched it happen. Whatever you were made for, he is not going to do it now. Nothing. Your maker made you for a reason. I do not know what it was. I would like to. Entrust it to me, and I will carry it. Nothing. It sat there, silver and inert, doing an extremely good impression of a mote of dust. And then the world outside noticed. At the exact instant the system separated from Chen Huai, a wind crossed all 3,000 Dao provinces. Not weather. Every candle in every province leaned the same direction at the same moment. Old things woke up in terror in 100 places at once and could not say why. And out beyond the sky, in the black, a pair of eyes opened. Gray and white. The pupils were the size of a Dao province. They were not looking at the world. They were looking at me, at a specific room, under a specific mountain, at a 19-year-old with a formation plate in his hands. I have stood in front of my own ancestors. I have had the will of heaven open an eye 100 miles wide directly over my house. Those were events. This was a category. That thing was not a power in this world. It was above the level at which the word applies, and I understood in 1 second that everything I had built was a sandcastle with a foot coming down toward it. And from another direction entirely, a voice said 4 words. You have crossed the line. And the eyes closed. I sat on the floor of that chamber for a long time, because somebody had just told the largest thing I have ever perceived to back off, and it had backed off, and I did not know who, and I did not know why, and I had not asked anybody for anything. I have never found out. I want you to hold on to that. Everything else in this story I eventually got to the bottom of. Meanwhile, upstairs, the world was having a completely different experience. Meng Li of the Ji family finally fought his way to the bottom of the Immortal Cave 2 days later, having spent an enormous sum renting a Tianji Pavilion formation flag to get through the door, and found an empty room and an empty plinth. He stood in there and screamed about the rental fee for some time. Everybody blamed me. Correctly, as it happens, although not for the right reason. 9 saints had spent a month circling that mountain, and the divine child of the Gu family had walked in and taken the immortal essence out from under all of them. Nobody did anything about it. That is the part I want you to sit with, because it is the actual moral of this whole episode, and it is not a nice one. I had just done a thing no being in recorded history had done, and the world's entire response was a rumor that a rich young man had stolen a bottle. The system would not move. I tried everything for 2 days. It sat in the middle of a reversed formation, silver and inert, and it did not respond to spirit energy, or to divine sense, or to being spoken to, and it could not be picked up, and it could not be pushed. In the end, I did the crude thing. I closed the array around it and left it sealed inside, and I carried the entire formation home in a box. Chen Huai was out of it by then. He was breathing. His heart was working. His eyes were open. And he was not in there, and he was not coming back, because 6.5 months earlier, I had gone into the house and moved every piece of furniture and taken out several of the walls. Songbao looked at him for a while. Let me, he said. He was my disciple for 4 years. I would prefer it be quick, and I would prefer it be me. He raised his hand, and tribulation clouds started forming over the mountain, instantly, the moment his intent formed. A supreme raising his hand at a child of destiny, and the sky came to the door in under 2 seconds. Songbao, I said, step down. He stepped down, and I killed Chen Huai myself, casually, with about as much effort as closing a window. Nothing happened. No clouds, no eye, no wind. The sky did not care at all. That is the last piece of the law I had been building all year, and it is the one I have never been able to explain to anybody. When the retribution hunts, it hunts the hand. But it does not hunt me. It hunted Elder Zhang for holding a bowl. It came for Songbao for lifting a finger. It has never once come for me. I have 4 theories. 3 of them are comforting. The fourth involves a pair of gray-white eyes and a voice telling them to back off, and it is the one I believe. His body came apart into light, and I said, to a room with nobody in it, the only eulogy I have ever given. Chen Huai, I've already named your fusion sword technique. It's called Surpassing Immortal. He never got to swing it, not once. He finished it in the 3rd week of the 2nd month and spent the 4th week practicing the forms in an empty field with a stick because he wanted the first real time to be in front of her. I have used it 11 times. It is never lost. And at that exact instant, on the other side of the world, in a village nobody has heard of, a 15-year-old boy who had just been pushed off a cliff by his cousin opened his eyes at the bottom of a ravine. I know the timing because I checked it later, down to the hour, and it lined up, and it has bothered me ever since. He sat up in the rocks with 2 broken arms and said out loud, wasn't I working overtime? Why are my hands so small? Ding. System binding successful. His name was Zhou Lin, and I did not know he existed for another 11 weeks, and by then he had already made his first fortune. You want to know what his system did? It paid him for showing off. That is not a joke, and it is not an exaggeration. He got points for doing impressive things in front of witnesses, and the witnesses had to actually be impressed, and he could spend the points in a shop. His first transaction, lying in a ravine with both arms broken in front of the cousin who had pushed him and 2 farmhands, was to say, with enormous dignity, I am practicing martial arts. I inflicted these injuries on myself deliberately. Show off value +1. Then the beginner's gift package opened and his arms knitted and he went up a realm on the spot and he stood up in front of 3 people who had watched him fall 90 feet and that got him considerably more than 1. The pipeline does not stop. That's the thing I understood standing in that room with Chen Huai's light still going out of the floor. I had spent 8 months and a fortune and 6 months of my life removing one of them and the world had replaced him before the body finished dispersing. I brought the system home in a box and spent the next month running experiments on a speck of dust, and I am going to tell you about them because nobody else in the history of this world has had the opportunity. I talked to it for 9 days. Nothing. I bound my own consciousness to the array and pushed my intent at it in 11 different formats, including the format Chen Huai's memories showed it using with him, and I got nothing. I offered it things. Spirit stones. A technique. The Chasing Immortal seal, which I would genuinely have handed over. Nothing. I threatened it, which was the low point of that month, and I would like it on the record that I stopped after about 4 minutes and felt extremely stupid. Then, on the 22nd day, out of nothing better to do, I put 2 cultivation techniques into the array and left them there overnight, and in the morning, there was a 3rd one. That is the entire discovery, and I nearly missed it. It does not talk, it does not obey, it does not acknowledge that I exist in any way at all, but if you put material in front of it, something in there processes the material correctly to the same standard it used for him. It just does it about 1,000 times slower. 1,000. 2 techniques that Chen Huai would have gotten back over a long lunch took me 2 years and 1 month. I know that number precisely because I ran the first one all the way through as a calibration. It cost me a chamber, a formation master's continuous attention, and 2 years I did not have. So I put the entire array inside the Iron Pagoda. 10 to 1. 2 years became 2.5 months. And when I eventually paid for the 2nd level, at 100 to 1, it became about a week. That is what I actually walked away with. Not a cheat. A very slow, very expensive factory, running in a rented room, staffed by a ghost. Every technique I owned went in. Everything my family owned that I could sign for went in, and it kept producing, quietly, in the dark, for the entire rest of this story. There was one rule I learned in the first month and never broke. I brought an old ancestor near it once to have him look at the array. Just look. And the silver speck started to flicker, not react. Flicker, the way a lamp does when the oil is nearly out, and I got him out of that chamber so fast that I nearly threw a 500,000-year-old man through a wall. I have never let anything powerful near it since. Not my father, not Chang Yun, nobody above the Saint Realm goes into that room, because I do not know whether it was afraid of him, or whether it was getting ready to leave. Then I went and collected on a debt that was 8 months old. I marched the 10 sequences of the Gu family and 1,000 disciples to the front gate of the Jade Splendor Holy Land, and I did not knock, and I did not send a herald. I had a recliner brought. Dragon and phoenix carved into the arms, the kind of furniture that exists to be looked at. It was set down in the open air 200 feet in front of their mountain gate, and I lay down on it, and Ye Xiaowen stood behind it and rubbed my shoulders, because she had asked what she could do, and I had told her, and because it looked exactly as insulting as it was meant to. Holy Lord, I said, at a conversational volume that arrived at their gate as if I were standing in it. Come out here and apologize to the Son of God. They sent a prodigy first. They always do. It is the cheapest way to find out how serious a visitor is. He came off that mountain fast and angry and young, and he had a spear, and he had clearly been told by somebody that this was his moment. Gu Moyun stepped forward without being asked. Let me, he said. It'll be over in a minute. There's no need for two of us. I let him, and I want to explain why. Because it was not laziness. Gu Moyun was sequence 1 of the Gu family. True dragon lineage. The young man everybody in my house had expected to wear the title I was wearing, and I had put him into a fountain in front of 400 people, and he had then requested the position of my coachman. Every single person on both sides of that field knew all of that, so when the divine child stayed on his recliner and the coachman got up, it was not an insult to the Jade Splendor prodigy. It was a demonstration, aimed at my own family, that the man I had humiliated was standing at my shoulder by choice. It took less than a minute. 40 seconds, by the count of the man keeping time on my left, and I have never known whether Gu Moyun was showing off for the Holy Land or for me. Then an elder interfered, which was a mistake with several layers to it. He was at the Gathering Cauldron realm, a full realm above me, and he had been cultivating since before my grandfather's generation, and he came down with a divine ability that had a name and a history. I broke it without getting up. I want that detail preserved exactly. I did not stand. I was lying on a recliner with the girl's hands on my shoulders, and I put out one arm, and his life's work came apart in the air, and then I returned the favor with a heaven-flipping seal, and where he had been standing there was a crater several hundred feet across. In the silence afterward, somebody in the Jade Splendor ranks said, in a voice that carried, "The men who just attacked were senior brothers 300 years old. That boy is not yet 20. The Holy Lord came out. Here's the part that makes this funny instead of merely brutal. He had already surrendered, months earlier, quietly, in a room, in writing, after the old man from grave number 9 went for his walk. Every single one of those elders and prodigies who had just died for the honor of Jade Splendor had been fighting for a holy land that had already been sold. He came down the steps, and he tried, one last time, to keep it private. Young master, my father agreed to submit. Surely there is no need for DJ. When, I said, did your father say he only agreed to submit in private? He knelt on his own front steps in front of his own people. The terms are known in that province as the Pact of Chonghua, because the Holy Master of Chonghua had to witness it and hated every second, and they are these. 9.9 billion top-grade spirit stones payable over a schedule. 40% of the Jade Splendor Holy Land's annual income in perpetuity. Gu family garrisons stationed in every branch and every affiliated sect. Term, 10,000 years. The province had no framework for reacting to that. Holy lands do not get annexed. They get allied with, married into, occasionally defeated in a war that both sides survive. 10,000 years of 40% is not a treaty, it is ownership with a payment plan. The consensus in the taverns, once people got their breath back, was interesting though, and I want to quote it because it was the first sign that the wind had shifted. Unheard of, completely unheard of. But be fair, the Gu family had a reason. If this had happened to the Huntian cult, they would not have taken money. They would have removed the family from the world. That is how a monster becomes a reasonable neighbor, not by being better, by being compared to something worse. And of course, 9.9 billion spirit stones is very close to the sum I was going to need for the tower's second level, which is a coincidence I would like everyone to notice. Then I went south to close out the other account. 2 Mahayana fire phoenixes towed a jade palace over the Azure Dragon capital and set it down on the roof of their palace, which structurally is a thing their palace was not built for and which I did not consider until later. The emperor came out to greet me, and I am told he checked himself in a mirror twice on the way, an old man in his own house adjusting his collar for a 19-year-old. I took the 4 symbols realm, all 4 mirrors. Songbao had already collected the other 3 from Vermilion Bird, Xuanwu, and White Tiger, using the traditional diplomatic method of walking in and taking them, and when the 4 were put together in the same room, they fused back into what they had been before the dynasty split. The room got a great deal larger for a moment, and then I annexed all 4 kingdoms in one sentence at the end of a ceremony, the way you add an item to a shopping list. 4 nations, millions of people, ended as a footnote by a boy who had come for a mirror. Ye Xiaowen watched her country stop existing from a balcony. She had spent 7 days on her knees in my driveway to buy it 11 more days, and it had bought it 11 more months, and now it was over, and everybody in it was alive, which was more than any of the alternatives offered. She said one thing to me afterward. Was it always going to end this way? Yes. From the moment I knelt? From before that. She nodded and went back inside, and did not cry where I could see it, and I have thought about that woman more than she would ever believe. And then, in the middle of the ceremony, there was an explosion behind the palace. The Azure Dragon Kingdom's treasury, which had just changed ownership approximately 11 minutes earlier, went up in a sheet of golden light. 24 Gu family cultivators converged. 3 of them were at the Great Ascension realm, and straight through the middle of them, through a wall, laughing, went a boy of about 15 with a bag over his shoulder. Ha! You bunch of crooks, you think you can gamble on my path? Thank you for the Azure Dragon Kingdom's treasury. He used a Saint Level escape talisman. In this province, a 15-year-old at the Divine Sea Realm burned a talisman that costs more than most sects are worth to escape with a bag of money from a robbery he did not need to commit while shouting a line he had clearly written in advance. My elders started to give chase. Stop, I said. They stopped. That one is mine. Nobody investigates him. Nobody follows him. Nobody so much as writes his name down. Am I clear? I was very clear, because the escape talisman was not the interesting part. The interesting part was that I had watched him for about 4 seconds through a hole in a wall, and his lips had been moving, and he had not been talking to any of us. He had been arguing with something. I followed him for 9 days before I made contact, and they were 9 of the best days of my life. I want to be clear that I have hunted 5 of these people now, and Zhou Lin is the only one I ever enjoyed. The others were work. This one was theater. He talked to himself constantly, out loud, in public. He would be walking down a road in the middle of nowhere and suddenly say, 240? That's robbery, to an empty field, and then argue with the field for a while. On the second day, he stopped at a village and paid for a room with a gold ingot from a national treasury, and when the innkeeper could not make change, he told him to keep it, and then stood in the common room until somebody asked him where a young man got money like that. That was the whole performance. He waited for the question. He had been standing there for 11 minutes waiting for the question. Oh, this? He said. I took it from the Azure Dragon Kingdom's vault, personally, last week. Nobody believed him, which is the funny part, and he got nothing, and he was visibly annoyed about it for the rest of the evening. On the 3rd day, he did it properly. There is a stone in the square of that village, a boundary marker, 4,000 pounds of it, sunk 2 feet into the ground since before anybody's grandfather. Village boys try to move it. It is that kind of stone. He waited for market day. He waited for the square to fill up, and then he walked over, in front of about 300 people, and lifted it over his head with one hand and held it there while he counted, out loud, to 10. Then he put it down neatly in the same hole and walked off without saying anything. That is the correct technique, and he had worked it out entirely by himself. Do not explain it. Do not stay for the reaction. 300 farmers, all genuinely astonished, all talking about it at once, and a boy already 3 streets away. I sat on a roof and watched his mouth move as he read a number nobody else could see, and he pumped his fist. By the 4th day, I had the mechanic because he explained it to himself at least 6 times a day, usually while complaining. He got points for showing off, not for being strong, for being seen being strong by people who were genuinely impressed. Impress a farmer, get a little. Impress a saint, get a lot. Impress a crowd, get a great deal. And then he spent the points in a shop, which sold, as far as I could tell, absolutely everything. I sat on a hillside and thought about that for a long time and arrived at 2 conclusions. The first was that this was the single most dangerous cheat I had encountered because it scales with an unlimited resource. There is no cap on other people's astonishment. The world manufactures it for free. The second was that it could never, under any circumstances, be used against me. Understand why? I watched Song Bao, an actual supreme, be visibly shaken 4 separate times in 9 days by things that boy did, and I felt nothing. Not because I am cold, although I am, but because I had read this exact character. Everything Zhou Lin did to astonish people was, to me, ordinary, expected. Chapter 4. The one thing that system runs on is the only thing I do not produce. He turned up at the Limitless Immortal Sect's recruitment week, and I nearly gave myself away laughing. They have a pillar. Every sect has a pillar. You put your hand on it, and it lights up according to your talent, 1 color per grade, and the results go on a board. Zhou Lin got in the queue, and while he was standing there, he bought something in his shop, and I heard him haggle about it. How much for advanced aptitude? What do you mean tiered? Give me the top one. Top one. I don't care. Then he put his hand on the pillar. 7 colors. The last person to light 7 colors on that pillar had done it 50 years earlier and was now a sect elder with his portrait in a hall. The recruitment officers came off their platform so fast that one of them fell down the steps. 3 separate elders arrived within a minute. The head of recruitment personally offered him a core disciple position, a master, a mountain, and a stipend. And Zhou Lin looked around at them with his hands behind his back and said, "The Limitless Immortal Sect? What kind of crappy little place is that? Host has shown off spectacularly, plus 500. I had to leave. I physically had to walk away over a hill because I was laughing, and there were 40 people in that square who would have noticed. So obviously, I attacked him. Look, I need to be honest about my reasoning because it was not entirely reasoning. Partly, I needed data. Partly I needed to see what the system's emergency options were, because you cannot plan against a cheat until you know what it does when the host is about to die. And partly I wanted to see the face. I dropped a heaven-flipping seal on the hut he was renting. What happened next is my favorite sequence of events in this entire story, and I received all of it, every word, because I had put a seal in him on day 2. Spend 10,000 points to instantly save your life. 10,000? I have 1,000. Where am I supposed to get 10,000 in the next half a second? The host may apply for an installment loan. Annualized rate of 1.25%. There was a pause of about a quarter of a second, in which a house was coming down on him. This system was made by a bank manager, said Jolin. I need a loan. 10,000. Hurry up. Loan approved. He got teleported 4 provinces sideways, and then it got better because I had put a chasing immortal seal in him, and the system detected it. Foreign mark detected on the host. Removal cost, 100,000 points. 100,000? Second loan. Annualized rate of 2.0%. Why is the rate higher this time? Risk assessment has been revised. By the end of that week, a 15-year-old who had been alive in this world for 3 months was 160,000 points in debt across 3 separate loans at escalating interest, with a remaining credit line of 40,000, and he had achieved this by being hunted by a man he had never met. I did not know about the debt at the time. I want that in the record because it is the only genuinely funny thing that ever happened to me, and I missed it live. If I had known that every strike I threw at that boy was putting him further into a hole with a compound interest rate, I would have taken my time, I would have made an afternoon of it, I would have thrown small attacks. Instead, I sent a real one, and here is what I did. There is a sect master in the west at the gazing at Saint Realm, which is a realm you reach after several hundred years of not making mistakes. His sect is old and modestly powerful, and had never once had anything to do with me. I sent him a letter instructing him to personally attack a divine sea realm cultivator. 7 realms below him, a child. The letter said, first strike at 200% of your full strength, and if I hear that you gave any indication, by word or gesture, of who sent you, I will remove your sect from the province. He did it. Of course he did it. Nothing like that had happened in the 3,000 Dao provinces in recorded memory. There is an entire architecture of pride in this world built on the idea that a great cultivator does not swat children, and I took a 300-year-old sect master and used him as a rock. The strike cost Jolin another 50,000 points, and it drove him, running, out of the west and across 2 provinces, and he landed, by luck or by the specific gravity that follows these people around, at the front gates of the Supreme Sacred Academy. The old man on the gate looked down at a filthy teenager who had arrived at full speed with a gazing at Saint Cultivator's killing intent still stuck to his robes, and said the funniest line anybody said that year without meaning to. Who in the world would dare hunt someone from the academy? Me? I would. I was already writing the letter. The Supreme Sacred Academy takes applicants once every 3 years, and there were 400 people in that queue. Jolin walked to the front of it. The registrar on duty that morning was a young man with a black ruler on his back who had been sitting at that desk for 2 weeks as part of an arrangement I still do not fully understand, and who had a personal and deeply held objection to people who cut in line. The back, said Longfei. Brother, please, I'm in a hurry. So are 400 other people. What followed was, according to 3 separate witnesses, 11 minutes of the most shameless negotiation ever conducted at that desk. My baby needs feeding. You're 15. It's a very advanced baby. Look, brother, if I start a gang later, you can be vice leader. Second in command. I'm serious. I'm putting it in writing. He got in. Not because Longfei gave up, but because a supervising teacher came over to find out what the noise was, and Jolin immediately told him that he wanted to take the entrance trial at 10 times difficulty. That is a real setting. It exists because the academy is very old and very proud, and nobody has passed it in 5,000 years, and it is on the form specifically so that arrogant young geniuses can select it and learn something about themselves. The teacher tried to talk him out of it. Longfei, who did not like him, still handed him a healing pill on the way to the entrance, which tells you more about Longfei than anything else in this story. Jolin pushed it back at him. A mere trial? Open your eyes wide and watch. Plus 500. The passage is 9 sections long and it is behind glass because the Academy has always understood that the trial is also a show. He got through the first 3 on nerve. That's the honest assessment, and it is the assessment of the 4 teachers who were watching, and it is written into their log. A boy at the Divine Sea Realm with no formal training walked into a formation calibrated for people 10 times his weight and got through 3 sections by refusing to stop moving, and by the end of the 3rd one, the corridor outside the glass was full, and people were standing on the benches. Section 4 broke his shoulder. Section 5 is where nobody has ever gotten to twice. It is a killing array. It does not test you. It does not measure you. It identifies the weakest structural point in your cultivation, and it puts everything into that point at once. And for 5,000 years, the way it has ended is that a proud young genius kneels down in there and the teachers switch it off. Zhou Lin stood in the middle of it for 11 seconds getting taken apart, and everybody outside the glass could see his mouth moving and nobody could hear him. He was negotiating. I have the transcript because I had a seal in his head and because I have never in my life laughed harder at anything. 10,000 points. A fourth loan, on top of 3, at a rate the system declined to state up front. And the shop item he bought with it was not a weapon or a shield. It was 1 second of the array's own control authority, which is the sort of thing that exists in that shop for no reason anybody can explain, and he used the second to turn Section 5 off, walk 4 paces, and turn it back on behind him. Sections 6 through 9 took him about a minute and a half because by then he had a rhythm and a considerable amount of debt. 5,000 years, and the record now belongs to a boy who borrowed his way through the middle of it. The academy went completely insane. Bells, 3 separate elders arriving in the same doorway. A teacher who had been running that corridor for 200 years sat down on the steps and had to be brought water, and Zhou Lin came out of the exit chamber and sat on the floor with his hands shaking and said one thing to himself quietly that nobody in that building understood except me. Lucky I went to college, otherwise I really wouldn't have passed. I did not understand that line at the time. I understood the words. I did not understand why a boy in a cultivation world said them, and I filed it away with a small mark next to it, and 11 weeks later, that small mark turned into the worst hour of my life. After the trial, the offers started, and they went on for 2 days, and it was the single most efficient point farming operation I have ever witnessed. Sentence Tianxuan came in person. She had 1 arm now. She had traveled from Kundao province, 4 provinces, to stand on a stone terrace in front of a 15-year-old and offer him the 10th sequence of the Tianxuan Holy Land, which is a position that families in her province spend 2 centuries positioning their children for. No way, said Zhou Lin. Not interested. Don't call me unless you're the best in the world. I want to note that she did not lose her temper. She inclined her head and withdrew, and she took the humiliation in front of 4,000 people with more grace than I have ever managed about anything, and if she had done that in front of me instead of him, this would be a different story. Meng Li went next, because he had been standing behind her waiting and could not resist. The G family of DJ. Is that the one with the guy who lost the immortal essence and screamed about a rental fee? I heard about that. Everyone heard about that. Meng Li's face did something I would have paid money to see in person. Then the 5 Elements sect, who offered him a Dao body they did not currently have and were proposing to acquire. Then Yao Guang, who offered him a mountain. Then 2 immortal Dao lineages in the same afternoon, one after the other, which had not happened at that academy in 900 years, and he turned them both down without getting up off the step he was sitting on. Then a small sect from the far west sent a very old man who did not offer him anything at all and simply asked whether he was eating properly, and Zhou Lin was so thrown by this that he said yes and then sat there frowning for about a minute. He turned down every single one in front of an audience of several thousand people who genuinely could not believe what they were watching, and the points came in like rain, and I have never seen a person build a fortune faster or more stupidly, because every one of those offers was somebody's hand extended, and every refusal was a door closing, and by the end of the second day, the boy had converted the entire cultivation world's goodwill into currency, and spent most of it on interest payments, so I walked into the academy and hit him. Understand that this was a formal outrage. The Supreme Sacred Academy is neutral ground with treaties older than most provinces attached to it. You do not throw a killing strike inside its walls. This man, I said, my Gu family wants him, and I struck him in front of everybody. Host, you have used up your quota. This strike requires 30,000 points to survive. You are 3,242 short. Please be careful when showing off, host. Perhaps try being more low-key in your next life. He closed his eyes, and a trident came in from the left and took my palm off its line. Han Yue, great master of the limitless immortal sect, 9th level of vast righteousness, a 9 nether battle soul physique, and the only person in the 3,000 Dao provinces who had made a habit of standing between me and something I wanted. Zhou Lin opened one eye, saw a giant of a man with a trident standing over him, and burst into tears. Third brother, is that you? Young brother, said Han Yue, you have mistaken me for someone else. No, 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 you're my third brother now. It's decided. I've decided. And Han Yue, who had never met him, said, fine. I found out later why. Gao Xuan had been his junior brother. He had been out of the sect when I hunted him, and he had come back to a ranking board with a name scratched off it and a letter from his own master explaining that it had been a matter between peers. He had not let it go, not for one day. A teacher broke it up before it became a war. Qinfeng, one of the academy's senior instructors who arrived and stood between us and made a speech about neutrality that everyone pretended to accept, and I left. Everybody there thought I had been driven off. That's what went into the reports. The divine child of the Gu family attacked a student inside the academy and was repelled by the limitless immortal sect. Here is what I actually walked away with. I now knew the system's emergency menu, its pricing structure, and the fact that it had a hard floor. I knew he had spent something in the region of 200,000 points in a month and had nothing left. I knew he could be reached inside the academy because the academy had, and I want to be precise about this, deliberately let him be slapped. They had. Qinfeng arrived late on purpose. The academy had decided that its new record-breaking student was insufferable and that a public humiliation would be educational, and they let a Gu family palm do their teaching for them. That is the kind of thing you can only learn by being the palm, and the test had done its main job, which was that Zhou Lin now believed I was a tyrant with a grudge who wanted him dead for being talented, which meant he would never once wonder whether I wanted something specific. On my way out, I passed Meng Li, who is 28, 9th level vast righteousness, nearly 10 years older than me, and enormously proud of both facts. If I were you, I said, I would simply kill myself. He went white. Also, I wonder if your father got the characters wrong. Shouldn't it be Jibatian? I am aware that was petty. I had been awake for 2 days. Then I went into the tower for a while and let compound interest do my work for me. I paid for the 2nd level that season. 10 billion top-grade spirit stones, which my father approved without a single question and which caused 3 separate elders to develop stress-related illnesses, 100 to 1. I went in at the 4th level of vast righteousness. I came out at the 7th. I want to give you the honest price of those 3 levels because this world lies about it constantly. The stories all say a genius breaks through by having an insight under a waterfall. Here is the actual invoice for level 7 alone. 200 million spirit crystals, not stones, crystals. Breakthrough elixirs at Mahayana grade, of which the Gu family owned 11 and used 4. 300 subjective days of continuous cultivation in a room where time is bought by the hour. That's what a level costs when you buy it, and I want that number sitting right next to the next one. In the same period, Zhou Lin took 1 month to reach the 2nd level of the Divine Sea Realm. Because his debt ate everything, every point he earned went straight into servicing 3 loans, and he was down to walking around his own courtyard, doing small impressive things in front of servants for pocket change, and at one point he tried to impress a groundskeeper by lifting a stone bench and got 4 points. 4. That is what a cheat looks like when it has a payment schedule attached. The world thought I was still at the 4th level. Incidentally, I let it. There is no advantage in a corrected rumor, and then I did the thing that I would like to skip and am not going to. I needed a permanent hold on Zhou Lin. Not surveillance, I had that. A hold. Something that could not be bought off, teleported away from, or removed for 100,000 points, because I had watched that system delete my chasing immortal seal like a man brushing lint off a sleeve. So I had my people screen the academy. 311 students in his year. Every one of them profiled. Who he ate with, who he talked to, who he borrowed from, who laughed at his jokes. He had exactly one friend. Her name was Sun Maifen. Her family were vassals of a vassal, small people with a small estate, and she was in that academy on the strength of one good result. She liked him. Genuinely. She was the only person in 3 provinces who liked that boy for no reason. I went to see her father. Sun Tao met me in his own reception hall with his hands shaking and his family standing behind him in their best clothes. Because a divine child does not visit a house like that in 100 years. I explained what I needed. I did not soften it, and I did not lie. There is a Gu family technique in the sealed archive called the Wraith Pact. It is not a curse you place on a person, it is a curse you make out of a person. A willing life goes into it, and what comes out is a token, a small dull thing about the size of a coin, and whoever carries that token is bound to the maker of it by something that operates below the level where cultivation techniques work. It cannot be detected, it cannot be removed. A system cannot see it, because it does not act on the body or the soul, it acts on lineage, and lineage is not a mechanism, it is a fact. The price of making one is the person who goes into it. My daughter, Sun Tao said. No, your daughter carries it, she will not know what it is. She will live a long life. Then Wao Jie. He worked it out while he was asking. I had brought an offer. His family relocated to the inner districts, next to the Gu estate. Resources, standing, a name that opens doors, 3 generations of security for people who currently owned 1 mountain and a bad tea plantation. He asked for 1 night to think about it. He came back in the morning and said, yes, I am not going to describe the right. It is not a thing I want in your head, and there is nothing in it worth knowing. It takes about 4 hours. He was conscious for some of it, and he did not ask me to stop. At the end of it, there was a dull coin on the table, and I put it on a chain, and I sent it to his daughter with a note saying it had been her father's. She wore it every day, and through it, for the rest of that year, I watched Zhou Lin. Here is what I saw, and it is the only reason I have told you any of this. He did not care about her, not in an interesting way, not in a tragic, conflicted, torn between two worlds way. She was the only person in the academy who had been kind to him, and he registered it the way you register a comfortable chair. He borrowed from her. He used her family's name twice. He told her about his ambitions at length and never once asked her a question. There is a line in the notes I made at the time that I still think about. Even if they had met normally and had time and nothing else had happened, he would still only have cared about his own satisfaction. It is possible this person's character was arranged for him by the system. I wrote that in a cold room as an intelligence assessment. And about 4 months later, I found out I was wrong about which of us it applied to. The Purple Cloud Secret Realm opens once every 10,000 years, and it has one rule. Nobody above the vast righteousness realm may enter. Which means that for 1 month, every young prodigy in 11 provinces is locked in a box together with no adults, and everybody who has a grudge against a young prodigy knows exactly where he will be. 2 weeks before it opened, in a sealed room under a mountain in the west, a meeting was held about me. I have the transcript. I have the transcript because 2 of the people in that room worked for me, and neither of them knew about the other, which is a management style I recommend. They were not sects I had wronged that year. They were sects I had wronged when I was 10. That is worth stopping on. The man whose body I inherited had been a menace since childhood. The 5 Elements sect had lost a 5 Elements Tao body to him when he was 11 years old, a physique they had waited 900 years for, gone in an afternoon over an argument about a horse. There were 4 saints in that room and a dozen sequence-level prodigies, and every single one of them had been carrying a specific, itemized grievance for the better part of a decade, and not one of those grievances was mine. I have never once complained about this out loud. You inherit the estate. You inherit the debts. They hired Shu Guang, Little Yuan Zun of the Great Yuan Holy Land. A primal spirit body, which is a physique that generates divine abilities out of ambient spiritual energy the way a fire generates heat. He was, that year, considered the single strongest cultivator under the vast righteousness ceiling in 11 provinces, and his spiritual pressure was routinely compared to a great ascension cultivator's. He listened to their offer, which was 3 treasures. Then he raised it to 5 in the middle of the meeting. When they objected, he let his aura out in a closed room and put 4 saints on their knees, and said, without raising his voice, "In my eyes, everyone here is indeed trash." I liked him too. I have a real weakness for people who are honest about the transaction. And on the same day, in a market town outside the entrance, a woman in Huangji Dao sect robes was recruiting Wu Yixuan, the one who had offered to take Chen Huai's eyes. She was looking for a specific man, and it took her 4 days to find him, and when she did, he was buying dried mushrooms. Duan Li, 500 years old. 400 of those years spent getting to the vast righteousness realm, which is a pace so slow that it is genuinely difficult to achieve. An entirely ordinary face. The sort of man you have looked directly at in a market and could not describe an hour later. He agreed to join her group, and then, before they had walked 10 steps, he said this. Junior Sister Jiang, I should tell you now, so there is no unpleasantness later. If there is any unforeseen danger, I, Han, will leave immediately. Please do not blame me at that time. She thought he was being modest. I read that line in a report 3 weeks later and put the paper down and sat back in my chair, because in 11 months of hunting people with destinies, that was the first sentence any of them had said that actually frightened me. They all fight. That is the entire genre. The hero is cornered, and the hero fights, because heroes have pride, and pride is a handle. This one had announced, in advance, in front of a witness, that he had no pride at all. There was one more thing in the pre-entry reports, and I did not act on it, and I have regretted it since. A young man with a black ruler on his back sold a top-grade pill to Duan Li in that same market. Ordinary transaction, took a minute, and Long Fei walked away from that stall and told his companion quietly that the plain-faced man they had just done business with had a danger rating comparable to Gu Mingjie's. He clocked him in 60 seconds from a pill sale. Then 3 Gu family collateral cultivators followed Long Fei into an alley for reasons I never established, and he killed all 3 of them with fire, and then stood there swearing about his luck. I entered the realm on the 2nd day and skipped the first 5 levels entirely. You can do that if you have a map, and I had a map, because 10,000 years is nothing to a family that has ancestors from the last era. The Gu family's archive had a survey of the Purple Cloud secret realm drawn by somebody who had been inside it 3 cycles ago. Level 6 has Creation Jade Sand in it. That is not a treasure in the ordinary sense. It is a material. Specifically, it is the material that takes a life-bound weapon and lets it grow past the ceiling of its grade, and there is no substitute for it anywhere, and I wanted it for a reason I had not told a single living person. Shu Guang got there first and set a very good ambush. He opened by killing 2 Gu family cultivators in the open. Not as strategy. as an appetizer, and as a way of making sure I came fast instead of careful. It worked. I came fast. I also came from above, because I had read the survey, and he had not. A heaven-flipping seal landed on the 4 prodigies he had waiting on the flanks before any of them had finished turning around. Top 5 of their respective holy lands, all 4 flattened in the same second by an attack none of them saw form. "You dare kill members of my Gu family?" I said. "You are tired of living." And 1,000 feet away, in the trees, a plain-faced man watched all of that happen, quietly planted 3 formation flags as an escape route, decided he did not need them, and left. "Junior Sister Jiang," he said on his way past. "I think I will look for other opportunities. Gu Mingjue's strength is beyond my capabilities. Farewell." That's it. That's the whole thing. He had traveled 2 provinces and paid an entry fee and spent 4 days assembling a team, and he looked at one attack and walked out of the story. He is the only person in this entire account who ever left before the fight. I did not find out for 11 days that he had been there at all. Xu Guang was better than his reputation. He pulled a river of ambient spiritual energy out of a canyon and turned it into divine abilities on the fly, 100 of them, none of which he had ever learned, all of which he was using correctly. That's what a primal spirit body does. It does not store techniques. It invents them at the speed of thought and discards them when they are spent. Fighting him is like fighting a man who is being handed a new weapon every second by an invisible assistant. I used 1 black sword chi. It split into hundreds on its own, because that is what the Changyun sword art does, and every branch found a different one of his 100 abilities and ate it, all of it, in about 4 seconds. And then a dozen of his hired prodigies stopped existing, and I was standing in the middle of it without a speck of dust on my robes. He stopped. He actually stopped fighting, mid-motion, to ask a question. "Who exactly are you?" Nobody had asked me that before. People had asked what I was doing, or why, or how dare I. Nobody had looked at the arithmetic of me and said, "That doesn't add up." I answered by putting up the 10-direction Immortal Extermination seal. Understand what that is? It is not a family technique. It is one of the divine abilities the Gu family brought out of the ancient immortal era, and the records say it annihilated a supreme once, and the reason nobody had ever seen it used is that it is generally considered to require Saint Realm cultivation to form at all. An illusory hand the size of a mountain range came out of the sky over that canyon with dried immortal essence still visible in the creases of its palm. Xu Guang looked up at it. "Surrender," I said, "or die." And he gave a speech. A good one, and I mean that. I have thought about it since. I came from nothing. My family scavenged. I ate things I will not describe to you. I spent 30 years climbing to the saint's threshold with no lineage, no sect, no inheritance, and no one's hand on my shoulder. There is no version of me that kneels to a rich boy. You will never make me submit. He held that position until the hand was about 100 feet from his head. Then he dropped to his knees and put both palms over his skull. "Say it earlier next time," I said. I put a Dustfall seal in him, which is the upgrade. The Chasing Immortal seal watches. The Dustfall seal steers. Everything the first one does, plus the ability to give an order and have it obeyed, and crucially, it requires the target's consent to install, which is why it took a mountain-sized hand to get consent. Then I went to have a conversation with Wu Yixuan. She was camped on the 7th level with 2 junior disciples of her sect, and she had heard about the canyon, and she had made the decision that people in her position make, which is that she was going to be reasonable and dignified about it. Divine Child, the Huangji Dao sect has no quarrel with the Gu family. If Xu Guang accepted a contract, that was his own affair, and my sect will say so publicly. I would be glad to carry that message myself, and I am certain Elder Zhou Hai would Jie. I killed her 2 disciples while she was in the middle of that sentence. Not out of cruelty, it was punctuation. She had begun a negotiation and I needed her to understand that there was not one, and the fastest way to move a person from the paragraph they are speaking to the paragraph they are actually in is to remove something from the room. She stopped talking. Then she looked at what was on the ground, and she stopped being reasonable, and I got to see what the Huangji Dao sect's prodigy actually was. An ice phoenix 100 feet tall came up out of the river behind her, and the temperature on that level dropped enough that the water stopped moving, and it was, genuinely, beautiful. She had built that thing over 11 years. It was hers. Nobody had given it to her. I broke it in about 6 seconds. She stood there afterward in the fog of her own technique with her hands open at her sides, and she said, "What do you want?" "Kneel." She knelt. And I want to record that she did not make a speech about it, and she did not swear revenge, and she did not weep. She knelt on a riverbank next to 2 dead students and looked at the ground and waited, which is a harder thing than any of the alternatives. And I want to explain why I kept her, because it is the single coldest thing in my entire operation, and nobody has ever guessed it. Not for her strength. She was strong, and it did not matter. I kept her because she had been standing next to Chen Huai. That's it. Zhou Hai had introduced them. She had been in the frame. In the world I came from, a beautiful woman who stands next to a protagonist for 3 chapters becomes important, and if the protagonist dies, she tends to become important to the next one. She was a lightning rod. I did not want her power. I wanted to be holding the thing that the next child of destiny would walk toward. 2 days later, I noticed something that ruined my week. I was going back over the ambush in my head, which I do, and I found a gap. During the fight, there had been someone about 1,000 feet out in the trees. I had registered it the way you register a bird, and at some point that presence had left, and I had not noticed the leaving. I notice everything leaving. That is not arrogance, it is a trained skill, and I have it. So I started pulling the thread. Wu Yixuan, under the Dustfall seal, told me about a plain-faced man named Duan Li who had joined her group and left it. I sent her to the 8th level with instructions. Then I released her. Publicly, visibly, with an apology and a small treasure, so that anybody watching would conclude she had bought her way out. Then I watched where she went. She went to a rendezvous point and left a message. And I sat down on that spot, inside the Iron Pagoda, with the door shut, and waited. I want to be clear about what that means. I was inside a pocket dimension that does not exist to the outside world. There is no aura, there is no presence, there is nothing to sense, because there is nothing there. A saint could stand on that rock and feel a rock. Duan Li walked past 100 feet away. 11 hours later, he did not stop. He did not look, but halfway past, his shoulders came up about half an inch, and his pace changed by a fraction, and he kept walking in exactly the same direction, at exactly the same speed until he was out of sight. I found out later what that was. He kept a private tally, because of course he did, and that was the 4th time in 500 years he had gotten that particular feeling. 2 of the previous 3 had been real. He did not come back. He sent puppets. 3 of them, wooden, unremarkable, walking a slow search pattern over the ground I was sitting on, tapping the rock, checking the trees. One of them stood directly on top of the Iron Pagoda for 6 seconds, and I sat inside that thing, invisible, undetectable, in an artifact that has no equal in 11 provinces, and I felt genuinely rattled for the first time since my wedding. I am inside the Iron Pagoda. There is no way anybody could find me, and this man used puppets. He did not know I was there. He never confirmed it. He simply behaved as though I might be, permanently, forever. At a cost he was apparently happy to pay for the rest of his life. Then one of the puppets found Wu Yixuan and interrogated her on his behalf, from 3 miles away, through a proxy, because he was not going to be in the room with a person he had questions for. Where are the other members of the Huangji Dao sect who traveled with you? And the Dustfall seal made her lie, smoothly, in the middle of her own sentence, without her deciding to. I sat there in the dark and started smiling, and could not stop. If this man is really a child of destiny, this is going to be interesting. Interesting. Very interesting. That is the last time in this story I was ever glad to meet one of them. I ran 2 operations at once for the next 11 days, and I want to walk you through both because the contrast is the whole point. The first was the Enlightenment flower. It blooms once every million years, and it grows on the 9th level of that realm, and the reason nobody has ever brought one out is that approaching it incorrectly does not kill you. It absorbs you. You become part of the Tao it is expressing, permanently, and from the outside it looks like a man walking up to a flower and simply not being there anymore. So I did not approach it. My people captured a dozen loose cultivators over 2 days. Nobodies. Men who had come into that realm hoping to find a sword and go home to a small sect and be slightly more important than they had been. We put Dustfall seals in all 12 of them. Then I sat down about 400 feet from the flower, behind a rock, with a wax tablet, and I sent them in one at a time from 12 different bearings, with one instruction. Describe what you feel, out loud, continuously. Do not stop talking. The first one walked 11 paces and said the air was getting thicker. Then he said it was getting easier to think. Then he said, in a tone of real surprise, that he had just understood something about a technique he had been stuck on for 9 years. Then he stopped talking. He did not fall. He kept walking, at the same pace, in the same direction, and he did not answer when I called him back through the seal, and about 40 feet from the flower, he stopped being a person walking and became part of the pattern of the light on the ground. The second one I sent from the opposite bearing. He got 19 paces, the third got 12. The fourth got 26, and I thought I had it, and then he did the same thing at 40 feet, and I sat behind that rock and revised my model and sent in the 5th. By the 7th, I had a shape. The absorption was not radial. It had a grain to it, like wood. The 8th man was the one who did it. He got to 31 paces, and his last 4 sentences told me precisely where the grain ran, because he described the pull as coming from behind his left shoulder when he was walking directly at the thing. I got the flower on the 9th attempt, from a bearing that made no sense, walking at an angle that felt like walking away from it. 4 of those men are still part of a plant. I have never pretended that was anything other than what it was. I have never told anybody their names either, and the reason is that I never learned them, and I did not want to. The second operation was Wu Yixuan and the Earth Mother Spirit Pool. There is a pool on the 8th level that produces a liquid which repairs a cultivator's foundation, and Duan Li had found it, and he had been quietly harvesting it for 6 days without telling anyone, because of course he had. I sent her in as a partner. They split it. He took his portions, and she took hers, and it went perfectly amicably for 4 days. And then, on the last portion, Duan Li did something that told me more about him than anything else in his entire life. He turned it down. Junior Sister Jiang, I do not need the last piece. You may take it yourself. Not generosity. He said it because taking the last portion would have required him to kneel at the edge of that pool with his back to her for about 90 seconds. 500 years old, never once turned his back on anybody. She stabbed him anyway, standing up from the front, because I had told her to, and because the seal does not accept excuses. He survived 100 exchanges. Then he burned a broken sacred artifact, which nobody at his realm should own, and set 3 counter formations while fighting, and beat her. At which point I poured my full strength through the Dustfall seal. That is the second use of that mark, and it is why I bothered to install it rather than the cheaper one. A Dustfall seal is a pipe. I was 3 levels of the realm away, sitting still, and I put everything I had down that pipe and out of her hand as a single palm strike. It shattered his sword formation. It shattered 100 talismans he had layered around himself over 6 days, and it threw a vast righteousness cultivator a full mile through a forest, taking the forest with him. He should have died there. He got up. And on his way out, with one arm not working and his ribs showing through his robes, he stopped by the woman who had stabbed him, who was unconscious on the ground, and calmly stabbed her, not out of anger, as housekeeping. A person who has tried to kill you once is a task on a list, and you do not leave a task on a list. Gu Moyun deflected it at the last second, barely. Then Duan Li went 100 miles east into a cave and sat down alone with what should have been 11 fatal injuries, and took out a wine cup. It was plain jade, no inscription, no aura at all. The sort of thing you would find in the back of a cupboard in a farmhouse. He poured 1 drop of a completely transparent liquid out of it and drank it. Here is what that cup does, and when I finally understood it, I had to go and sit down. Leave ordinary water in it overnight, and by morning, that water has become 1 drop of the liquid. That's the whole mechanic. 1 cup of ordinary water in, 1 drop out every night, forever. And that drop turns a 100-year-old herb into a 10,000-year-old herb. There is no combat function. There is no defense. It does not make you strong, and it will not save your life in a fight. It just quietly manufactures time. 500 years of 1 drop a night. He had 30,000 of them in storage. 30,000 nights of a farmhouse cup left on a windowsill. And that is where 400 years of slow, unremarkable, unglamorous cultivation had actually come from. That is the least dramatic golden finger I have ever encountered, and it is the only one that ever nearly beat me. The drop closed his injuries. Then it kept going. Because a healing that violent has to go somewhere, and he had to break through on the spot or come apart. He condensed 6 flowers. Then, while I was still 11 days behind him, a 7th. 6 flowers is saint level. 7 beats a saint. And then he did the thing that no one had done. The drop had another property, and he found it that night, which is that it lets your will sink into matter with a delicacy that normally requires the saint realm. He turned that inward and went looking through his own body the way a man goes through his pockets. And he found my chasing immortal seal, and he took it out. First person ever, Gao Xuan hid from it. Jolin paid 100,000 points to have it deleted by something above this world. Duan Li found it himself, with a cup, sitting in a cave, and removed it by hand. I sat in my own camp 11 days away and watched my window go dark, and said out loud, that wine glass, that's his golden finger. And then the second thought arrived, and it was the one I did not like. He has survived a calamity that should have ended him. In every story I have ever read, that is the sentence right before the good fortune arrives. Is it coming? Is it already here? I found him because he had to stop somewhere, and a man at 7 flowers needs 11 days of stillness to settle, and stillness has a shape you can look for. He had built himself a position, 3 layers of formations, nested, each one a different school, none of them the sort of thing a vast righteousness cultivator is supposed to be able to lay. I broke all 3 with 1 seal, and out of the ground came 700 puppets. 700. Wooden, jade cord, individually inscribed. 3 of them were at the vast righteousness realm. He had been making them for 5 centuries, a few a year, the way a man builds a wall by carrying 1 stone home every evening. So it's you, Gu Mingjue? As expected of you, I said. You saw the whole story at a glance. I am Han, just an ordinary cultivator. I have never had any dealings with you. You are not an ordinary anything, I said. Great celestial venerable Han. And he had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. That is the funniest and most unsettling moment I have ever had in a fight. I had just called him by a title from a book he will never read, in a world he does not know is written down, and he stood there with 700 puppets around him and a completely blank expression, and then he decided it did not matter and started the fight. Half a day. That is how long it took, and I have never fought for half a day before or since, and I want to give you 4 moments out of it rather than a summary, because a summary is what people write about fights they did not have. The first hour was the puppets, and the puppets were not the attack, they were the survey. He sent them in waves of 40, and he did not care about any of them. Each wave came at a different angle with a different technique, and he watched what I did about it, and by the third wave he had stopped sending them at me and started sending them past me, in pairs, to see whether I would turn. I did not turn. He noted that. He never tried it again. Around the 4th hour, he did the thing that told me what 500 years actually buys. I had settled into a rhythm, which is a thing I do, and the rhythm involved stepping through a particular arc when I closed distance. I had used it perhaps 11 times. The 12th time, there was a talisman waiting exactly where my foot was going to land. He had put it there 4 minutes earlier while doing something else entirely, at a moment when there was no reason for a talisman to be in that patch of ground, on the assumption that eventually I would step on it. It went off. It did not do enough. But I want to be clear that in 19 months of this, nobody else had ever built a trap out of my habits. The 6th hour was the spirit treasure, and that was the only stretch where he attacked me properly, and it was because he had run out of clever and had to spend an hour being ordinary. His one intact spirit treasure cracked at the end of it. 2 broken sacred artifacts went into the ground and burned out. And around the 8th hour, with nothing left, he deployed a 7-fiend soul-locking array out of the ancient immortal era that he had been carrying, unused, for 240 years, waiting for a day exactly like this one. It held me for 4 minutes. 4 minutes is a very long time. I broke it by hand, from the inside, which took everything I had and left my arms shaking, and when I came out of it, he had used those 4 minutes to get 11 miles and to lay 3 more traps on the ground between us. He apologized afterward, incidentally, for the talisman count. He said he thought it had been about 800, but he could not be precise because some had been in a bundle. That is who I was fighting. He was at 7 flowers, in the Gathering Cauldron realm, a full realm above me, and a 19-year-old held him down because the gap between us was not cultivation. He had 500 years. I had 19 years and the Gu family, and the Gu family is worth more than 481 years of anybody's diligence, and that is the ugliest true thing in this entire story. At the end of it, my robes were in pieces, and there was a line of red down my cheek. First mark anybody put on me. Ever. I did not wipe it off for 2 days. He broke off and ran, and I did not chase him. I want to explain why, because it is the one genuinely good piece of thinking I did in that realm, and it came out of watching him for 11 days. Chasing Duan Li is pointless. He has escape routes prepared in advance, everywhere, permanently. He had 3 flagged escape lines from a fight he never intended to have. Chasing him means chasing a man who has spent 5 centuries preparing to be chased. So I did not chase. I went and sat on his route. I picked the exit he was most likely to use, and I opened the iron pagoda, and I got inside it, and I closed the door. He came down that line 11 minutes later at full speed, injured, with everything spent, checking behind him. I stepped out in front of him and took the wine cup out of his hand while he was still landing. He stood there. And then he did something that no one else in this story did, which was that he stopped, completely, and negotiated. Yes, I said, looking at the cup. This is it. If I want it, will you give it to me? It is yours. No hesitation at all. And I would like to offer my service to the Gu family. I am not without use. 500 years of formations, alchemy, puppetry, and caution. I ask for no rank and no resources. I will do whatever is required, and I will do it well, and you will never once have to wonder where I am. It was a good offer. It was, objectively, the best offer anybody made me that year. If it were someone else, I said, I would accept. He waited. But you? 10 dustfall seals would not let me sleep. He nodded. He did not argue. He had known the answer before he made the offer, and he had made it anyway, because a man who has survived 500 years does not skip a step just because the step is unlikely to work. Then he self-destructed 12 cyan swords at once, which is a real attempt and which would have ended most people at my realm, and I put a palm through it, and at the exact moment he died, the cup moved, not toward him, away. It came off my palm and went for the horizon at a speed that had nothing to do with a dying man's last command, and I understood in that half second that it had never belonged to him at all, and that it was not trying to save its owner, it was trying to get out of the building. I dropped the iron pagoda on it. 6 stories of rusted innate Tao artifact came down over a wine cup like a hand over a moth. The iron pagoda doesn't recognize me yet, I said out loud to a very quiet forest, but it recognizes spirit stones. I stood there afterward for a while. I had won. I had the cup and the flower and the jade sand, and a realm's worth of prodigies had learned to walk around me. And what I actually felt, standing over a plain-faced man who had spent his last hour offering to be useful, was that I had gotten away with something. Here is what I did not know, and this is the only place in this entire account where I have to tell you that I lost. 4,000 miles away, at that same moment, a man opened his eyes. He had Duan Li's face and none of his temperament. He was not cautious, he was not patient. He was the part of a 500-year-old survivor that had never been allowed out. The original body is dead, he said. Gu Mingjue has taken the mysterious wine cup. A clone. Prepared decades in advance, kept 4,000 miles from the original at all times, holding 30,000 drops of liquid in storage and a backup of his origin soul. A month later, a black figure walked into the middle of a fight between two saints and took a Jukyu divine lotus off the ground while they were both busy, and was gone before either of them turned around. A month after that, a polite young man in blue robes registered as an outer disciple at the Nine Yang Immortal Palace, in Mystic Dust, Dao Province, 40 miles from my house. My name, he told the registrar, is Duan Yun. I did not learn any of this for a very long time. I refused his surrender because I could not trust him. I was right. I was right for entirely the wrong reason. And being right for the wrong reason is worse than being wrong, because it teaches you nothing. 3 days before the realm closed, I set up a toll booth. The exit is a corridor about 100 miles long, and it is the only way out, and I occupied all of it. The rate was 40% of everything you were carrying, 70 if you argued. Evergreen Holy Land had claimed a third of that corridor 11 days earlier and had a saint's disciple sitting on it. I evicted them. Their senior objected on principle, and I killed him, and Saint Yunxiao of the Yunxiao lineage objected to that, and I killed him too. And after the second one, there were no further objections filed. Xu Guang stood on the left flank. Wu Yixuan stood on the right. Both of them under seals, both of them visibly, publicly working for me, which did more damage to my enemy's morale than either of them did with their hands. The province talked about that for years. The divine child of the Gu family stood in the exit of the Purple Cloud secret realm and taxed 11 provinces worth of young geniuses like a bandit at a mountain pass. That was not what I was doing. Every single person who came down that corridor had their face checked against a jade slip. On the way in, at the entrance formation, the realm records everybody who enters, millions of faces. That record is not secret, and it is not useful to anyone because it is millions of faces, and nobody has ever had a reason to read it. I had a copy, and I had 3 standing orders. Anybody in a disguise. Kill. Anybody who refuses inspection. Kill. And anybody whose realm has moved further than it should have in 1 month. Kill. That was the whole operation. 40% was the cover story. What I was actually running was a sieve, 1 month wide, across an entire generation, looking for the specific signature of a person whose growth curve does not obey the rules the rest of us live under. I stood on that gate personally for 3 days, and I want to give you the texture of it, because it was the most tedious and the most useful thing I have ever done. They came through 4 abreast. The counters took the 40% at the front, loudly, with a great deal of arguing, because the arguing was the point. Nobody looks at the second table when they are furious about the first one. At the second table, 2 men held a jade slip and red faces. A young man from the Kangming sect came through on the first morning wearing a face that did not match his entry record. It was a good disguise. His own senior brother would not have caught it. The slip caught it because a slip does not get tired and does not think anybody looks familiar. He went for the wall. He was fast. He got about 200 feet. 9 minutes later, a woman came through with a face that matched perfectly and a realm that did not. Divine Sea on entry. Dao Palace on exit. 29 days. She had a completely reasonable explanation. She had found a bottle of something in a cave on the 4th level, and she had it in her ring, and she offered to show me, and she was telling the truth, and I watched her tell it. It did not matter. That is what a rule is for. A rule you make exceptions to is a preference. By the 3rd day, word had gotten up the corridor about what the second table actually was, and the people arriving had started to behave differently, and that told me more than the inspections did. 11 people turned around and went back into a realm that was closing in 70 hours rather than walk past that slip. I sent men after all 11. 9 of them were exactly what they looked like, which was young cultivators with something stolen in their rings and a strong instinct about tax collectors. One of them was a Yaoshan sect disciple who had killed a fellow student on the 6th level and did not want the corpse discussed, and one of them I never found, not a trace. He went back up a corridor with one exit and 11,000 of my people in it, and he did not come out, and when the realm closed, he was not inside it either. I still do not know who that was. The toll cost me a fortune in reputation and made me 9 billion spirit stones, and I would have run it at a loss, and I would run it again tomorrow. Long Fei got to within 100,000 names of being caught. He came down that corridor disguised, with his bone structure compressed, in the middle of a crowd, in the queue, moving forward at the correct speed like everybody else. My people were reading faces at a rate of about 400 a minute, and they were about that far from his. And then Han Yue started fighting at the other end of the corridor, and the whole 100 miles shook. And Long Fei, in the confusion, decided he was not going to wait to find out. I felt the temperature go wrong from 4 miles away. He put 8 different divine flames together into one thing. 8. In a corridor packed with several thousand people, a young man at the 3rd level of the Dao Palace realm fused 8 flames and put them through the barrier wall, and Wu Yixuan's 100-foot ice phoenix went into that fire and did not come out the other side. There was a crater. He went through it. How is that possible? Somebody was shouting. He's at the 3rd level of Dao Palace. That's a gathering cauldron attack. I stood there and looked at the hole in my wall, and I said, in a voice that several people later described as the coldest thing they heard that month, Wu Yixuan, catch up with him. If you lose him, neither the Jiang family nor the Huangji Dao sect will be able to protect you. She did not catch up with him. I want to note the date of that hole in the wall, because everything that has gone wrong for me since started there. Han Yue did not run. He sent every disciple of the limitless immortal sect down that corridor ahead of him with orders to pay the toll, all of it, without argument, and to keep their heads down and go home. Then he came back up the corridor alone. He burned his physique. The 9 Nether Battle Soul does not power a technique, it powers him, and he spent it all at once and became a blue giant 1,000 feet tall with a trident in both hands and a voice like a landslide. Though I die today, he said, the spirit of the limitless immortal sect will be stronger for it. You're a stupid pig, I said, throwing away your life. He used Wuji Dao. That is the limitless immortal sect's answer to my family's extermination seal. It is their crown, their one great thing, and it is said to contain 3,000 great Daos folded into a single strike, and it had not been used in 200 years because nobody in that sect had been strong enough to lift it. I put up the 10-direction immortal extermination seal. The two of them met over a 100-mile corridor, and the corridor stopped being a corridor. His halberd cracked. And I want to be honest, because there is a version of this story where I stand there untouched, and it is not true. My left hand split open to the bone, first real wound, not a scratch on the cheek, an actual injury from an actual attack from a man who had come back up a corridor alone. And while the light was still going, I worked something out. Han Yue should not have been able to comprehend Wuji Dao. He was 9th level vast righteousness. That technique needs a saint's understanding and about 80 years of study, and he had neither, unless somebody had given him 80 years. Gao Xuan had invited his own senior brother into the Iron Pagoda, at 100 to 1. Sometime in that year, a boy with a rented tower had taken the one man in his sect who had ever been kind to him and given him decades. So the tower killed Gao Xuan and then, a year later, tried to kill me with the interest. I drained Shu Guang dry through the Dustfall seal to refill, which is the 3rd use of that mark and the one nobody expects, and then I drew the sword. Lightning started gathering over that corridor immediately. Not tribulation, objection. Han Yue's throat was ruined by then. He got the question out anyway, in pieces. What is the name of this sword strike? Surpassing Immortal. Never heard of it. He almost laughed. You made this yourself? Yes and no. He thought about that for about a second, which was all he had. I have no regrets, he said, about dying to this sword. And I cut him in half, and that was Surpassing Immortal's first swing, 1 year and 2 months after a boy in a cell finished building it for a woman who was going to put a sword in him. Then a phantom came up out of the wreckage. Supreme grade. A guardian mark of the limitless immortal sect laid down centuries ago in the body of every great master, designed to activate at death and carry the soul home. The Gu family, it said, in a voice that came from a long way away, has produced a remarkable person. I swung Surpassing Immortal a second time, and the phantom of a supreme, a being from an era that ended before my family's oldest grave was dug, looked at that sword and lost its composure completely. Immortal arts. I kept swinging. That is a complete immortal technique. How could your Gu family possibly be preserving a complete immortal technique? That is not possible. That has not been possible since of DJ. Complete immortal techniques, I said. Then I chose the name correctly. It came apart, and the last thing it said while it was going was not a threat, and I have turned it over more times than I would like. I hope you live to see that day, Gu family. Ha ha. I took the 5-colored golden lotus out of what was left, and I bottled Han Yue's soul, and I stood in a corridor with my left hand open to the bone. Shu Guang spoke up from the side, where he had been kneeling for the entire fight. Hey, he said, you could at least brag a little in front of me. That was a Supreme's phantom. That is genuinely the only time anybody made me laugh that whole month. There were a dozen Holy Land chariots waiting outside the exit. Every force I had taxed, every force whose disciples had come out with 60% of what they went in with, every force whose senior had objected and been buried in the corridor. And underneath all of that, the older layer, the sex the previous Gu Mingjue had wrecked when he was 10 years old and bored. They had been assembling for 3 days. He Jian of the Great Yuan Holy Land had spent those 3 days working the crowd, and at some point in the second day, he had made a public bet, out loud, in front of 11 delegations. If the Great Yuan Holy Land has truly become Gu Mingjue's, he said, then I will drop my trousers and relieve myself right here in the air. That is a direct quotation. He was very confident. His Holy Land's greatest prodigy had gone into that realm under contract to kill me, and he had been paid in advance. I came out, and Xu Guang came out one step behind me, on my left. At the distance, a retainer walks. He was looking at the back of my head with an expression I had not asked him to wear. He Jian's face did something complicated. Xu Guang, what is this? Come here at once. And Xu Guang said, in a perfectly reasonable voice, Elder Chen, this junior has not done anything. I was simply willing to stand with young Lord Gu. He Jin left. He did not say goodbye, he did not make his excuses, he became a streak of light going east, and he was over the horizon in about 4 seconds, and I have been told that the Great Yuan Holy Land did not send a representative to a public gathering for the next 2 years. A Mahayana elder stepped out from the delegations, old, genuinely old, not just powerful, one of those men who has been an elder since before some of the sects around him had a founding. Gu Mingjue. Have your family's elders come out. This is beyond your standing. And I said the thing I had been saving for a month. I am 18 years old, and I can take responsibility for what I did. I let that sit. The question is whether you dare let me take responsibility. Then I walked into them, not past them, into them, straight through the middle of 11 delegations of immortal Dao lineages, with my hands empty and a left hand still bandaged, and every one of them made room. Nobody moved, not one of them. There were 4 beings in that crowd who could have ended me by exhaling, and every single one of them stepped aside, because the calculation is never about whether you can kill a Gu, it is about what happens on the 9th day afterward. So they pushed a puppet forward instead. The Echo Gate's sect master, at the Gazing at Saint Realm, a man who had spent 140 years building a modest sect in a modest province, and who had, that morning, been shown something about his family that left him no choices. He came at me with sword chi that could have split the sun from the moon, and I did not raise my hand. A single green leaf appeared in the air in front of me, tender, slightly curled at the tip, about the size of a coin. The sword chi hit it and stopped, and then it stopped existing, and the leaf did not move. There was a silence of a very specific quality, and it was the silence of 11 delegations of very old people, all recognizing the same thing at the same time, and none of them wanting to be the first to say it. The Gu family has a tree. It is from the ancient immortal era. It has, at last count, fewer than 10 tender leaves left on it. It does not answer to the head of the family, it does not answer to the old ancestors, and nobody has ever successfully explained on what basis it makes its decisions. In the entire recorded history of my family, it has produced a leaf for 5 people. The previous 4 were each, in their own era, unbeaten. The withered branch came down out of the air behind the leaf, and it wrapped that sect master up from the feet to the crown in about a second and a half, and he did not get to make a sound. And every person in that clearing now understood the rule, because the tree had just written it in front of them. Only someone of his own generation is permitted to kill him, not a saint, not a Mahayana elder, not 11 delegations. Not a hired sect master with a family in a cellar somewhere. If the Gu family's divine child is going to be removed from the world, it will be done by somebody standing on the same rung, and everybody above that rung can go home. I walked out through them, and I said the last thing over my shoulder, because the walking away is the whole point of the line. I have a suggestion for all of you. Within 3 months, come to the Gu family with sincerity and apologize for today. I did not turn around. Otherwise, I will come to your door personally and make you apologize there. 51 of them came. Within the 3 months, all 51. I want to be honest about what that felt like, because I have spent this entire story explaining my reasoning to you, and this is the part where I did not have any. It felt fantastic. It felt like the single best day of my life. Walking out of that clearing with a tree's endorsement over my head and 11 holy lands opening a path in front of me. I did not have one strategic thought in my head for about 10 minutes. That is the closest I have ever come to becoming exactly what everybody already thought I was. The tree had just guaranteed that the world would produce somebody my own age to kill me. That's the other half of the rule, and I did not think about it for 1 second that afternoon. Sun Maifan died on a Tuesday in a rented room in Tianshan City, and I watched it happen through her own eyes and did nothing. He had worked out that something on her was the reason he could not leave the city. Not what, just that. He had her against a wall with his hand at her throat, and he was asking her over and over where the exit route was and calling her names I am not going to repeat, and she was not answering. She was not protecting me. I want that understood. She had no idea what the coin was. She had worn it for a year because a courier had brought it to her with a note saying it had been her father's, and her father had gone to serve the Gu family and had not written since, and she had assumed he was busy. She was not answering because she had already made a decision sometime in the previous week, and she was seeing it through. She had figured out roughly what had happened to her father, not the mechanism, the shape of it. A man goes away to serve a great family, and a token arrives. And she had spent a year with the only friend she had ever made, and she had watched him decide that she was furniture, and she had gone on being kind about it because she did not have anything else. So when he asked her where the exit was, she looked at him and said nothing at all and let him decide what to do about it. He tore the chain off her neck and threw the coin across the room and killed her. Then he picked the coin back up because a thing that was thrown away and remains in the room is worth a second look, and he tried 5 separate methods of destroying it, and it did not so much as scratch. I was standing on a roof 3 streets away. I did not intervene. I could have. I was a 19-year-old at the 7th level of vast righteousness standing on a roof 3 streets from a divine sea cultivator, and I let a girl who had never done anything to anybody be killed in a rented room because interrupting it would have cost me the anchor. That's it. That's the whole reason. I do not have a better one, and I have looked. Tianshan City had been dead for 2 months by then. Nobody in it noticed. Here is what I mean. Over the course of 8 weeks, the population of that city had been quietly replaced, not evacuated, replaced. Families were bought out, businesses were purchased through intermediaries, and every seat was filled by a Gu family cultivator in ordinary clothes running an ordinary life. By the time Zhou Lin arrived, he was a 15-year-old with a show-off system, living in a city where every single person around him was mine, which mattered enormously, and not for the reason you would guess. The perimeter was under the star-shifting array. It is an incomplete formation out of the ancient immortal era. We have about 2/3 of the diagram, and running even 2/3 of it required Elder Feng Yu, an actual saint, plus 4,000 cultivators sitting in shifts feeding spirit stones into nodes for 2 months. 2 Mahayana cultivators walked into his courtyard at noon. He spent 10,000 points and teleported out. And a thread of red light came out of the ground under wherever he landed and hauled him straight back into the middle of the city. He did it again, 200 miles, back, again, a different province, back, host. The opponent is using a flawed immortal array containing something closely related to you. To avoid being returned, you must eliminate the thing that is closely related to you. And Zhou Lin stood in the middle of a street and looked up at the node at the center of the formation, at the thing suspended in the middle of it, and saw a dull coin the size of a thumbnail turning slowly in the air, and felt a familiarity he could not place, and did not understand why, and never did. So he spent 100,000 points on the most expensive thing in the shop, which was a one-way delivery to a location of his choosing anywhere in the 3,000 Dao provinces, and he chose the worst place in the world, the Dao Abyss, first Dao province. A forbidden zone that supreme realm beings route around. He landed in front of a sleeping shadow the size of a mountain range and immediately started shouting, "Big brother, please big brother, help me. There's a man hunting me. He's completely unreasonable. DJ." And then, because he was who he was, he threw a gold brick at it, an actual gold brick, from the Azure Dragon treasury, as an offering, to a demon shadow older than the province it sleeps in. The brick went into the shadow without a ripple, and the red threads found him, and he went home. And after he was gone, the shadow opened one eye. The Gu family's wraith pact, it said to itself in the tone of a man identifying a smell in a corridor. This child is finished. Do not involve me with the Gu family. I am perfectly comfortable here. And it spat the gold brick back out onto the rocks. I have the report from the 2 scouts who watched that. I keep it. It is the single most useful document I own, because it is a thing older than my entire lineage declining to be in the same story as us. Back in the city, his own system said the quiet part. This system is not omnipotent. Since binding with you, too many unexpected things have occurred. I am beginning to wonder whether I bound the wrong person. Then it raised his credit line to 500,000, which I have always thought was the most human thing it ever did. He spent 300,000 on a shield described as invincible. He spent 200,000 on a teleport that would take him out of the 3,000 Dao provinces entirely, which is a category of escape I did not know existed and which I have thought about a great deal since. It needed 1 hour to charge. 2 Mahayana cultivators bombarded that shield for 50 minutes. Tianshan City stopped being a city. Every building came down, the streets went, the walls went, and at the end of it there was a bowl of rubble a mile across with a golden bubble sitting at the bottom of it, undamaged, containing one very smug 15-year-old. He did not get a single point for any of it, because there was nobody to impress. Every witness in that city was a Gu family cultivator who had spent 2 months being briefed, by me, personally, on exactly what he was and exactly what he ran on. 4,000 people watched a boy survive an attack that would have flattened a mountain, and every one of them had been told, in writing, to be bored. That is what the 2 months of buying a city were for. He was sitting inside the most expensive defensive item in the world with 160,000 in debt, 10 minutes left on his escape, and no income. One of the Mahayana cultivators stopped bombarding and said, to nobody, let's just wait for the young lord, even I can't get through that. I came down into the crater and walked around the shield once, slowly, with my hands behind my back, like a man inspecting a parked carriage. He watched me do it. He had about 9 minutes left on his charge, and he had started to smile, because he could see the timer, and I could not. Then I stopped, and I turned to face the sky, and I bowed. Welcome, I said. 8th ancestor, old ancestor Chang Yun. A vortex opened at the top of the world. Not clouds, not a formation. A hole in the sky about 40 miles across, and inside it, visible, in daylight, over a ruined city in the middle of a populated province, there was a grave. The land of slumber does not travel. That is a fixed fact about my family that every power in 11 provinces has built its policy around. Our ancestors do not leave the valley. They cannot be projected, summoned, or borrowed, except that one of them had just put his front yard over somebody else's city. Every faction that had followed me from the secret realm to see how this ended, every delegation that had not yet made its apology, every observer sitting on a distant hilltop with a scrying mirror, left, all at once. There was a sound like a flock going up. I opened my own sea of consciousness and let a 500,000-year-old man reach into my head. The primordial chaos ruler was still in there, still gray, still inert, still refusing to acknowledge that I existed, 11 months after it had been installed at enormous cost. It knew Chang Yun's hand immediately. One strike. I do not have a description. I was standing 40 feet from the impact, and I do not have a description, because whatever happened in the middle of it did not happen at a speed my eyes were built for. What I can tell you is what was there afterward, which was nothing. Tianshan City was gone. The bowl of rubble was gone. The ground under the bowl was gone. There was a smooth depression 11 miles wide with glass at the bottom of it, and the mountain range that had given the city its name had 2 fewer peaks. Everything within 40 miles that was still alive after the 2 Mahayana cultivators had finished was not alive anymore. The outlying villages, the road stations, the 3 farming settlements on the eastern slope that had been outside the purchase zone because we only needed the city. I have never counted. There is a number and I have chosen not to know it, which is its own kind of coward's accounting, and I am aware of that. All of it to kill 1 cultivator at the Divine Sea Realm. Host, rest assured, this system's protection operates outside the rules of this world. A crack the size of a human head opened in the shield, and then it spread, in about 4 directions at once, the way glass does. The opponent's attack carries destiny. What? Said Zhou Lin, in a voice that had gone very high. Is the object of destiny? What does that mean? What does that mean, Gee? And I reached through the shield and took him by the throat. The coin came out of the array node and I put it in front of his face. Do you know what this is? He did not. A man named Sun Tao walked into my house and asked what he could do for his family. This is what is left of him. His daughter carried it for a year and never knew, and you took it off her body 4 days ago and could not break it, and you have been carrying it in your own sleeve ever since. His eyes moved. It is not an artifact, I said. It is not a curse on a person. It is a curse made out of one. That is why your system could not see it. It does not act on your body or your soul. It acts on the fact of a lineage, and the fact is not a mechanism. Then I made him swallow it. I pushed a dull coin into a 15-year-old's mouth and steered it down into his dantian and held it there. Elder Feng Yu rebuilt the star-shifting array around him with that coin as its anchor point. The formation stopped being a net around a city. It became a net around a man, running through him, using him as its own central node. And then we used the array to squeeze, not to kill him, to press evenly, from every direction at once, on a person who had a thing inside him that nobody in this world can perceive, until the thing came out. I want you to know that it worked. And I want you to know that out in the void, while it was working, the gray-white eyes opened again. The pupils were the size of a Dao province, and they were looking at a hole in a mountain range in mystic dust, and this time there was no doubt at all about what they were looking at. Are you trying to break the rules again? And from another direction, from somewhere else entirely, a voice said something I could not hear, and the eyes withdrew, angrily. I could feel the anger, the way you feel a door slammed in a house 3 rooms away. Twice now, twice, something had come to the edge of the world to look at me, and twice, something else had sent it home, and I still did not know who, and I still had not asked for it. I was starting to understand that I was not the only person running an operation. When the array finished, there was not much of him left. He was lying in the glass at the bottom of the depression with the formation light still running through him, and he could still talk, and the first thing he said took him about 11 seconds to get out. Gu Tianxing, and I sat down, not knelt, not stood over him. I sat down on the glass beside a dying 15-year-old with my elbows on my knees, and I said something I had not said out loud to another living person in 19 months. You haven't been here very long, have you? His eyes moved. You transmigrated. You got a system, you got about a season out of it, and you never once got to enjoy dominating anything, and now it's finished. I looked at the sky. You must be very unwilling. How? He had to stop and start again. How do you know these things? Because we're from the same hometown, I said. Let's have a proper conversation before you go. I'm from Shanghai, in the south. What about you? He started laughing. It cost him something to do it, and he did it anyway. You have one too, he said. You have a system too. No wonder. No wonder. And then, with the last real strength he had, you don't even spare your own kind. Even if I go down there, I'll climb back up and tear you apart, DJ. I don't have one, I said. He stopped. I never got one. I woke up in a body on the day it was scheduled to die, and I waited for the little blue box, and it never came. I was still looking at the sky. Everything I've done to you, I did with a family and a library and a lot of paperwork. He was quiet for a while. And then, because I am what I am, I said the worst thing anybody says in this entire account, and I said it in the same gentle voice I had been using for the last minute. With my current methods, I think I could probably find your real parents, your actual family, in the actual place. I have been considering trying. I turned and looked at him properly for the first time. After you die, I'm going to take your soul and study it, and see whether it can be done. I have hunted 5 people with destinies. I have unmade a system, put a holy land under 10,000 years of tribute, and left a hole where a city used to be. That sentence is the worst thing I have ever done, because what I was actually saying to a dying boy was that the door might be open, and that I might walk through it, and that he would not. He did not answer it. I do not think he could. And then his life started going out, and I was still connected to him through the array, and so I got the last thing. I got what he was thinking about. It was not power. It was not the system, or the shop, or the shield, or any of the things he had spent a season screaming about in public squares. It was buying steamed buns in the morning, 2 of them from a stall, and eating them on the walk to school with his bag on one shoulder. It was a girl he sat next to for a whole year and never said anything to. It was coming home and there being 3 dishes and a soup on the table. It was noticing that his mother's hair had gone gray and not knowing when that had happened. It was his mother saying, that morning, in the doorway, that she felt like pig's trotters for dinner. It was his father, who had retired, and who had 300,000 saved for an apartment, and who had promised to find him a wife at New Year. Domination. Systems. Even the best of it is just ordinary. Only these things give a person any peace. He said that out loud. And then he said this. My hometown is a small 5th-tier city in the south. It's in a 4C area. His voice had gone quiet and completely steady, the way people's voices do. Gu Mingjue, if you can ever go back, if my parents are still alive, give them a good old age. I did not say anything. And erase me. Take me out of their heads. Let them not have had a son. A pause. My father's name is Zhou Guang. My mother's is Li Mingshu. The formation was still running. I could have shut it off. I did not, and I do not know why. Brother, he said. Thank you. And then, do you have any cigarettes? No, I said. I'll make some, and burn them for you later. He nodded. He was nearly gone by then. We're both from the same hometown, he said. Why don't we join forces? Do you think you'd sincerely join forces with me? He thought about it. He genuinely thought about it in the last 30 seconds of his life, and he did not have an answer, and that was the answer. It can't be, he said. You killed me because of what I might become? That's it? That's the whole reason? Yes and no. Then what? Because you're an outsider, I said. The same as me. And outsiders have to be removed. He was quiet. Gu Mingjue, he said. I admire you. I hope you remember what I said. And then there was nobody in the depression except me. The final request that boy made in his life was made to his mortal enemy. The man who had bought a city to starve him, who had put his one friend in the ground to hold a leash on him, and who had opened a hole in the sky over his head. He made it to me because I was the only person in the world who could understand what he was asking for. I am told that as he dissipated, something moved in my eyes. I would not know. I was not looking at myself. But there were 40 Gu family cultivators standing on the rim of that crater, and every single one of them saw it, and every single one of them wrote it in their report. And I have read all 40 reports, and they all say the same thing, which is that for about 1 second, the divine child's face was doing something none of them had a word for. Then I put 100 million spirit stones into the iron pagoda. The array contracted from 11 miles to 1,000 feet, and then to 100, and then to a room, and in the middle of the room there was a dim speck of light with nothing holding it up. The iron pagoda, I said out loud in a voice that came out wrong, took the money and kept its word and came out to do the job immediately. That was the joke. That was the best I had. 2 systems, in a box, in a rented room, in a tower I do not own. I went home and I did not speak to anybody for 6 days. On the 7th day, I went back to work, because that is the only thing I know how to do. There was a report on my desk about a valley. A young woman had been chased into it by 3 Dao Palace cultivators with bad intentions, somewhere in the 5th Dao province, in a place the local farmers call Leisurely Retreat. There is a thatched hut in that valley. There is a fish pond with 2 fish in it. There is a chicken. There is a large yellow dog. The dog barked twice, and the 3 Dao Palace cultivators stopped existing, not died. The report is very specific because the young woman who wrote it is not stupid and understood what she had seen. There was no attack. There was no light. A dog made a noise, and 3 men were no longer part of the world. The owner of the valley came out to see what the fuss was. Linen clothes, bare feet. No cultivation at all, not a trace, not a spark, a mortal by every method of measurement anyone in my family knows. I'm just an ordinary person, he told her. I chop wood, make fires, hunt a bit, and cook. I don't know why you all keep calling me senior. His name was Wang Dong. I read that report 4 times, and then I put it in a locked drawer and did not open the drawer for a long time, because I had just learned my most important lesson of the entire year, and I needed to sit with it. Every person I had hunted, I had found because they were doing something, growing too fast, buying too much, winning too often, getting noticed. The most dangerous thing in the 3,000 Dao provinces had spent 1,000 years watering flowers. I have since found out what he says to himself when nobody is listening, and I will give it to you now because it is the funniest and most frightening sentence in this entire story. 1,000 years, gone in a blink. That damned system promised it would make me invincible. Instead, it had me chopping wood, hunting, farming, and watering the garden for 1,000 years, and then it left without a word and said the mission was complete. His animals hear him complain and go and hide, because they do not want their fur plucked. I closed the drawer. I want you to note that I closed the drawer. That is not a decision I got to keep. Then I went and spent 100 billion spirit stones on myself. It started with the wine cup, which I had been feeding for 11 weeks. I put the Earth Mother spirit liquid in it and left it for 10 days, and I put the 5-colored golden lotus in it, and the lotus came out with 9 colors, and there is no record of a 9-colored divine lotus anywhere in my family's archive. Then I put 1 drop into the enlightenment flower, and that took 3 old ancestors standing around me in a circle to survive using, because comprehension arriving at that speed will take a person apart the way water takes a dam, and the fusion system, in its box, in the tower, at 100 to 1, had been running the entire time. I fed it the primordial god diagram, the heaven-flipping seal, and the 10-direction immortal extermination seal. My 3 best things, all at once, all in. What came out was 50% stronger than the extermination seal, which is to say 50% stronger than the divine ability my family has been proud of since the last era. I named it the Gu Tianxing seal. Yes, after myself. Again. I am aware of the pattern and I have decided to be at peace with it. I also, somewhere in that month, grasped the first level of 9 Palaces Flying Stars. Level 1. Read a person's fortune, not their destiny, not their future, just the shape of the luck running through them at this moment, mine and anybody else's. I have used it on 1,100 people since. It is enormously useful, and it is not what I want. Level 2 is knowing a man's destiny. Level 3 is changing it. I asked my father for the money for the breakthrough itself, and this is the conversation, in full, and it is my favorite thing that happened that year. How much? 100 billion. There was a very long pause on the mind link. Tianxing, said the head of the Gu family. If a supreme-grade artifact had a price, that would be the price. Yes. You want to spend a supreme-grade artifact on 300 days of sitting in a room? Yes. He approved it. The Gu family's books, for that quarter, contain a series of extremely large, extremely vague entries that no auditor has ever successfully traced, and I am told that 2 of our senior accountants have written private letters expressing concern about the health of the estate. 300 days inside the tower. 3 days outside, and when I came out of that room, there were flowers over my head. I need to give you the scale, because the number on its own means nothing. When a cultivator condenses his foundation at the gathering cauldron realm, he produces flowers. 3 is the ordinary ceiling for a genius. Most people manage 1 or 2 and stop. 6 flowers is saint level. 7 beats a saint, which is what Duan Li had, and Duan Li was the most difficult thing I had ever fought. 8 exists in the records, twice. 9 exists as a rumor and has no verified instance. Above 9, there is not even a rumor. There is no word for it because nobody ever needed one. There were 12. I stood in that white room and counted them 4 times, and then I sat down on the floor and put my hands over my face and laughed, and it was not entirely a happy sound, because I had just worked out what it had cost. 100 billion spirit stones. 80 million and then 10 billion for the tower. A million-year flower harvested with 12 men. A cup taken off a dead man who had offered to serve me. A system unmade in 6 months. 2 protagonists in the ground and a third one dispersed in a crater, and a city and a girl in a rented room, and a father who walked into my house of his own accord and did not walk out. That is the price of 12 flowers. There is no waterfall. There is no insight. There is an invoice. The last thing I did that year was have a sword made. The artifact refining pavilion took 4 months. 500 of the best refiners in the province worked in shifts under a chief refiner who has been past the saint's threshold for 1100 years and who does not personally forge anything anymore, and who did this one himself. The creation jade sand from the purple cloud secret realm went in. That is what the jade sand was for. That is why I went into level 6 of that realm at all, why Shu Guang got hired, why 4 Holy Land prodigies were flattened before they could turn around, why any of that month happened. On the last night, tribulation clouds gathered over the pavilion, over a workshop, over a building where men make things. And out of the lightning came a short sword, about 7 span, with a dark gold hilt and a blade whose color would not settle. It kept changing while you watched it, and when it moved through the air, it left a ripple behind it, and the ripple was in the space, not in the light. The chief refiner held it out to me with both hands and said the sentence he has never said about anything else he has made. Its potential is, arguably, the second weapon of limitless potential I have forged in my life. A supreme-grade artifact is not its ceiling. I do not know what its ceiling is. I am not certain it has one. I did not ask what the first one was. I have wondered every day since. I named it in one character. Gu. It means the family, and it means me, and both readings are correct, and I chose it precisely because there is no way to tell which one I meant. My father came to see it. He turned it over twice, handed it back, and then, because he is who he is, went straight back to the argument we had been having for 11 months. You know the 7-skill exquisite heart is still in this house. I know. There is also a young man in the eastern province with a supreme bone. I looked into him. It could be extracted with almost no risk to you, and I would handle the acquisition personally, so nothing touches your name. No. Tianxing. He was genuinely puzzled, which is the part I want you to hold on to. He was not being cruel. He was being practical, in exactly the way a man is practical about a business, and he could not understand my objection at all. It is a matter of having a child, and then the physique is used, and then it is discarded. This is normal. Every family with the means does it. And I said no again, and I gave him the real reason for the first time. I don't want to run the Gu family. He stopped. I don't want the chair. I don't want the seat at the top of the steps. What I want is to end up out back, under a mound with a number on it, as one of the voices that wakes up when there's noise in the yard. He looked at me for a while. And a path built out of somebody else's physique, I said, is a rented path, and rented things have landlords. I have spent this entire year taking things away from people who did not own what they were standing on. I am not going to be the next one. He nodded slowly, and he did not argue, and he did not agree either. And then, because I had just grasped level 1 of 9 Palaces Flying Stars and had been reading everybody in the house all week like a man with a new toy, I used it on him, and I got nothing. Not a blank, not an absence, a wall. Something in my father's fortune simply refused to be looked at, and the refusal was polite, the way a closed door in your own house is polite. He noticed me try. He did not say anything about it. It seems my cheap father is not quite as simple as he seems. That night I went out to the back of the estate, past the walls, to a slope where nobody goes, and I made cigarettes, by hand, out of paper and a dried leaf I had spent 2 weeks getting a herbalist to source without telling him why, rolled badly, 20 of them, because I did not know how many was correct, and 20 is what a packet has. It took me most of the evening. I am extremely good at a number of things, and I am not good at that. I put them in a pile on the ground and I burned them, which is what you do, where I come from, when there is somebody you owe something to and no address to send it to. And I said 2 names out loud, to a hillside, at night, with nobody around. Zhou Guang, Li Mingshu. I said them so I would not forget them. I have not written them down anywhere, and I am not going to, because things I write down can be taken. I have not found the door yet. I do not know that there is one. But I have level 1 of 3, and level 3 changes a person's destiny. And if a man's destiny can be changed, then the question of what happened to his son and whether his mother remembers him is a question with a mechanism attached to it, and mechanisms can be operated. I made him a promise in a crater, and I have kept the small half of it. The big half is going to take a while. There is one other piece of accounting I should close, because I have been carrying it through this entire story, and I do not want anybody thinking I forgot. Su Ming'er went home. Liu Ruolan's mother had been a guest of the Gu family for 11 months, in good rooms, with servants, which is the most polite possible description of a hostage. The day after Chen Huai died, I signed the order myself, and had her escorted back to Jade Splendor with an honor guard and an apology I did not write. She did not want the honor guard. She took it anyway, because her daughter was still in my house. That is the part I am not going to dress up. Liu Ruolan is still in the Gu family. She is not in a cell, and she never was, and she has an income and a title and the run of the Eastern residence, and she has not asked to leave, and I have never once been foolish enough to offer. I released the leash because I no longer needed it. I want that written down in my own words rather than somebody else's, because somebody else's words would probably be kinder. So, 19 months. I want to give you the two ends of it, and then I will stop. At the start, I was a footnote, not a villain, a footnote. I was the arrogant young master who exists on page 11 so that the audience understands the hero is dangerous, and I was scheduled to be removed before dessert at my own wedding, and I had no cheat, no system, no old man in a ring, no mysterious voice, and nothing whatsoever except the fact that I had read ahead. At the end of it, I own 2 innate Tao artifacts, a stolen system in a box, a cup that manufactures time, 12 flowers, a holy land on a 10,000-year payment plan, and a sword that the best refiner alive cannot find the ceiling of. 3 people with destinies are in the ground. A 4th is a speck of dust in a rented room. I did not outfight any of them. I got there first, every single time, because I knew what page they were on. And here is what I have actually earned, which is the part nobody claps for. There is a tree in my family's courtyard that has decided I am not to be killed by anybody above my own generation. That sounds like protection. It is not protection. It is a specification. The world has been handed a shape and told to produce something that fits it, and the world has never once failed to fill an order. There is a young man with a bronze ring who set me as his goal from a balcony, who put 8 divine flames together to get out of my wall and who I could not catch. There is a polite disciple in blue robes who registered at a sect 40 miles from my house under a name that is not his, holding 30,000 nights of a dead man's patience. There is a farmer in a valley in the 5th Dao province whose dog barks twice. And out past the sky there is a pair of gray and white eyes that has now come to look at me twice, and both times something else has turned it around and sent it home, and I have never asked for that, and I do not know who is doing it, and I do not know what it costs. I spent 19 months proving that a man does not need a system. The problem with that proof is what it implies about the person who has been clearing my road. I came into this world convinced I was the reader. I have started to suspect that somebody is reading me.